The story begins with a man wondering if this is truly how everything ends. He apologizes, admitting his weakness and believing Chris was the real hero. A woman corrects him, revealing that he is actually Evan, the hero himself. She reminds him that they all gave their best, and if Chris had learned swordsmanship a little earlier, he could have reached 9 stars and become a 10-star hero. If that had happened, perhaps they could have prevented the end. Evan is a jack of all trades and master of all, known as the great extra character. His journey began at 20, after escaping his clan and dreaming of achieving success. While working in the back alleys, he witnessed flying wyverns and the demon king of carnage invading the magic empire, marking the beginning of the Age of Destruction. Amid the chaos, Evan noticed a recruitment notice for a party traveling with the hero. Seeing it as his chance to gain wealth and honor, he joined them, but his hopes were crushed when they failed, and the Dominion of Light fell to the Demon King. Evan wishes he could turn back time and choose Chris as the hero. Chris questions what he means, saying that even if he could return to the past, he would never choose to experience such suffering again. One life of suffering is enough, especially with the world already on the verge of destruction. As they stare at the sky, Chris accepts that this is truly the end. He wonders if there might be another life and, if there is, wishes to be born into a wealthy, noble family. That becomes his final thought. Later, Chris looks down at his hands and realizes that his wish has somehow come true. He has regressed and been reborn as a young master of the magic empire, specifically within the Dark Magic clan, one of the 12 clans supporting the empire. From what he can gather, he has gone 15 years into the past, returning 5 years before the Age of Destruction begins. He thought he had already experienced everything in his previous life, yet he never expected to encounter demon beasts tending a garden. More importantly, he knows exactly whose body he has entered: Christian von Baron Kazar. Chris speaks with a foxwoman who tells him about the notorious fiend with the middle name Von. She explains that the house of Count Kazar is a branch family of Baron County, belonging to the Dark Magic clan. Although it is a branch family, it holds a respectable position within the clan and is extremely wealthy. Almost everyone in the Magic Empire knows the family, which has 2 potential successors. However, the eldest son, Christian, is a complete bastard who constantly causes trouble. Count Kazar eventually gave up on him, but that is already old news. When Chris asks whether he somehow changed his ways, she explains that he did not. Instead, he was eventually murdered by his own relatives. Chris immediately breaks into a sweat. All he wanted was to become the son of an ordinary wealthy family, yet he has somehow regressed into the body of a man destined to die. He wonders why he had to become this particular person and what he did to deserve it. He only awakened 3 days ago, yet he is supposed to die in 2 years. Since Christian was eliminated from the house of Count Kazar, a family that values honor above all else, Chris concludes that his former self must have been an exceptionally terrible person. Perhaps if he keeps his head down and behaves himself, he can avoid the same fate. Still, since he has been reborn as a rich kid, he considers simply enjoying the wealth and status. He quickly reminds himself that such a plan is impossible. Ragnarok, the end of the world, is also what drove the Demon King of Carnage to begin the war. Humanity was meant to be sacrificed to complete Ragnarok, and by the time they discovered the truth, it was already too late. Both the Dominion of Light and the world ultimately fell. If Chris wants to survive, he must stop the apocalypse as well. The Demon King of Carnage is only part of the problem. The greater threat is the countless fiends of the Magic Empire who remain loyal to him. To stop them, Chris needs to become more powerful than the Demon King himself. There is only one way to accomplish that. He must become the Demon Emperor and rise to the very top of the Magic Empire. With 5 years remaining before the Age of Destruction begins, he decides to give it a try. If he succeeds, the entire empire will eventually belong to him. Soon after, his father confronts him, slamming his hand against the table and demanding to know why he has left his room after the incident he caused. He warns Chris that if he acts out of line again, he will personally cut off his head. Chris finds Count Kazar intimidating but explains that he has come to apologize for everything he has done. If he wants to carry out his plan, he first needs to erase his terrible reputation. He kneels and sincerely apologizes for all his past actions, promising they will never happen again. His father remains skeptical, having heard countless excuses from him before. Chris admits that the loss of his father's trust is entirely his fault. He explains that 3 days ago, he also mentioned losing part of his memories. While trying to recover them, he reflected on his past actions and realized how badly he had been living. Chris acknowledges that words alone mean nothing and promises to prove his change through his actions. As the first step, he asks to be sent to the punishment cave for an entire month, where he intends to show his father a different version of himself. The punishment cave is a prison reserved for high-status fiends. It contains no light and completely blocks all 5 senses, making even a few days enough to wear down a person's mind. For Chris, however, it is ideal because it gives him a place to escape the attention of everyone around him. His father doubts that Chris can survive even half a day, let alone an entire month. Chris admits that he understands how difficult the cave is, but believes enduring it is the bare minimum needed to regain his father's trust. His father reminds him that they have had this same conversation countless times, only for Chris to disappoint him again. Still, he agrees to give him one final chance. If nothing changes after the month, Chris will be banished from the clan. Chris knows that exile would effectively be a death sentence because countless people would come after him once he loses the clan's protection. Even so, he accepts the condition. In return, if he proves that he is truly changed, he asks his father to grant him a request. His father finds his confidence irritating, as though Chris already expects to survive. Nevertheless, he agrees that if Chris genuinely turns over a new leaf, he will grant him any request, though he still doubts that will ever happen. Later, Chris's butler Cox enters his room and informs him that the punishment cave is ready. Cox is a half-vampire, and Chris acknowledges him before following him out. As they walk through the hallway, the maids and butlers whisper about Chris volunteering for the punishment cave. They suspect he is planning another scheme. They also recall the incident where he insulted the young lady of the poison magic clan, forcing Count Khazar himself to apologize and preserve the family's standing with their rival clan. They question when Chris will finally mature, though most doubt that he ever will. They even speculate about how long he will survive in the cave, with 2 days being considered the absolute maximum. Chris simply smiles as he continues down the hallway, while his younger brother secretly listens nearby. At the punishment cave, Cox announces that they have arrived. Chris looks toward one of the statues guarding the entrance and realizes that it is actually a Death Knight assigned to guard the cave. He finds such a guard fitting for the magic empire and does not care as long as it keeps others from entering. Just then, his younger brother calls out to him. Chris turns around and recognizes him as a familiar face. He is Christian's biological younger brother and a model student named Thurv von Baron Khazar. Without hesitation, Thurv draws his rapier and thrusts it directly toward Chris's throat, stopping just short of making contact. Chris does not even flinch. Chris looks down into his brother's eyes, internally admitting that the sudden attack scares the hell out of him. He asks Thorn what business he has with him since he clearly did not come to say goodbye. Thorn reminds him that he is already a disgrace to the family and warns that if Chris stains their honor again, he will kill him. He makes it clear that this is his final warning. Chris realizes that Thorn must be the one who killed him in his previous life. He had personally met him during the Age of Destruction, where Thorn became famous for his cursed magic. Chris remembers him as a talented fiend, and notes that despite looking rather cute as a child, he has trained diligently. Still, compared to someone who survived the worst of the Age of Destruction, Chris considers him nothing more than a brat. When Chris tells him to move the weapon, Thorn demands to know what he just said. Chris simply acknowledges his warning and tells him to leave. Thorn insists that he is serious, but Chris ignores him and enters the cave, leaving Thorn awkwardly standing outside. Thorn then turns on Cox, demanding to know what is wrong with Chris's attitude. Inside the cave, Chris walks forward and realizes that he cannot see or hear anything. Only the faintest sensation remains around his fingertips. He assumes this is intentional so prisoners can still feel the objects they bring inside and avoid starving to death. An ordinary person would quickly become mentally exhausted in such conditions, but Chris has experienced far worse during his time as a treasure hunter. In fact, losing his 5 senses is exactly what he wanted because it allows him to focus entirely on himself. Without this isolation, he cannot rebuild his damaged body. The process requires time and luck, but with the medical knowledge he mastered as the Divine Doctor, the bone compression art he modified from the circus, and magic stones with different properties, he believes it is possible. He never expected to obtain magic stones because of how expensive they are, so he considers this another privilege of belonging to an elite clan willing to fulfill even a request from someone considered useless. In his previous life, he and Evan had struggled to obtain such stones, even being forced to work in the mines for them. He begins with the white magic stone, which is used to purify toxins. It is a tedious but essential process that requires him to remove the accumulated toxins throughout his body, using white mana. Even the slightest mistake causes intense pain throughout his body. As he begins the purification, a tingling sensation spreads through him, similar to the pins and needles feeling from sitting too long. Instead of being bothered, Chris smiles and considers the process a piece of cake. Sometime later, Cox reports to Chris's father. When Count Khazar asks about his son, Cox explains that Chris has entered the cave and worries that the punishment may break him so badly that he will not even be able to call for help. His father begins questioning whether sending Chris there was a mistake. Chris had once shown so much promise as a child, and he wonders whether that talent made him arrogant enough to fall apart so completely. Whatever the reason, He would rather see Chris completely ruined or dead than continue living such a wretched life. His emotions remain conflicted between anger and sadness. Although Chris's recent words sounded reasonable, he refuses to place his hopes in him after being deceived so many times. He then asks Cox whether anything unusual happened. Cox admits that there was an incident and, after being ordered to explain everything, reveals that Chris took several magic stones into the cave, including a dreamstone capable of causing hallucinations. Since they do not know what side effects it may have, Cox believes they should immediately open the cave. Count Khazar's fist trembles with frustration, but he refuses. If Chris has done something that foolish, then he tells Cox to leave him there and let him die. A month later, Count Khazar stands before the punishment cave, assuming Chris must be completely broken by now. The door slowly opens, but instead of the ruined figure he expects, his father is stunned by the sight before him. Chris emerges with a bright, healthy appearance and tells his father that he has been waiting for him to finally arrive. He asks whether he is surprised and reminds him that he promised to return as a changed man. His father's eyes begin to tear up as he recognizes the same look Chris had possessed as a child. He realizes that Chris truly endured the punishment. Chris laughs and asks whether that counts as a compliment. His father immediately warns him not to get carried away over something so minor, reminding him that he still does not trust him. Chris accepts that he simply needs to work harder. His father assumes he barely survived the month, but Chris explains that he was too busy training to ever become bored. First, he rebuilt his body into the optimal condition for mastering swordsmanship. Thanks to the white monostone, every cell in his body is now filled with vitality. The Dreamstone also played a major role. Cox questions whether Chris really brought such a dangerous stone into the punishment cave, and Chris says he is glad he stubbornly insisted on keeping it. The hallucinations drastically reduced the time required for his metamorphosis, and he also managed to create 2 cores. Chris demonstrates his progress by casting the 1-star spell light. He uses his darkness core to conceal the light core, knowing that the fiends would make a huge fuss if they discovered it. His father, therefore, does not consider the feat particularly impressive. Chris then senses something and watches one of the stones fly toward him. Looking closer, he realizes the Dreamstone was deliberately given to him in hopes that it would make him hallucinate, break him mentally, and ruin him. Instead, he willingly accepted it and endured everything it brought, using it as the sacrifice necessary for his advancement. Since he has kept his promise, Chris reminds his father that he is now entitled to make a request. His father allows him to speak, and Chris asks to use the Black Swamp Knight's training ground. His father immediately objects, explaining that someone as useless as Chris has no place there. The Black Swamp Knights are one of the 3 knightly orders supporting the Dark Magic clan, and only the most elite knights are permitted to train there. Chris clarifies that he only wants to borrow the training ground. He believes observing the bravery and discipline of the Black Swamp Knights will be good for him, and he has no intention of joining their order. After considering it, his father agrees but warns him not to disgrace himself in front of the knights. Chris then reveals that he has one more request, surprising his father. At the training ground, the trainees immediately notice Chris arriving in expensive clothing. They openly badmouth him, and Chris understands that in the Magic Empire, strength matters more than status. Still, there is a specific reason he came here. His second request was access to the library. His father explains that Chris must first obtain Deputy Commander Melon's letter of recommendation. The library contains many of the House of Count Khazar's dark magic grimoires, and anyone wishing to study dark magic needs permission to access them. Chris understands but questions why he needs such a condition when he is already a member of the clan. His father reminds him that he apparently forgot how he once tried to sell advanced grimoires on the black market. Chris silently wonders what kind of life his previous self lived, and concludes that he truly was a worthless piece of work. Still, his immediate priority is gaining Deputy Commander Melon's recognition. He looks up and spots Thorn surrounded by several trainees. Thorn tells him that this is not a place someone like Chris is allowed to enter. Chris finds the situation troublesome but smiles, realizing it may actually be the perfect opportunity. Thorn repeats that this is his final warning, and tells Chris to return before he throws away the life he barely managed to preserve in the punishment cave. Chris asks whether Thorn can really say that when their father was the one who granted him permission to enter the training ground. Thorn is surprised, but another voice interrupts. A woman says that she respects the Count's orders, although she knows Chris is not very trustworthy. The woman is Melon, the deputy commander of the Knights. Judging from the dark energy surrounding her, she is at least a 4-star fiend. It is clear that she and the others intend to intimidate Chris into leaving, but he is already accustomed to threats like these. Chris bows and respectfully greets her, surprising Melon when she realizes he can withstand her dark energy. He explains that since the deputy commander herself has stepped in, there is no point arguing, and says he will prove that he is qualified to use the training ground. When Melon asks how he intends to prove it, Chris proposes fighting one of the fiends there and defeating them. Melon considers his claim ridiculous, but Chris insists that he is completely serious. He asks her not to use dark energy because, considering his former debauched lifestyle, his capacity for it is far below what it should be. Instead, he requests an unarmed duel. Melon considers the situation troublesome. Even if it is only a duel, she cannot allow one of her knights to get seriously injured. She asks whether Chris genuinely believes he can compete in an unarmed fight. Chris leaves the answer to the fight itself and starts considering who would make a suitable opponent. He then snaps his fingers, deciding that one of the trainees should be enough. The chosen opponent immediately becomes irritated, while Melon tells Chris to select someone more suitable because the trainees he has chosen are only 2-star fiends. Chris explains that reaching 2 stars is already an achievement that an ordinary 13-year-old cannot accomplish without exceptional talent. Age does not matter. Without the necessary ability, even someone 23 would struggle to reach that level. But Chris is no ordinary bastard. Since he needs to prove himself anyway, he decides that fighting someone stronger would be more effective. He challenges the trainees to send someone stronger and asks whether they are really afraid of fighting his brother. The trainees, clearly irritated, accept the duel. They surround the fighters and encourage their chosen opponent to destroy Chris, warning that failure will earn him special training. Chris asks Melon how they will determine the winner and whether they will simply fight until one side surrenders. Melon considers his question insolent and says the duel will continue until one side is incapacitated. She even thinks it would be appropriate if the trainees took one or both of his legs. Chris makes sure everyone heard the rules and remarks that his opponent is in for a serious beating. The taunts infuriate the trainee, who vows to make Chris regret running his mouth. While the opponent is distracted, Chris suddenly smashes him across the face, catching everyone off guard. He points out that the fight has already started. The trainee swings at him and tells him to shut up, but Chris explains that the situation is almost unfair. A fiend who has not even reached 1 star has little chance against someone capable of using dark energy. However, this is a bare-handed duel, and Chris has fought on countless battlefields in his previous life. He drives his knee into the opponent's stomach and adds that if only the dominion of light's power he developed inside the punishment cave is considered, he is already at least a 3-star. The surrounding trainees stare in disbelief as their opponent doubles over, clutching his stomach. Chris continues provoking him, asking whether he is crying and joking that he could blow on his injury if it hurts that badly. Thorn demands to know what trick Chris used, but Chris is simply pleased to see his brother in such a state. He insists that there was no trick and that Thorn is simply too weak. Thorn grows angrier, but Chris keeps provoking him, pretending that he cannot hear him because he is being so quiet. A black aura suddenly envelops Thorn's hand as he charges forward, declaring that he will kill Chris. He throws a left punch, but Chris easily dodges it and acknowledges that Thorn is fast, saying this is the spirit he was looking for. Thorn continues throwing punches at his face, but Chris keeps avoiding them and concludes that it still is not enough. Chris raises his hand and cuts off the dark energy flowing through the rest of Thorn's body. Thorn immediately notices his dark energy beginning to dissipate. Chris then lands an uppercut, explaining that fighting ultimately comes down to instinct. Thorn's eyes turn white as he collapses to the ground. The other trainees are stunned. They wonder whether they had underestimated Chris and suggest that Thorn may have deliberately weakened his dark energy because he was afraid of hurting him. Otherwise, none of this makes sense. Melon, however, understands what happened and is genuinely surprised. Chris calmly asks whether he has now proven that he is qualified to use the training ground. Melon confirms that he has. Chris thanks her and maintains a composed expression, but internally he is relieved that his plan worked. Now he can begin devouring everything available to him, whether it involves swordsmanship or magic. Back at the house of Count Kazar, Chris explains that he has reached 1 star in dark magic. Since he is still not accustomed to handling dark energy and much of Christian's residue remains in his body, the process took longer than expected. As for simultaneously wielding light and dark power, he will need to raise his level further before that becomes possible. Chris rings a small bell, and a woman slowly appears in his room, asking whether he called for her. She is Mary, his maid. Chris cannot believe that the clan uses a high-level evil spirit, a banshee, as a maid. He admits that Christian's constant troublemaking must have been the reason for such an arrangement, and decides that he will eventually replace her. For now, he asks her to bring him some juice, so he can drink it before leaving for training. Mary asks whether she should prepare it with human blood, but Chris tells her to make it with strawberries instead. She insists that blood juice tastes much better, but Chris remains firm about wanting strawberries. They continue their brief exchange before Chris eventually prepares to leave. As he heads out, Cox calls after him and asks whether he is really going to train so early. He worries that Chris may be pushing himself too hard, but is also pleased and proud to see him working so diligently, especially since he believed in him when everyone else did not. Chris immediately releases some killing intent and tells Cox to stop acting as though his belief matters. He never asked Cox to believe in him and questions who gave him the right to decide whether Chris deserved that belief. Cox is startled and quickly apologizes for overstepping his boundaries before wishing Chris a good training session. After Cox leaves, Chris becomes suspicious. Something about the man at the training grounds feels strange. He notices that everyone there seems far more relaxed than before, and now that their guard is down, he plans to gradually win them over. Nearby, a bird-like man watches Chris practicing with his sword before returning to a tent to inform Deputy Commander Melon that Chris has come back to the training grounds. Melon wonders what Chris is planning and recalls their previous duel. His movements had been impressive, especially the precise moment when he dispelled his dark energy. She wonders whether he had actually read the battle correctly. If that is true, he may possess enough talent to surpass Lord Escade de Baron, the direct head of the main family. However, she dismisses the possibility, reminding herself that Chris is still only a bastard whose dark energy was already ruined by his previous lifestyle. She believes there is no way he can close that gap now. A commotion outside catches her attention, so she goes to investigate. One of the men explains that Chris has had a small conflict with a squire. The trainees begin wondering what happened. Since Cannon is a one-star fiend, they speculate that Chris may have reached 1 star as well. Melon looks surprised, but Chris uses the opportunity to claim that he came to witness the rumored prowess of the great Black Swamp Knights and is disappointed by what he has seen. He openly asks whether anyone else is willing to step forward, and questions whether the Black Swamp Knights are really such a cowardly order. The trainees become increasingly frustrated, and one man finally steps forward, introducing himself as Torin. Chris recognizes that they have fallen directly into his trap and gestures for Torin to attack. Torin leaps through the air with his sword raised overhead. Chris realizes that he never expected the knights to willingly demonstrate their secret techniques, but since they have done so, he has no choice but to steal what he can from them. As they exchange attacks, Chris carefully studies Torin's grip, footwork, and sword movements. He recognizes the style as the mud swordsmanship he had only heard about in rumors. Chris begins copying the movements during the fight, wondering whether the technique will work for him. He quickly adapts to it and strikes Torin across the face, knocking the weapon from his hand. The result surprises Melon, while Chris is delighted that he successfully reproduced the technique. Torin ends up face down on the ground, and Chris sits on top of him as the others struggle to believe that he is actually this strong. They remember that his darkness core was supposedly ruined, and wonder how he could have reached 1 star. Melon realizes that this confirms her earlier suspicion about Chris. Chris expresses his disappointment, saying he expected more from the Black Swamp Knights. If their skills are truly this poor, he suggests that the blame belongs to their deputy commander. The trainees wonder whether they should stop him, considering how recklessly he is provoking Melon. Melon tells Chris that she understands he is happy about his victory, but he is becoming too carried away. Chris responds by asking her to show him the true skills of the Black Swamp Knights. Melon draws a training sword and swings it forcefully beside him. The impact sends dust flying and completely shatters the ground next to Chris. She declares that defeating a bastard like him would take only a second, while releasing a deep purple aura. Chris asks whether she truly intends to fight him with her full power. Instead, he proposes that they restrict themselves to 1-star level dark energy, prohibit dark magic entirely, and use only wooden weapons. Melon changes her blades and agrees, saying that 1 star is already more than enough, and that she will break both of his legs while using only half of that power. Chris accepts the challenge and puts both of his legs on the line, then asks what she is willing to risk. Melon says she is willing to risk anything because Chris will not be walking away from the training ground today. She immediately dashes toward him. Chris blocks her first attack with his sword, but the impact is far heavier than expected. He is pushed backward as Melon continues attacking from different angles, yet Chris manages to keep up, repeatedly blocking and parrying her strikes. The other trainees notice that Chris has managed to hold his ground against Melon for quite some time. They assume the reason is that her primary weapon is a greatsword. Melon, however, is frustrated because her attacks keep failing to reach him despite Chris being a weakling by all appearances. He should not be able to match her. She recalls that the same thing happened during his fight with Torin. Chris casually points out that things do not seem to be going her way, which only irritates her further. She begins channeling dark aura into her blade and prepares a powerful attack, seemingly pushing against the duel's restrictions. She swings straight down at Chris, but he quickly ducks aside and sees his opening. He rushes forward and drives his head directly into her face, catching her completely off guard. As Melon reels from the impact, she looks at the blood on her hand in disbelief. Chris is relieved that his gamble worked. He realizes that Melon is a spell sword, meaning that once her dark magic is restricted, she cannot rely on physical strength alone to cover an opening in her defense. If she had been a pure swordswoman, his strategy might not have worked. Melon continues staring at the blood before suddenly laughing loudly. She never expected him to use a headbutt and admits that she underestimated him. From this point forward, she decides to take him seriously. Chris points toward her neck and reveals that he scratched her with his fingernail during the headbutt. If he had coated his nails with poison, the outcome would have been very different. Melon accepts her defeat and asks what he wants. However, she also requests another chance to fight him. Chris agrees, but says that if she wants a rematch, he will make a second request as well. Melon agrees to anything. Chris walks up close to her and asks whether she would kneel before him. Melon is stunned and explains that such a condition is impossible because her loyalty belongs to the main family of the dark magic clan, House Baron. Chris already knows that she is here on an assignment from the main family. However, he points out that the problem would disappear if he became the young lord of the clan. Melon dismisses the idea as nonsense, explaining that all 5 recognized successors are direct descendants of the main family. Chris reminds her that there is no rule preventing someone from a branch family from becoming a young lord. As for their second duel, Chris suggests they fight again in 1 month, without any restrictions. Melon is confident that he will have no chance of defeating her then. Chris simply responds that very few things are truly impossible in this world. Melon remains seated, staring at him with blood still on her face. Chris bows and tells her that he will see her in a month, when he will show her where her loyalty truly belongs. Later, Chris hands his letter of recommendation to his father and comments that the Fiend's fundamentals are lacking, meaning they need to focus more seriously on their training. A flashback shows Melon speaking with Count Khazar. She tells him that Chris is a genius. Despite his low star rank, he easily defeated fiends with solid foundations and even managed to defeat her. Count Khazar asks whether she is serious, and Melon confirms that she is. For her, it was a rare fight that she genuinely enjoyed. His father still struggles to trust Chris, but he can no longer deny that his son's efforts are producing results. When Chris asks whether there is something on his face, his father brushes it off and simply gives him the library key as promised. Chris leaves satisfied, knowing that this is exactly what he wanted. He has obtained access to the library and even changed Melon's opinion of him. He remembers that Melon belongs to the main family of the Dark Magic clan and, during the Age of Destruction, she became an active 6-star High Fiend. If Chris wants to take control of the entire Dark Magic clan, he needs to make her one of his people. He has not completely won her over yet, but he believes 1 month will be enough because he considers himself a genius. Thinking about Count Khazar, Chris recalls the pride he saw in his father's expression earlier. It makes sense to him because even fiends can form familiar attachments. Perhaps Count Khazar might even become a better father than the one Chris had in his previous life. For the first time, Chris truly accepts Count Khazar as his father and silently promises not to disappoint him. Inside the library, Chris discovers studies on blood magic summoning, curses, and other subjects forbidden in the Dominion of Light. He takes one of the books and pulls it from the shelf, only to find Mary smiling behind it. The sight nearly gives him a heart attack. He asks why she is there, and Mary explains that she was once the librarian here. She then makes the books around them float, and jokingly suggests that Chris came here knowing this because he wanted to keep her all to himself. Chris tells her to stop, but Mary continues teasing him about how his direct words are making her heart race. Later, Mary explains that the grimoire Chris selected contains a 4-star dark magic spell called Binding Seal. In his current state, she doubts he can comprehend it. Chris closes the book but remains confident, reminding her that he is a genius. Mary clearly does not believe him but pretends otherwise, sarcastically praising him for being both handsome and intelligent. Chris immediately recognizes that she is forcing the compliment and tells her to stop. When Mary asks why he specifically chose that book, Chris explains that he needs it to catch a rat. Later, while training with the others, Chris considers the possible suspects. The first is someone within the house who hates him more than anyone else for being a good-for-nothing. The second is Cox. Although Cox is not a descendant of the clan, he has unrestricted access to the punishment cave, and since fiends value strength more than social status, his position is suspicious. At the same time, Cox constantly follows Chris around and tries to please him. There could also be a third party Chris has not yet identified. Whoever it is clearly wants to see him ruined, especially considering the dreamstone that was provided to him in the punishment cave. Chris considers acting like the bastard everyone expects him to be. If someone becomes noticeably pleased by his return to his old behavior, that person could reveal themselves. He suddenly complains that the training is far too difficult, quits, and leaves while telling the others to enjoy themselves. The trainees are left wondering what is wrong with him. At dinner, Chris deliberately smashes a plate and blames the servant for giving him improper food, ordering her to remake it instead of standing there. Count Khazar is disappointed, believing he was foolish to think his son had finally matured. He leaves the room while Chris feels guilty but believes this is necessary for the family's sake. Chris has deliberately worked to spread rumors that he has returned to his old ways. He bullies the maids while they clean and wastes money recklessly, doing everything possible to make himself appear like the old Christian. Mary pours wine for him, but Chris asks why she will not let him drink it. She points out that he is already drinking it, but Chris immediately recognizes that it is non-alcoholic. Mary explains that he is still underage and cannot drink alcohol. Chris wonders why that matters when he is supposed to be a good-for-nothing anyway. Mary asks whether he has decided to become a bastard again and says that if so, she will simply remain by his side regardless. Chris reminds her that he is doing all of this because he is trying to catch a rat. A spell suddenly forms in front of him, surprising Mary when she realizes that he has already mastered the binding seal. Chris casually reminds her that he told her he was a genius, and explains that he modified the spell so it could be used at a lower star level. He has not been wasting his time and has actually been working hard to master various spells. Mary begins wondering whether he might really be a genius. Suddenly the door is slammed open. Chris immediately tells Mary that he needs to act drunk and asks what the intruder is doing there. The person confronting him questions whether this is really the best he can do, believing Chris had genuinely changed for the better. Chris recognizes the anger in his father's voice and quietly crosses him off the list of suspects. He then tells Mary that he believes there is a rat hiding somewhere inside the house. When she asks what he means, Chris explains that someone wants to see his downfall, so he intends to play along with them for a while. Mary asks whether everything is an act. Chris confirms that it is, including the wine. She smells it and immediately realizes that there is no alcohol in it. When she asks who the rat is, Chris admits that he cannot say yet, but they should continue baiting the culprit. Chris throws the wine bottle onto the floor, prompting a butler to rush in and ask what happened. Chris complains that this is not the wine he ordered and demands another bottle. The butler explains that Cox is currently occupied. Chris decides that he will have to visit Cox himself, continuing to act drunk while privately noting that he is playing the role almost too well. Chris soon arrives at Cox's location and slams a bottle down directly in front of him. Cox asks why Chris has come. Chris pours the bottle over Cox's head and complains that it is not the wine he requested. Cox insists that he would never look down on Chris and offers to have someone fetch a proper bottle immediately. Chris refuses and orders Cox to get it himself. Cox, visibly frustrated, explains that he is in the middle of something. Chris asks whether he intends to keep working like that and reminds him that he needs to change anyway. Cox begins visibly trembling before agreeing to return soon. He then leaves the room. Chris commends Cox for enduring all that humiliation without losing his patience, but he can clearly sense the hostility beneath it. He begins examining the paperwork Cox has been handling and soon notices something suspicious. Smiling, Chris realizes this must be it. If Cox is the rat, then he should have been doing something unusual with the family's finances. However, this alone is not enough. Chris needs a real smoking gun. Cox soon returns with the wine. Chris thanks him and asks whether he is angry about what happened earlier. Cox denies being upset, prompting Chris to laugh and call him his favorite. Cox appreciates the sentiment but then delivers a message. Some of Chris's friends want to meet him secretly at their usual place. Chris asks what he means, and Cox explains that although he would rather Chris not associate with those people, it is not his place to judge his master's friends. Chris decides to meet them. Cox tells him to do as he wishes, then smiles slightly after leaving, pleased that everything is going even better than expected. Later, Chris sits at a table surrounded by food. One of the men tells him that rumors are spreading about how much he has changed, though he still does not believe Chris is the best among them. Chris notices a young woman beside him and realizes they have even brought a girl to pour their drinks. He considers the whole arrangement pathetic. Turd encourages him to have a drink. Chris raises the glass but suddenly senses something wrong and throws it directly into Turd's face. Turd panics and coughs, demanding to know what Chris is doing. Chris immediately realizes from his reaction that the alcohol was tainted and that Turd knew something had been added to it. Chris raises his hand and forms a magic spell against the girl's forehead. The spell activates and she collapses unconscious. His friends are stunned that Chris can use dark magic. Chris tells them that this is hardly the time to be surprised. He grabs Turd and Pomodore by their heads and repeatedly slams them against the table. Turd desperately asks why Chris is doing this and tries to calm him down. Chris warns that if they still cannot figure out what they did wrong after taking such a beating, then they can die right there. He eventually draws a knife. Later, Turd and Pomodore are tied up, with Pomodore having even wet himself while begging for mercy. They confess that they were ordered to drug Chris and frame him after killing the girl. Turd explains that they were threatened because of the drugs they had been secretly dealing, leaving them with no choice. Chris demands to know who gave the order. Pomodore hesitates, so Chris moves the knife toward his crotch and threatens to cut it off if he does not answer. They immediately reveal that Cox ordered them to do it and swear they will do anything to survive. Chris asks whether they truly mean that. They swear again, but Chris claims he cannot hear them, forcing them to shout their agreement even louder. Satisfied, Chris accepts their word and begins casting another spell. The magic flies toward their foreheads and he orders them to listen carefully and carry out everything he tells them. Both men collapse unconscious, with Pomodore later foaming slightly at the mouth. Cox rushes into Count Kazar's office and reports that there is a problem. He claims that the young master has committed murder explaining that Chris supposedly became drunk at night, killed the person who served him drinks, and threw the body into the river. Cox insists that the matter cannot be overlooked and asks what should be done. Count Khazar orders him to bring Chris before the Fiend Court and invokes an immediate trial. Cox smiles to himself, believing everything is proceeding exactly according to plan. At the court, Chris stands trial and insists that he is innocent. His father questions whether he really intends to lie despite the existence of witnesses. Chris denies that the murder ever happened and says there must have been a misunderstanding. Then the supposedly dead servant enters the courtroom. Turd and Pomodore are visibly shocked. The young woman explains that Chris took her home after she regained consciousness and even gave her money to help with her rent. She then reveals that Turd and Pomodore were the ones who drugged Chris's drink. Count Khazar demands to know what is happening. Chris decides it is time to end the charade and begins activating his magic. Turd admits that the accusation against Chris was false, while Pomodore reveals that they were ordered by Cox to frame the young master. Cox immediately panics and calls their accusation slander. He claims that Chris and his friends are simply trying to frame him and tells Chris that his joke has gone too far. Chris expected this reaction. As the victim of the incident, he asks his father for permission to act as his representative and personally question Cox. Count Khazar is confused by the request but agrees. He allows Chris to take the defendant's stand while warning that his borrowed authority will be revoked immediately if he acts inappropriately. Chris promises to finish quickly. As the representative of the Demon Emperor, a member of the Dark Magic clan governing the eastern region of the Southern Magic Kingdom, and the representative of Count Khazar, Chris formally begins questioning the defendant. He asks Cox to swear that he will answer every question truthfully. Cox agrees. Chris then repeats the oath under his authority as the Demon Emperor's representative. Cox swears again, and a magical seal immediately flows toward his forehead. Cox grabs his head in pain, confused about what is happening. The others recognize the spell as the Binding Seal and are shocked that Chris can use a 4-star dark magic spell. Chris explains that he modified the spell so it can be used at a lower star rank. However, the modified version has an additional condition: the target must swear twice. Cox has now fallen directly into his trap. Chris reminds him that he just swore to answer nothing but the truth, and asks why he hired his friends to slander him. Cox's head begins throbbing violently, and he screams as the Binding Seal forces the truth from him. He admits that he received an order from someone who knew about his corruption and threatened him into ruining the young master. That is why he had been sabotaging Chris since he was young. Chris points out that by corruption, Cox means the embezzlement he has been committing for years, something Chris had already discovered. He then demands to know who gave the order. Cox hesitates, knowing that revealing the name will put him in danger, but Chris activates the Binding Seal again and orders him to speak. Cox finally reveals that the order came from Sir Eskett, the second son. Realizing the danger he is now in, Cox panics and prepares to flee before Eskett can kill him. Chris immediately takes a nearby guard's sword and cuts Cox's head off. Count Khazar is stunned. Chris calmly explains that, under the authority his father lent him, he has punished the sinner. His father asks why he chose to kill Cox. Chris explains that if Cox had been left alive, the main family could have fabricated evidence and covered up the incident. They cannot afford to be lenient, and Chris intends to make sure everyone remembers the truth and the fact that Cox tried to sabotage him. His father looks uneasy before snapping his fingers and opening a gateway behind him. He tells Chris to follow him. Chris enters and asks where they are. His father explains that it is a secret training ground because there were too many eyes in the courtroom. He then returns to Chris's earlier statement, asking whether Eskett is likely to cause more trouble because of the succession conflict. A family's power and authority are directly connected to the successor it supports. Count Khazar admits that Chris's decision was correct, although he feels he may have acted too quickly. Given the current situation, their family will have to support the first young lady. The first young lord is not an option because he is a bloodthirsty lunatic. Chris then presents another possibility: he could become the successor himself. His father immediately dismisses the idea as nonsense. Chris points out that there is no rule preventing someone from a branch family from being recognized as a successor if they possess the necessary ability. His father explains that such recognition would only exist in name and would not actually carry authority. Chris questions why Eskett would bother sabotaging him if he were truly irrelevant. His father admits that Chris may have been more talented than Eskett during childhood, but he has fallen far behind him now. Chris confidently says he can close the gap quickly, but he needs his father's help. He asks Count Khazar to use his authority to recommend him for the Sacred Dark Rite competition. His father rejects the request as well, explaining that the competition is only 2 months away and Chris must reach 2 stars to participate. He has only just reached 1 star. Chris promises to reach 2 stars within those 2 months and asks his father to help him this one time. Later, the maids discuss how Chris seems to have genuinely changed. They have also heard that Count Khazar himself has been personally training him. They wonder whether he is receiving the same training that even Senior Knight struggled to endure and speculate about how long Chris will actually be able to last. Chris cleanly cuts a target in half and explains that he needs to combine mud swordsmanship with blackside swordsmanship, asking his father if he is doing it correctly. His father is surprised because he only started teaching him the technique that day. Yet Chris understood it immediately. Chris questions why he has to keep the two techniques separate, saying it feels like there should be a more efficient method. A mushroom monster suddenly appears and Chris rushes forward, slicing off its legs. His father points out that he used mud swordsmanship, which is not designed for cutting. Chris explains that he simply wrapped the mud swordsmanship in blackside sword energy. Internally, his father is stunned because a 1-star should not be capable of combining two techniques like that. He keeps his composure and comments on how powerful it is, but warns that using two techniques simultaneously should make casting curses difficult. Chris immediately proves otherwise by casting a curse without trouble. He considers it easy and says the combination is not an inconvenience at all. His father can no longer hide his shock. 2 weeks later, Chris lies exhausted on the ground after running. He complains about how difficult running is but knows he cannot neglect it because stamina is essential for increasing his power stage. Melon approaches and asks whether he is already exhausted, reminding him that their duel is approaching and that she is looking forward to the promised day. Chris comments on her intense presence and says he is doing his best to meet her expectations. Melon acknowledges his growth but reminds him that he is still only a 1-star and will never make her kneel before him. Chris remains confident that he will eventually succeed. Even if he does not, he believes the duel will still teach him something, so it will not be a waste. Melon laughs and hopes he continues pushing beyond his limits so he can entertain her. Chris notes that Melon is currently an upper 4-star. Each stage is divided into 3 tiers, lower, middle, and upper, meaning that as an upper 1-star he is still far below her level. Fortunately, coming from a wealthy family gives him another advantage. He is essentially a wallet warrior. Back in his room, Chris asks Mary whether she has finished packing his bag for their outing. She confirms that she has and explains that since it is their first outing together, she made sure to dress appropriately. Chris reminds her that he never said she was coming with him. Mary acts disappointed and jokes that she will suffer from a heat stroke while serving him, though Chris questions how a banshee could even suffer one. Chris remembers asking his father whether he could replace Mary with a human attendant. His father refused because Christian had already made a contract with her, explaining that a high-ranked banshee cannot be controlled without one. Chris even asked how the contract could be avoided, only to learn that it requires sharing a deep kiss with Mary. He cannot believe his previous self actually did that. Chris tells Mary that she cannot accompany him because he is going somewhere crowded, and her spiritual energy could potentially harm people. Mary becomes visibly sad, explaining that she has been confined inside for decades and was looking forward to going outside. Seeing her reaction, Chris eventually gives in, telling her she can come but must avoid appearing in front of others. Mary becomes excited and praises him as the best master. Chris tells her to follow him. When she asks where they are going, he explains that he is heading somewhere he can make a profit. Mary reminds him that he already has plenty of money, prompting Chris to drop his coins onto the floor and tell her to stop wasting them. She guesses that he must instead be after land ownership, but Chris rejects that idea as well. When she asks what he is actually after, he simply says it is something he used in the past. They soon arrive at a carriage where Thorn is already waiting. Chris asks why he is there, and Thorn explains that he came to watch over him in case he starts behaving like a bastard again. Chris tells him not to worry because he is only going gambling. As fiends naturally enjoy alcohol and gambling, he sees nothing unusual about it. He even points out that gambling is legal and recommended by the Demon Emperor. Chris tells Thorn to follow him. He then wonders whether his brother is secretly worried about his older brother. Thorn immediately denies this, saying he is only concerned that Chris will dishonor the family. Chris jokes that gambling might be too stimulating for a little nerd like Thorn and asks whether he even knows the rules. Thorn explains that it is simply a matter of playing cards and warns Chris that he will flatten his nose if he keeps talking. Chris pretends to be frightened and promises to show Thorn just how much of a pushover he is. They eventually arrive at an enormous, luxurious building. Even Mary is impressed by its appearance, while Thorn admits that he has never seen a building like it. Mary's excitement grows, but Chris tells them to stop acting like country bumpkins. He gives Thorn a mask and tells Mary to hide so no one notices her. Chris whispers something to Mary, and she agrees to follow his instructions before disappearing. Thorn asks where he sent her, but Chris tells him not to worry about it and urges him to go inside. As they enter, gamblers glance toward them, surprised that people so young would willingly walk into what they consider a lion's den. Chris proposes a bet with Thorn. Whoever makes more money within an hour will win. If Chris wins, Thorn must call him older brother for a month. Thorn asks whether he is serious, and Chris confirms it. If Thorn wins, however, Chris must call him the Honorable King, Emperor, Majesty brother. Thorn cannot believe Chris can say something so ridiculous with a straight face. Chris tells him they do not have to make the bet if he is scared and even offers him some money. Thorn immediately snatches it, insisting that he is not afraid and that he will go first to show Chris how easy gambling is. Later at a gambling table, an observer comments on Chris's victory and is impressed by how well he plays despite his age. Chris understands exactly what is happening. Beginners are allowed to win reasonable amounts at first to make them overconfident. Once the target starts betting too much, the con men reel him in. Chris knows this method well and realizes Thorn has already fallen into their trap. He tells Thorn to go home and sleep because he is clearly losing money. Thorn insists that he has only lost 500, but Chris points out that he has already lost around 1,000. The others laugh as Thorn begins to lose his composure. Chris realizes that everyone has already marked Thorn as a loser and expects the con men to reel him in even further. He asks Thorn whether he plans to continue. Thorn says he will and throws more money into the game. Chris claims that he tried to stop him but secretly wants Thorn to lose as much as possible and become the perfect bait. That was the plan from the beginning. Later, Chris sits at another table and studies his cards. He notices several gamblers cheating by looking at his hand. Just then, Mary appears behind him and informs him that she has found the people he was looking for. Chris praises her work while internally becoming excited that his plan is finally progressing. A short while later, they arrive at their destination. Mary confirms that this is the place, and Chris tells her to open the door. She does so, and the people inside immediately panic when they see them. Chris removes his mask and asks whether they really do not recognize him. He orders them to bring their master out. One of the men immediately becomes extremely respectful and asks whether Chris has truly come to visit. The man is Grant, the master of the Glee Merchant Guild. Although he is famous for his talent as a merchant, Chris learns that Grant also owns the casino. Chris requests a private conversation. Grant asks what the matter is, and Chris explains that his younger brother, whom he cares deeply about, was conned at his casino. He then questions how Grant can still ask why he came. Grant is stunned to realize that the young gambler wearing the tiger mask is actually Chris's brother. Chris corrects him by identifying himself as the son of Count Khazar. Grant immediately insists that he only operates the casino and claims that the people involved have nothing to do with him. Mary then frightens him with her presence. Grant immediately apologizes and begs for mercy, saying that he never would have allowed such a thing if he had known Chris was the Count's son. Chris asks whether those are merely empty words. Grant assures him that they are not and offers compensation, asking how much Chris wants. Chris initially demands 1 million rupees, leaving Grant stunned because the casino cannot simply produce that amount on hand. Chris then reduces his demand to 200,000 rupees. Grant is surprised that such a small amount will settle the matter. Chris tells him that there is one more thing he wants. Grant asks what it is. Later, Chris examines the brand new equipment he has acquired. Mary is surprised that he used the 200,000 rupees to purchase gear and considers it another clever scheme. She then notices the sword he obtained and finds it unusual. The sword is called Grenade. Mary recognizes it as a holy sword once obtained by a past hero who sacrificed his soul to acquire it. She has heard that many fiends desire the weapon because it was used by the hero after his fall. However, the once renowned sword is now completely covered in rust. Chris tells Mary not to worry because the rusty holy sword is part of his plan. He then hands her a necklace, explaining that he noticed her staring at it earlier and wants her to have it as a gift. He says that if she kept regretting not having it, she might never be able to put her past to rest, so he wants her to have it and move on quickly. Mary is stunned because, both before and after her death, this is the first time anyone has ever given her a gift. She sincerely thanks him. Chris gets caught up in the moment and tells her they should hurry home. Mary gives him a warm smile and promises to put her whole heart into serving him as thanks. From now on, she says she will make his blood juice even tastier. As they walk home, Chris immediately says that he has no interest in drinking something like that. Their usual banter continues, with Mary insisting that he must have known the strawberry juice he has been drinking was actually blood. Chris tells her to stop joking, then suddenly pauses because he feels like he has forgotten something. He soon realizes what it is, the ring he left at the casino. The next morning, Chris is woken by someone shouting at him. He wonders what is going on and then asks why his brother abandoned him. Thorn angrily explains that Chris nearly got him sold as a debt slave because of his actions, and that he was only spared because someone recognized him. Chris apologizes, but assumes Grant must have helped him. He then reminds Thorn that he lost their bet and needs to fulfill his promise. Thorn looks mortified and squeezes the pillow tightly, before reluctantly beginning to say the required title. Chris pretends he cannot understand him until Thorn finally shouts out the full title, Esteemed King, Emperor, Majesty Brother. Chris is satisfied and tells Thorn to remember to respect him, while also striving to do well for himself. Thorn vows that he will get his revenge someday. Chris cannot believe that such an adorable child will eventually grow up to kill his older brother. He realizes that this future is connected to Eskit, the son of Langum, the acting head of the Dark Magic clan and the #1 young lord. Chris does not feel particularly attached to Eskett because he is not the original Christian. However, if he intends to become the young lord, he cannot avoid confronting him, and he decides to settle that grudge personally. To accomplish that, he first needs Melon on his side. Chris then looks down at the holy sword as he kneels beside it. Countless fiends have attempted to wield this weapon in the past, and the reason it is now treated as little more than an antique is that nobody has ever succeeded. Chris believes it may react differently to him. He grabs its chains, but the sword immediately releases a burst of holy energy that shocks his hand away. Chris examines his injured hand and considers the reaction expected. The sword was created as an artifact for wielding the holy power of light. Still, it is ultimately just a weapon, and if he can analyze the mechanism causing it to reject dark energy, he should be able to use it. He begins hammering the sword repeatedly. Each strike causes it to release another burst of holy energy, gradually destroying the hammer upon contact. After several attempts, Chris asks Grenade whether it hurts and pulls out another hammer. He tells the sword to submit because he intends to keep hitting it all night. A few days later, Chris arrives at the secret training ground where his father asks whether he has finished preparing. Chris confirms that he has. A woman stands before him, and Chris initially wonders where he has seen her before. He soon recognizes her and greets Marion, the commander of the Black Shadow Knights. She says it has been a while, revealing that she is Chris's aunt and the daughter of the Elder Clan head, the master of the Dark Magic Clan. She is also the older sister of Chris's father, Raiden, and Count Langam. Marion protects the Elder Clan head and oversees secret missions and surveillance within the clan. As one of the elite among the elites, Chris wonders why someone of her position has come here. Raiden explains that his sister came because of the matter involving Cox. Marion laughs at Chris's bold handling of the situation. Chris wonders whether the Elder Clan head intends to protect Eskett, which could become troublesome. He remarks that the Elder Clan head must have plenty of free time if he is concerned with such trivial matters. Marion calls Chris bold but explains that the clan head has no interest in the squabbles between children. Instead, he appears to be interested in Chris himself. Chris is surprised and sees this as an opportunity to gain the Elder Clan head's favor. Marion wonders whether his behavior is bravery or simple stupidity. He has not even reached 2 stars. Yet he is challenging Melon and should seriously consider canceling the duel. Chris thanks her for worrying about him but says he has his own plans. When he reveals the holy sword, Marion immediately recognizes Grenade and assumes Chris has completely lost his mind. She knew he was a troublemaker, but not to this extent. Marion also recalls how Raiden kept telling her that Chris had changed for the better. Raiden confirms that he has. Marion points out that Chris is planning to use a holy sword in a duel. Chris questions why that would be forbidden when all that matters is winning, regardless of the method or trick involved. Marion warns him that even the Elder Clan head failed to tame Grenade, and that its holy power will burn Chris to ashes. Chris calmly asks whether that is true and begins removing the sword from its sheath. Marion immediately warns him that it is dangerous as a faint golden light begins to emerge. Nothing happens. Marion stares at him in disbelief and wonders whether the weapon is a replica. Chris tosses the sword toward her and tells her to check it herself. The moment she catches it, the sword releases a powerful shock through her hand, forcing her to throw it onto the ground. Marion demands to know how Chris can wield it. Chris calls it a trade secret and refuses to explain. However, he assures her that there is one thing she can be certain of. The only reason he can wield a holy sword that even the Elder Clan head failed to tame is because he is a genius. Raiden cannot help but feel proud of his son. Just then, Melon laughs and says that Chris is always entertaining. She admits that taming a holy sword is impressive, but insists that it will not matter because today will be his last day alive. Chris turns his attention toward her. The duel begins. Melon charges forward and swings down with overwhelming force. Chris blocks the attack and immediately realizes that, without restrictions, her speed and power are incomparable to their previous duel. There is no way for him to close the gap through strength alone. She attacks again and Chris blocks once more. However, the holy sword begins dispersing the dark aura surrounding Melon's blade. Raiden and Marion are surprised to see the sword directly opposing her dark energy. Raiden remarks that Chris may have already surpassed Melon's younger self. Marion points out that this is not the only factor. Chris is wielding the holy sword while still maintaining dark energy around his hand. The two powers appear to be clashing against each other. Chris strikes back, forcing Melon to block. Raiden is impressed by the weapon's power but notices that Chris's dark energy seems unstable. Marion realizes that this is not instability. Chris is deliberately controlling his dark energy for brief moments, preventing the holy sword from rejecting it. Melon creates distance and asks whether the battle is finally to Chris's liking. She admits that she has been wondering about something and asks whether he has been predicting her movements. Chris confirms that he is simply observant. Every sword technique begins with a specific position. Before Melon can swing downward, she must raise her arms, which requires movement in the muscles of her shoulders and upper body. Those physical preparations are the same whether the swordsman is a novice or an expert. Melon sighs and wonders how he intends to predict her forever. A green aura suddenly emerges from her hand and wraps around Chris. She reminds him that the Black Swamp Knights are spell swords. A massive surge of holy energy suddenly resonates from Chris. Chris realizes that the attack could have been dangerous, but he has a cleansing artifact. Melon asks whether he brought one. Chris thanks his father for providing it, and remembers that the artifact was supposed to be stored in the secret vault. When questioned about how he obtained it, Chris admits that he can be a bit of a kleptomaniac, but explains that having good equipment is a skill in itself during a real battle. He reaches into his pocket and throws an object toward Melon. It explodes. Melon desperately dodges the blast, but Chris tells her there is no point, because he throws another one directly at her. The second artifact explodes as well. Chris explains that he purchased the artifact with the money he obtained from Glee and remarks that it is surprisingly effective. He tells Melon that he knows she is still alive and urges her to come out. Melon suddenly emerges and thrusts her sword directly toward him. Chris redirects her blade and matches her movement, striking the tip of her sword. A crack spreads through the blade until it completely shatters. Raiden finally understands why Chris threw the corrosion marble into the air. His son had deliberately prepared the battlefield to weaken Melon's weapon. Raiden can only conclude that Chris truly is a genius. Melon walks forward laughing, then begins smiling as she admits that the fight is far too enjoyable and wonders what Chris will use next. Marion realizes that Melon has become completely absorbed in the battle and says they need to stop her. Chris leans backward and raises his hand, deflecting Melon's attack with the smallest possible movement. He immediately pivots behind her and places his blade against her throat. Melon is caught off guard as Chris declares his victory. The blade lightly cuts her cheek, and he asks whether she is satisfied with the result. Raiden watches with obvious pride. Melon laughs again, saying that if Chris is genuinely asking, she cannot even calm herself down anymore. Chris reminds her of his previous request and asks for an answer as soon as possible. Although he won, he says he will respect her decision if she refuses, because loyalty cannot be forced. Melon asks whether he will continue fighting her like this if she chooses to stand by his side. Chris takes her hand and assures her that he will fight her as much as she wants. Later, Marion watches the sunset and reflects on what she has witnessed. She comments that Chris's ability to wield dark energy in such a manner is truly exceptional. Nearby, a man throws the holy sword onto the ground and refuses to wield it. Marion asks whether he is incapable of holding it as well. He explains that he can wield it for a brief moment, but dark energy constantly changes its waves. To use the sword, one must continuously alter those waves into a form the sword cannot detect. No one could realistically do that during an actual battle. He believes it might only be possible for a demon of Gahong or a demonic dragon, or perhaps some insane individual capable of controlling dark energy as naturally as breathing. Marion remembers Chris smiling confidently and asking whether his performance was enough to earn her praise. She cannot help but smile as well, wondering whether her father's long-held wish might finally be fulfilled. Later, Chris enters the kitchen and finds an intimidating-looking orc preparing food. The orc expertly cuts a strawberry in half and places it on top of a cheesecake. Chris cannot believe he is making strawberry cakes, while Mary praises the orc's skills despite his appearance. The orc asks what brings Chris to the kitchen. Chris explains that he wants to make some cookies. Mary asks why he is making them, and Chris says they are for someone else. She immediately wonders whether the gift is for another woman. Chris explains that it is technically for a woman, but not in the way Mary thinks. The orc offers to make the cookies for him, but Chris refuses because preparing heartfelt snacks with his own hands is what matters. Before he can finish, an unidentified red substance splashes onto his cheek as the orcs aggressively mash strawberries into jam. Chris suspiciously asks Mary whether she is certain they are not mixing blood into the strawberry juice. Mary simply laughs. Later that evening, Chris calls out to Marion as she prepares to mount her horse. She asks what he wants, and Chris explains that he heard she was leaving and came to say goodbye. Marion appreciates the gesture and assumes he must still be tired from their duel the previous day. Chris says he is fine and reveals that he also has a gift for her. Marion sees the box of cookies and blushes, saying that he did not need to prepare anything. Chris explains that he was happy to see her again and could not help making something for her. He remembers asking earlier what kind of food Marion likes and decides that cookies would be a good choice. He asks her to try one because he baked them himself. Marion is surprised that Chris actually made them, but takes a bite and discovers that they are surprisingly delicious. She praises the taste, and Chris is pleased that she likes them. Marion says that she should give him something in return, and asks whether there is anything he wants. Chris asks her to become his true aunt from now on. Marion understands that his words must have a deeper meaning despite their existing blood relation. She asks whether he is really seeking her support in the upcoming succession conflict. She sighs and explains that she cannot grant such a request. As an adult from the main family, she must remain impartial toward all candidates because that is the rule. Chris insists that his request is genuine and that he simply wants to become closer to his aunt. Marion asks whether he truly has no other intentions. Chris admits that if she genuinely cherishes him and secretly offers to help, he certainly would not refuse. Marion laughs as she continues eating the cookies, saying she does not dislike his honesty. Since her nephew makes such delicious cookies for her, she cannot help but cherish him. Chris thanks her, and Marion asks whether she can have more cookies next time. Raiden watches the exchange with tears in his eyes, touched by the wholesome moment. Chris jokingly warns Marion that if she makes him sad, he might become too upset to recreate the same taste again, hoping she understands what he means. Marion sighs but remains happy, and then asks Chris what he thinks about joining the Black Shadow Knights. Before he can fully respond, she explains that his performance against Melon was exceptional. He may even be a greater prodigy than the Elder Clan head. However, his rivals will not be easy to defeat, and she worries that his talent might disappear before it has the chance to fully bloom. Chris says that if he cannot climb over the mountain standing in his way, then he would not mind dying. Marion is surprised by his answer, but Chris assures her that he appreciates her concern and does not believe he will lose again. Amused by his confidence, Marion admits that for some reason, if it is this child, she feels capable of believing him. She cannot stop him from choosing this path, but she offers him one piece of advice: he should be wary of the first young lady. Raiden asks why he should be wary of Juliana when she is considered the gentlest among the 5 young lords. Marion simply says that he will understand the reason soon. Chris thanks her and promises to remember her warning. Marion smiles, says they will meet again, and rides away. That night, Chris lies in bed thinking about everything that has happened. Both his father and Marion have reached 6 stars, yet he remembers hearing surprisingly little about them during the Great War. He wonders just how many powerful combatants exist within the Magic Empire. There must be enough of them to overwhelm the Dominion of Light at the very least. Chris refuses to repeat the mistakes of his previous life, and decides that he needs to become stronger much faster. 1 month passes. Chris is summoned by his father and asks what he wanted to discuss. Raiden is initially distracted by Chris's appearance before realizing that his son has already reached 2 stars. He cannot believe Chris achieved such growth in only a month. Chris reminds him that he promised he would reach 2 stars and asks why he was summoned so late at night. Raiden explains that he received word from the main family. He submitted both Chris and another candidate for the Sacred Dark Rite, but only the other candidate was approved. The reason is Chris's terrible reputation, his frivolous spending, womanizing, theft, drunken behavior, and destruction of property. Raiden cannot even refute the accusations because they are all true. Despite this, he cannot believe they are still looking down on his son. Chris asks whether Count Langam made the decision. Raiden explains that Langam did not have much to say about Chris's past misconduct. The real issue is Eskit, a direct descendant of the main family and the star of the upcoming Sacred Dark Rite. The Sacred Dark Rite is a ritual in which candidates absorb pure darkness from the negative dimension. Because the amount of darkness available is limited, the candidates effectively participate in a death match to determine their hierarchy. Those who rank higher receive more of the darkness. The ritual plays a major role in determining who will become the young lord and successor of the clan. If Eskit wins and monopolizes the available darkness, Chris's goal of becoming the 6th young lord will become far more difficult. Raiden promises that if that happens, he will speak with the main family again, and if necessary, even ask Marion for help. Chris tells him that such measures are unnecessary because he will handle the situation himself. Raiden acknowledges that Chris is talented and has genuinely changed, but tells him to leave matters like this to the adults. Chris understands that his father is genuinely trying to protect him. He appreciates Raiden's feelings, but insists that he has his own methods. Chris then asks whether any children from Count Trauman's house will participate. Raiden confirms that the 3rd son will be there and explains that the young lord has sided with Eskit. He believes Chris has no right to participate in the Sacred Dark Rite and considers him nothing more than a trickster who can only control demon beasts. Chris is surprised that his father is being so supportive and tells him to calm down. He simply needs to prove himself. He also expects the Trauman family to host a black pill soon and plans to participate as a herder. The scene then shifts to what appears to be the main estate of the clan. Marion reports to the Elder Clan head that she personally checked on Christian according to his orders. When asked about Chris, she says that he is incomparable to the others. The Elder Clan head finds that difficult to believe. The child he remembers was nothing more than a brat who believed himself to be a genius despite being only a false prodigy. Marion explains that Chris is clearly different from before. The Elder Clan head asks whether she believes Chris could fulfill his long-awaited wish. She explains that this wish is the very reason her father has continued living, even defying death through heaven-defying magic. Marion cannot say for certain whether Chris can fulfill it, but she believes he may be the closest person to achieving what he desires. The Elder Clan head finds this interesting and decides to keep watching Chris. He asks whether Chris's participation in the upcoming Sacred Dark Rite is unlikely. Marion confirms that this is the general consensus within the clan. When he asks whether she expects him to intervene, he refuses, saying he cannot interfere in such a trivial matter. He questions how someone can call himself a fierce beast if he cannot overcome such a small trial. Marion agrees that Chris may be a fierce beast, but he is still only a child. She believes he should at least be given an opportunity to receive darkness and awaken his potential. The Elder Clan head suddenly calls her name in a stern voice, making Marion realize that she has overstepped her boundaries. He explains that he has always been this way, becoming particularly harsh toward those he has expectations for. Since Marion is willing to go so far for Chris, he concludes that she has taken a liking to him. He then summons Bloodrinker, the Dark Magic clan's head butler, Simon. Simon enters and asks whether he has been called, though he already knows what is happening. He has heard everything and says that Chris is now under observation. The Elder Clan head confirms that he wants Simon to watch Chris closely and report everything he does leading up to the sacred dark rite. Simon agrees but asks whether he can play a small prank while monitoring him. Marion is surprised, while the Elder Clan head warns Simon not to go too far. Simon laughs ominously, agrees and leaves. Marion quietly hopes Chris makes it through safely. Meanwhile, Chris rides through a village in a carriage and reflects on his rapid growth. He managed to reach 2 stars quickly thanks to his talent, but despite all his training, his stamina and dark energy reserves are still insufficient to reach 3 stars. He needs a black pill to accumulate a large amount of dark energy in a short period. Fortunately, the fact that the host of the Black Pill Hunt has already developed a grudge against him is a stroke of luck. However, simply capturing the demon beast does not guarantee that he will receive a black pill. There is a special condition that must also be fulfilled. The carriage stops, and Lardos approaches, asking what brings Chris here. Chris asks how he has been and remarks that he surely did not come empty-handed. Lardos proudly says he would never greet the young master without a gift. Chris immediately slaps the gift from his hand, sending it to the ground. He tells Lardos that he clearly does not know his place and that Chris has heard about his various illegal activities. He decides to overlook them this once but orders Lardos to stop crossing the line. Lardos quickly agrees. Chris then tells him he needs an ash pill and asks whether Lardos can procure one. Lardos explains that their price has recently increased. Chris understands and asks Mary whether she is ready. Mary starts laughing, frightening Lardos so badly that he immediately drops to his knees and promises to obtain the pill. Chris finds his cooperation pleasantly simple and adds another request. He wants a dagger sharp enough to cut through armor. Lardos looks confused as Chris leaves. On the way back, Mary asks whether they are finally going home, but Chris says there is one more place he needs to visit. He spots a potion shop and orders the coachman to stop. Inside, Chris looks through the merchandise and begins selecting several items. Mary asks what he needs them for, particularly questioning why he wants an aphrodisiac. Her expression makes it obvious that she is misunderstanding his intentions. Chris becomes nervous as the people around him stare. Mary starts wondering whether the two of them have finally reached that stage, but Chris quickly denies it and insists the items are for someone else. Mary strikes a thoughtful pose and wonders whether they are for the Count. Chris nods. The shopkeeper immediately understands as well, assuming it is related to Raiden's age. Chris tells the shopkeeper that for the Count's honor, this purchase must remain completely secret. The shopkeeper assures him that he will keep quiet. Later, Chris meets Thorn. Chris makes him repeat his full title from their previous bet before speaking to him. Thorn warns Chris that the Black Pill Hunt is dangerous and tells him to avoid getting hurt. Chris wonders whether Thorn is worried about him. Thorn becomes embarrassed and insists that he is only worried they will not get their proper duel. Their father then tells Thorn to make sure Chris flattens the noses of the house, Tyrann bastards. Chris promises to do so and says he will return with good news. Raiden then asks Thorn what the strange King, Emperor, Majesty Brother title from earlier means. Thorn becomes extremely embarrassed and refuses to explain. The scene shifts to the house of Count Tyrann. A small goblin servant tells Chris once again that he is not allowed to enter the Count's mansion. Chris's companions are outraged that he is being treated this way and question whether the servant even knows who he is. The goblin explains that he has orders from his young master and owes nothing to a good-for-nothing bastard. Chris asks whether he is being told to find his own accommodations. The goblin nervously confirms it. One of Chris's companions immediately wants to cut the man's head off, but Chris stops him and instead asks about payment for accommodations. The frightened goblin offers to bill the cost to Count Tyrann. Chris accepts. Soon the group arrives at an extravagant mansion that Chris has rented. The workers are stunned by the property and estimate that it must have cost at least 100,000 rupees. Chris remarks that it is not often they get the chance to spend someone else's money so freely. He gives them an hour to organize their luggage, and then suggests they go out for drinks. Something suddenly moves inside one of the bags. Mary pops out and enthusiastically praises the mansion, saying it is perfect for serving him. Chris asks why she is there. Mary explains that she hid inside his luggage because she promised to remain his maid forever. She also finds his embarrassed reaction adorable and assumes he must have missed her. Before Chris can respond, someone angrily calls out about the bill. It is Yahello, the third son of Count Tyrann. Chris explains that since the host of the Black Pill Hunt told him to find somewhere else to stay, he did exactly that. Since someone of his standing cannot stay in an ordinary hotel, he purchased a decent mansion instead. He questions whether Allo is really arguing over such a small amount of money, and points out that, considering how poorly Allo treats his guests, The price is reasonable compensation for teaching him some manners. Yahello becomes furious and squeezes the bill while releasing magic that summons a panther. He threatens Chris and asks whether he wants to die. Chris immediately recognizes the technique as the Count's subjugation arts. Unlike the Alliance's taming techniques, these are dark magic methods that bind and control demon beasts through fear. Secret formulas are mixed into the technique, disrupting the beast's reasoning and inducing delusions of fear and excitement. Chris finds the technique more complicated than expected. Learning all of it in a short time would be difficult, but for now, he simply wants to beat the beast. Chris tells Mary that he will need a weapon to deal with the frightening cat. Mary laughs and opens their storage. Chris pulls out a weapon and tells Yahello to send the beast at him. Yahello angrily tells Chris not to order him around. The panther charges forward with its mouth open. As it leaps, Chris raises his weapon to block the attack. The beast bites down and shatters the weapon, sending Chris flying backward onto the floor. Chris admits that the beast is not bad, but considers the situation unfair because it is effectively a 2-on-1 fight. He says that if he wins, he will have to participate as a guard rather than a herder, so the challenge needs to be at least this difficult to count. He asks Yahello what he thinks. Yahello insults Chris and jumps onto the panther, ordering it to make Chris kneel. The beast launches another attack, and Yahello confidently watches as it pounces. But when it lands, the panther looks around and realizes Chris is gone. Yahello is equally confused. Chris appears behind them and strikes Yahello once with his weapon, then follows with 3 more blows. He asks whether it hurts and tells Yahello not to start crying. Yahello creates distance, while Chris warns that he will not go easy on him even if he does. Yahello tells him to shut up. Chris then releases a powerful wave of killing intent toward both Yahello and the panther. The beast immediately becomes overwhelmed by fear. It panics, retreats, and eventually runs away, leaving Yahello stunned and asking what Chris did to his Chaco. Chris calmly explains that he only used a simple 2-star illusion spell, but apparently it was too much for Yahello's subjugation arts to overcome. Yahello begins preparing another spell and tells Chris to shut up again. A demonic-looking horse starts emerging from the ground beneath him. Chris asks whether Yahello really understands what kind of person he is. Yahello looks confused, giving Chris the opening he needs. Chris thrusts his weapon forward with tremendous speed and smashes it directly into Yahello's forehead, knocking him to the ground with his eyes rolling white. Chris explains that he does not bother waiting for transformations or finishing lengthy spells. Meanwhile, the poor summoned horse remains stuck halfway out of the ground. Later, Chris is back at the gambling establishment, where someone questions whether he should really be spending his time like this. Chris says there is still plenty of time and that he should rest whenever possible. They point out that gambling hardly counts as resting, but Chris asks what is wrong with a good-for-nothing like himself doing exactly what he is supposed to do. He asks Mary whether she agrees. She happily supports him, though she refuses to give him alcohol despite his desire for some. Chris cannot really argue with her. The goblin from earlier wonders why Yahello ordered them to keep watching such a bastard. Chris invites them to join him at the table. He is confident their master will not wake up until tomorrow after the beating he received, and he promises to keep the matter secret. The 2 men tell Chris to mind his own business, so he tells them to enjoy themselves while they continue watching him until nightfall. Eventually, the goblin and the hyena-like man conclude that Chris really is a good-for-nothing, and that continuing to watch him is pointless. They leave. Chris opens his eyes once they are gone and sits up. Looking outside, he realizes it is already late and decides it is time to move. He tells Mary that he needs to go somewhere quickly and orders her not to follow. Mary immediately becomes suspicious. She knows there is an aphrodisiac in his pouch and realizes it was never meant for the Count. She jokingly assumes Chris plans to use it himself and says that although she is sad she cannot accompany him to bed, she will cheer him on during his nighttime activities. Chris tells her to stop running her mouth. He then reaches the secret hunting grounds of Count Tyranne, where the concentration of demon beast energy is extremely dense. Based on the Count's reputation, Chris knows this must be the place and expects the hunting ground to be nearby. He soon spots it and finds only 2 guards protecting the entrance. The relaxed security works in his favor, especially since Mary taught him the invisibility spell. Mary asks what he plans to do with invisibility magic, but Chris tells her to stop making everything sound suspicious. He easily slips past the guards and moves deeper into the hunting grounds until he reaches an altar. Chris recognizes it as the place where the Black Pill Hunt's finale will take place. Lena, the fox woman he met previously, had already explained how a black pill is created. A demon beast must be driven into such extreme fear that it would rather die than continue living. At that brief moment, intense fear and radiant joy exist on the same spectrum, allowing the otherwise useless ash pill to transform into a black pill. That is why the House of Count Tyranne, which specializes in controlling demon beasts through fear, hosts the Black Pill Hunt. Chris recalls Lena's explanation and reveals that he originally planned to steal their ultimate technique, release the Kagoff after feeding it an aphrodisiac mixed with other substances, and monopolize the resulting black pill. However, he does not have enough time to steal and master their technique. He needs another method. Chris suddenly senses a magical presence and turns around, wondering whether he has been detected. He identifies where the energy is coming from and decides to investigate. He travels deeper into the forest and eventually finds a cave. Pulling his hood over his head, he enters. An ominous red aura brushes past him. Chris immediately senses the overwhelming malice and recognizes the barrier as an extremely high-level dark magic formation. He wonders whether it could be what he thinks it is. A crevice of Gehenna, a passage connecting the demon world to the human world. He cannot believe that such a crevice exists here. Then an idea occurs to him. If he can lure the Kagov here, he may be able to use the crevice to his advantage. And he already has something capable of drawing it here. Chris smiles and decides to wait until the hunt begins. A bat watches him from the cave ceiling. After Chris leaves, the bat spreads its wings and reveals itself as Simon. He admits that he never expected the little bastard to be this interesting. Chris has not only beaten Yahello, but also lowered the vigilance of his observers by deliberately acting like a fool. Now he has secretly entered a forbidden area and is clearly planning something. Simon finds this entertaining enough to want to play an even worse prank on him. He approaches the entrance to Gehenna and places his hand inside. The barrier immediately tears into his flesh, causing blood to drip onto the ground. Something begins absorbing his blood and asks what he desires. Simon prepares to summon a demon. The following day, the black pill hunt begins. Someone plants a flag into the ground. It is Yahello and his group. Chris is also present and remarks that Yahello was acting far too cool for someone who was recently beaten so badly. Yahello tells him to shut up and calls Chris the real poser, questioning why he brought the holy sword when he cannot even properly use it. Chris explains that it is still more effective than a club and asks whether Yahello wants to test it. Yahello quickly changes the subject and orders everyone to lure the demon beast toward the altar. Those assigned to guard duty will follow him and remain beside the altar. Simon watches from nearby while Chris notices him as well. Yahello orders Chris to answer, and Chris simply agrees. At the altar, one of the guards tells Chris to stay somewhere else because he is only getting in the way of the hunt. Chris accepts, but warns them not to come crying to him for help cleaning up when they inevitably die. The remark clearly irritates the guard, but Yahello tells him not to waste his energy before the hunt even begins and orders the good-for-nothing to guard the flag. Chris happily accepts the task and promises to protect it with everything he has. He sits beneath a tree and watches the others prepare, thinking that they are walking directly into his trap. He has also made sure to bring the dagger and ash pill with him. The hunters suddenly hear something approaching. Chris knows exactly what it is. The Kagov finally appears, revealing itself as a rank 4 magic demon beast. Despite its rank, Chris is surprised by how ridiculous and oddly cute it looks. The others ask Yahello whether he is ready and tell him it is time to begin. Yahello's animal companion also urges him to activate the subjugation arts. Yahello extends his hand and begins casting while the Kagov repeatedly strikes the ground with its beak. The others cast slowing spells to restrain its movements. Yahello gradually approaches while applying the subjugation arts. Then something changes within the Kagov's eyes. It suddenly screeches and turns toward Yahello. Yahello freezes in fear and raises his hand, only for the Kagov to smash him aside. The others notice poison leaking from the strange feather-like appendages on its body and immediately form a defensive formation around Yahello. Chris realizes that their efforts will not work. The Kagov has gone berserk because of the aphrodisiac he gave it. Yahello reassures everyone that they consumed antidotes beforehand, but admits that allowing the fight to continue is still dangerous. He orders everyone to do everything they can to stop the beast. The hunters launch themselves toward the Kagov again. Yahello looks up in terror and closes his eyes as they attack. But instead of being struck, he sees Chris standing in front of him with the holy sword blocking the attack. Chris mocks the House of Tyrann for being so pathetic that they have forced even the flag bearer to step in. He offers to save Yahello if he agrees to call him Big Brother. Yahello calls him crazy and questions why he should agree. Chris asks whether he really does not want his help, reminding him that they do not have all day. The others begin coughing from the poison. Yahello grits his teeth, realizing Chris is right. He finally asks Chris to help, reluctantly calling him a bastard. Chris reminds him to keep his promise. He then smashes the side of the Kagov's head with the holy sword before using his own version of the subjugation arts. Chains of dark energy spread around the Kagov's body and restrain it. Yahello is shocked that Chris can use the technique. Chris asks whether Yahello really thought his family was the only one capable of using it. As long as it is not a secret technique, something as basic as an intermediate subjugation art is nothing special to him. Chris rotates his body and grabs the chains created by his technique, pulling them back like reins before leaping onto the beast's back. The Kagov suddenly screeches and charges forward. Yahello warns Chris to stop because a crevice of Gehenna lies ahead. Chris simply smiles. He already discovered it 18 nights ago and deliberately guides the Kagov straight toward it. The beast begins panicking as it senses the overwhelming malice of Gehenna for the first time. Its bright red eyes suddenly turn yellow as fear takes over. Chris tightens his grip on the dagger and stabs the cag off, killing it instantly. The others rush over and ask whether he is all right, warning that the cave is extremely dangerous and that they need to leave immediately. Chris tells them not to be cowards and asks what they intend to do if the result is only an ash pill instead of a black pill. Yahello becomes frustrated while one of his companions demands to know what Chris plans to do after interfering with the hunt. Yahello stops him and instead thanks Chris for rescuing his subordinates. Because of him, they were able to finish without suffering any major injuries. Chris is surprised that Yahello actually acknowledges it and admits that he feels slightly guilty now, especially knowing that he secretly replaced the black pill. Still, he has to do what he must. He reminds Yahello that he promised to call him Big Brother and asks whether he intends to break his word. Yahello denies ever making such a promise and points out that he is 2 years older than Chris. Suddenly, the entire cave begins shaking. The overwhelming pressure causes several people to collapse. Yahello asks what is happening, but Chris quickly realizes what they are facing. 2 enormous blue eyes appear before them. Chris becomes slightly tense as an unfamiliar voice declares that it has not seen such an interesting plaything in a long time. Chris identifies the creature as a demon from Gehenna. Yahello trembles in fear and urges Chris to run because he is an outsider and should save himself. Chris, however, notices Simon watching from the ceiling. He immediately throws his dagger toward the bat. The weapon pierces it, only for Chris to realize that it is merely Simon's familiar, which he had been using to monitor the situation. As the connection begins breaking apart, Simon is surprised that Chris noticed him. He had intended to watch a little longer before intervening against the demon. However, with the bat familiar destroyed, the one he planned to use for teleportation is gone. Even pushing his blood magic to its limits, it will take him at least 5 minutes to arrive. If he gets there too late, everyone will die. Simon immediately rushes toward the cave. Despite his earlier behavior, he is not actually trying to kill Chris. He simply wanted to play a prank, just as he promised. The demon finds Chris interesting and asks what he is planning. Chris says he simply dislikes people secretly watching him. The demon laughs and comments that Chris has an impressive number of concerns for someone who should already be dead. Chris compares the demon to those he encountered during the Age of Destruction. Against them, this creature would only qualify as a low-ranking demon. Even so, it is at least a 5-star opponent, meaning Chris cannot currently fight it head-on. He raises a finger and decides that the situation is not completely hopeless. Chris casts the same sleep spell he previously used on the girl who was attacked by Lardos and Pomodore. One by one, Yahello's subordinates lose consciousness. Yahello demands to know what Chris is doing when they need to fight together. Chris realizes that Yahello has an unusually strong resistance to magic and strikes him directly in the stomach, telling him to go to sleep already. The demon assumes Chris intends to offer all of them as sacrifices. In exchange, it promises to spare his life and personally bless him. Chris tells it to stop talking and explains that it is his principle never to associate with demons. He begins drawing the holy sword. The demon recognizes it and admits that the idea is admirable, but points out that a holy sword Chris cannot use is nothing more than junk. The demon begins casting a spell, launching it directly at Chris. Chris blocks the attack with the holy sword, but the force is overwhelming. He is blasted backward into the cave wall and loses consciousness. The demon grabs him by the arm and lifts him into the air, offering him another chance to sacrifice the others in exchange for his insignificant life. Chris spits directly in its face and questions why it assumes he cannot use the holy sword. He breaks free, grabs the demon's legs, and uses the momentum to flip himself back onto the ground. Chris then activates his other energy core. The tip of the holy sword begins regenerating as aura flows through it. The demon becomes nervous and questions how a fiend like Chris can wield the power of light. Chris asks whether the demon is finally starting to feel that its life is in danger. The demon insists that this will not stop it and forms a massive red sphere in front of Chris. Chris widens his stance and prepares himself. He unleashes Dead Sea cleaving light, swinging the sword downward and sending an enormous yellow wave toward the demon. The demon is stunned by the attack before being struck. It lets out a scream and collapses. Chris's eyes become extremely tired. He realizes that he has pushed his body far beyond its limits. His vision narrows with every passing second until he finally collapses. As his consciousness fades, he remembers his previous life. Evan asks whether Chris really managed to replicate his ability. Chris says that his version was somewhat similar. Evan is impressed and explains that Dead Sea cleaving light represents a single flash of light capable of dividing the Dead Sea. He finds the name ironic because, despite using the sword technique, Chris failed to become the light of the Mer clan. But Evan believes Chris will become the light that saves the world. Elsewhere, a blue finger touches a puddle. Chris remains barely conscious as a woman observes him with interest. She introduces herself as Mafina, the first seed of Gehenna's 7th realm. Chris's eyes slowly close as Mafina says that she looks forward to seeing what he does in the future. 2 days later, Chris wakes up at the house of Count Tyranne. His head hurts, and he cannot believe he has been lying there for 2 entire days. He considers the time a complete waste, although his body appears to be fine. He looks around and notices the black pill beside him. Chris is relieved to see it, and then remembers Mafina. He considers the attention from a demon unwanted. Sometimes, fiends who stand out early receive a demon's blessing and can be nurtured rapidly, but Chris has no interest in such a thing because blessings from demons are something villains receive. Besides, a demon from the 7th realm is not even that high-ranking by his standards. A large lion-like man enters and asks how Chris is feeling. He is the patriarch of House Tyranne. Chris greets the Count and tries to stand and bow, but the Count tells him to remain seated and rest. Chris wonders what happened. The Count explains that an investigation squad was organized the previous day and examined the cave. They discovered that someone had tampered with the magic circle sealing the entrance to Gehenna. Fortunately, it appears that the demon kin was reverse summoned before things became even worse. Still, even that brief period was more than enough for everyone inside to lose their lives. Chris wonders whether they truly believe the demon was reverse summoned. It makes no sense to assume that he killed it, which means he does not even need to come up with an excuse. The Count then apologizes for how he treated Chris, admitting that he judged him solely based on the rumors that he was a good-for-nothing. He bows and thanks Chris, calling him a benefactor of House Tyranne. Chris insists that there is no need to thank him. As a member of the Dark Magic clan, he simply did what he had to do because they are family. Although he feels somewhat guilty, Chris decides to muddy the situation a little. His words resonate with the Count, who agrees that their families are indeed connected. He offers to help Chris with anything within his ability. Chris considers the offer and makes his request. He wants House Tyranne to let go of its old grudge against House Khazar and end their current relationship of hostility and constant retaliation. Instead, he wants the two branch families to develop a friendly but competitive relationship, allowing them to advance together in a way that reflects their shared bloodline. The Count begins to respond, but Chris points out that he likely understands the real reason their two houses have been feuding. From Chris's perspective, the main family has been manipulating the situation from behind the scenes. If the branch families were to cooperate, the main clan might view their combined influence as a threat. The conflict therefore keeps them divided and reduces them to little more than dogs guarding the main house. The Count asks whether Chris is planning a rebellion against the main clan. Chris immediately denies having any such intention. The Count is surprised that Chris has thought this far ahead. Chris accepts the praise and asks whether the Count will grant his request. The Count sighs and says that for the first time in a while, he should contact Count Khazar. Before finishing, however, he unexpectedly addresses Chris by his name instead. Chris smiles and agrees, saying that if they unite their forces one by one, they can build a much stronger front before the Age of Destruction begins. The Count then asks Yahello what he has been waiting for. Embarrassed, Yahello holds out the ash pill he found on the floor inside the cave. Since Chris showed no signs of waking up, he made sure to keep it safe. Chris jokingly suggests that if Yahello is feeling grateful enough to give him more gifts, he is welcome to do so. Yahello angrily protests, making the Count laugh. Instead, the Count offers Chris a gift himself, a summoning stone capable of storing a rank 4 demon beast. Chris immediately recognizes its rarity. The Count also promises to submit a report supporting Chris's participation in the sacred dark rite, and wishes him good results. Chris thanks him for both the gift and his encouragement. The Count tells him to rest while he and Yahello leave. Chris then calls for someone to come out. A red aura appears behind the curtain as Simon reveals himself. He admits that he suspected Chris's discovery of him was no coincidence, and is impressed that Chris could see through stealth even the Count could not. Chris explains that he simply smelled the scent of blood. Simon introduces himself as the head butler of the Dark Magic clan. Chris wonders whether that means Simon serves the Elder Clan head directly. The name suddenly reminds him of someone from his previous life. Simon is the master of the Blood Shadow Mages, a psychotic organization that never distinguished between the Magic Empire and the Dominion of Light, committing indiscriminate slaughter and terrorism. Its leader was an 8-star fiend who eventually reached 9 stars during the final stage of the Age of Destruction and became the 10th Demon King. Chris remembers how many times he and Evan nearly died because of that man. Simon is also the blood and flesh of the Demon King of Carnage. Simon admits that he never expected the young master to be this impressive, especially after seeing him eliminate a demon. Chris asks whether Simon witnessed Dead Sea cleaving light. Simon immediately realizes that Chris is pretending not to know what he is talking about. After investigating the cave, Simon found the demon's corpse completely annihilated without leaving a trace. That could not have been a reverse summoning. He is impressed and asks Chris to explain what happened, reminding him that everything will eventually be reported to the Elder Clan head. Chris sees no reason to reveal his trump card. Simon reminds him that the Elder Clan head will hear about it anyway. Chris responds that if he were in the Elder Clan head's position, he would not reveal everything so easily. He would hide his claws until the very end instead of answering every question. Simon is surprised by how interesting Chris has become. Chris then asks whether Simon plans to apologize. Simon asks what he has to apologize for. Chris explains that it is normally difficult to distinguish between reverse summoning and complete annihilation based only on traces, which is why the Count believed the demon had been reverse summoned, but Simon clearly knows otherwise. The reason is simple: he was the one who summoned the demon. A demon-kin summoning incident that nearly killed a member of the clan would be extremely serious and could easily reach the elder clan head's ears. Simon admits that Chris is right and promises to take responsibility. Chris decides to keep the matter secret, but tells Simon to remember that he now owes him a major favor. Simon is surprised that Chris is treating this as a deal. Chris says it would be convenient if Simon chose to understand it that way. Simon accepts and promises not to forget Chris's mercy. He says it was a pleasure meeting him, and that he looks forward to seeing him again once Chris arrives at the main clan. Chris understands that Simon will play an important role during the Age of Destruction, so establishing a connection with him is essential if he wants to change the future. Meanwhile, Mary's magic lifts Chris's luggage into the air as she announces that everything is ready for their return. Chris praises her work. Yahello opens the door and asks whether Chris is leaving already. Chris reminds him to use his proper title. Yahello questions what he means, so Chris reminds him that he let it slide in front of the Count, but a promise is a promise. From now on, Yahello has to call him Big Brother. Yahello again points out that he is 2 years older. Chris asks whether he has something else to say. Yahello explains that he came to warn him. After hearing that they were family, he no longer felt right treating Chris this way. He warns Chris to be careful because the person most opposed to his participation in the sacred dark rite is young Lord Loin. Yahello also reminds him that even 2-star fiends from the main family and branch families are not truly on equal footing. The direct descendants have access to superior elixirs, ultimate techniques, and the blessings of dark magic, giving them a much greater starting point. Chris would therefore be easy prey. Chris smiles and offers Yahello a warning of his own, calling him Little Brother. He tells Yahello not to participate in the upcoming sacred dark rite for his own good. Yahello insists that he is only saying this because he is worried, and refuses to let Chris monopolize the pure dark energy. Chris tells him to remember his words. Regardless of who his opponents are, they will regret facing him in the sacred dark rite. Yahello becomes irritated, but Chris ends the conversation and tells Mary that it is time to leave. He tells Yahello to think carefully and make sure he does not regret his decision later. Back at the house of Count Khazar, Chris asks about his brother but learns that he has already left for the training cave. The butler explains that he intends to train alone until the sacred dark rite. Chris eventually catches up with him. Thorn greets him using the full title he was forced to learn, and reminds Chris that he promised to duel him after returning. Chris is surprised by Thorn's rapid growth. In such a short time, he has already reached middle 2-star and is progressing quickly. Thorn says he is busy and needs to continue training. Chris realizes that Thorn is also participating in the sacred dark rite, which complicates things. He tells Thorn to wait and promises they can duel after he finishes training. Chris also urges him to keep training in the meantime. Thorn makes him promise not to postpone their duel again and warns that it cannot end like their previous encounter. Chris agrees and walks away. He remarks that Thorn is a stubborn brat. A girl nearby asks whether he really made the promise, and Chris says that Thorn reminds him of her in many ways. In the training area, Chris sits down and studies the black pill. With half a month remaining before the sacred dark rite, he finally bites into it and immediately complains about the terrible taste. He lies down and begins absorbing the pill through his pathways. The energy is more turbulent than expected. Chris suddenly senses something unusual and realizes that the pill contains traces of light force. Instead, he draws it into his light core while absorbing the dark energy into his dark core simultaneously. Elsewhere, a woman tells someone to enter. A man reports on the investigation she requested. During the black pill hunt, a demonkin was summoned, but Chris survived the incident. The investigation took longer because they also had to investigate the summoning itself. The woman praises his work, and he leaves after confirming that she has no further questions. As she studies a photograph of Chris, we learn that her name is Ideen. Another half-month passes. Someone knocks on Chris's door and announces that today is the promised duel. Chris tells him to enter. Thorn steps inside. Chris is surprised to see him first thing in the morning and jokes that he must be eager to get beaten again. But Chris soon notices how much stronger Thorn's presence has become in just half a month. Thorn dismisses Chris's words and says that his strength has grown considerably. Chris offers to give him the beating he seems to want, but adds one condition. If Thorn loses, he must give up his participation in the upcoming sacred dark rite. Thorn is stunned by the demand. Chris explains that the sacred dark rite is a competition, and weaklings have no place participating. Thorn tells him to stop talking and draw his sword. Chris realizes that Thorn is too blind to understand his brotherly concern, so he decides to knock the lesson into his head personally. He launches forward. The scene then cuts to the infirmary. Thorn has been completely beaten and is now unconscious. Raiden is told that Chris went too far, and that the healer expects Thorn to remain on bed rest for half a month. Raiden concludes that they will have to wait until the next sacred dark rite. When someone begins arguing against the decision, Chris asks to speak with his father alone. His father agrees and leaves them alone to talk things out. Chris approaches Thorn's bed and asks why he is sulking when he was the one who demanded the duel. He then points out that Thorn seems to resent seeing him grow stronger and has deliberately injured him so he cannot participate in the sacred dark rite. Chris explains that this was never his intention. He pushed Thorn because he wanted him to become stronger. If they competed in the rite, Thorn would permanently lose his chance to obtain the pure dark energy, so Chris had to be rough because of how stubborn he is. More importantly, Chris explains that pure dark energy is simply not suited to Thorn. Thorn asks what he means. Chris explains that, just as the power of light has different attributes, dark energy also comes in various forms. Pure dark energy is the highest attribute, while gray dark energy ranks directly below it and is particularly suited to curse magic. Chris points out that Thorn seems to have an easier time mastering curse magic than swordsmanship. Thorn wonders how Chris knows this. Chris cannot exactly tell him that he learned it from the future, so he simply says that he figured it out while sparring with him. He then warns Thorn that absorbing pure dark energy before mastering gray dark energy could cause problems later. Although it would not make mastering gray dark energy impossible, the unique properties of pure dark energy could interfere with his progress and slow him down. Chris wants Thorn to become as strong as possible as quickly as possible, so he urges him to think carefully before participating in the rite. This is his sincere advice as an older brother who genuinely wants his younger brother to grow. Thorn is deeply moved. Chris then gives him an ash pill. Thorn recognizes its value and asks why Chris would give something so precious to him. Chris simply says it is because he is his little brother, and adds that he has already consumed something far better anyway. Thorn begins tearing up. He cannot understand how Chris could change so much, and wonders why he behaved like such a terrible person before, even when their mother was on her deathbed. He realizes how much pain his actions caused her. Chris looks at him before sitting beside his bed. He admits that he simply did not understand those things back then. Later, the carriage finally stops. Chris steps out and stretches, complaining about how sore his body feels after traveling so far. He wonders why they could not simply use a warp gate and calls their refusal petty, saying things will change once he becomes clan head. Mary suddenly flies over, excited that the two of them are going on a trip together, and joking that it is making her heart race. Chris reminds her that she does not even have a heart. Because the main family limited him to bringing only one companion, he could only bring Mary since their contract binds her to him. As they walk, Chris notices people talking about them. Mary points out that he is already famous. Simon soon approaches and respectfully addresses Chris as the young master. Everyone nearby is surprised to see the Dark Magic clan's head butler greeting someone like Chris. Simon remarks that Chris has grown considerably in only half a month. Chris asks whether the Elder Clan head really has nothing better to do. Simon explains that he is here specifically on the Elder Clan head's orders. The Elder Clan head wants to meet Chris personally. Simon notices that Chris does not seem surprised and asks whether he expected this. Chris says he was actually surprised, though Simon clearly does not believe him. They arrive at the clan head's room, where Simon announces that he has brought Chris. The Duke welcomes him and says it has been a while. Marion is also present. Chris immediately feels an overwhelming presence. The Duke's gaze alone carries enough pressure to make it difficult for Chris to stand. Despite knowing that someone of Chris's level cannot withstand such dark energy, the Duke does not bother suppressing it. Chris's hands tremble as he lowers his head and respectfully greets the Duke. The Duke asks whether Chris was surprised by the sudden meeting. Chris says he expected the Duke to call for him eventually because a new star has appeared within the clan. The Duke laughs and confirms that he is correct. Both Marion and Simon have already spoken highly of Chris. Yet the Duke remains uncertain about whether he should place expectations on him. He explains that no matter how promising a seed may be, only time will reveal what it becomes. It could grow into a great tree, or it could wither soon after emerging. Chris agrees that he is still too lacking to meet the Duke's expectations. However, he adds that only time will determine whether the sapling eventually grows into a great tree or becomes something abnormal enough to cast its own shadow over one. Regardless, Chris assures him that he will not disappoint him. The Duke laughs again and says that he will look forward to Chris's growth before dismissing him. After Chris leaves, Marion asks what the Duke thinks of him. The Duke admits that Chris exceeded his expectations. However, possessing such extraordinary talent means his future will be far more turbulent. Marion already knows that the bloody winds approaching the Magic Empire will soon reach them. Still, the Duke does not consider this entirely bad news. A small hope has sprouted today. Marion is surprised. The Duke says that Chris may truly be capable of fulfilling his long-desired wish. The eve of the sacred dark rite arrives. The guests announce the arrival of Count Khazar's eldest son, Christian. Chris enters looking exceptionally well-dressed. The guests wonder why the Duke would personally meet someone they once considered a fool and comment on his appearance. Chris confidently assumes they are admiring how handsome he is, while Mary enthusiastically agrees. He then spots alcohol and immediately heads toward it. The waitress stops him because he is underage and offers him ginger ale instead. The guests laugh. Chris cannot believe they are treating him this way and insists that he wants alcohol, not ginger ale. The announcements continue as the young lords and young ladies enter. The doors open, revealing the recognized successors. Escott, the second young lord, enters alongside Juliana, the first young lady. Jen, the second young lady, and Miss, the third young lord, also appear. Only 4 of the 5 recognized successors are present. Chris notices that the first young lord is absent. He wonders what Escott will say to him after being caught in Chris's earlier trap. To Chris's surprise, Escott simply walks past without saying anything. Chris is irritated that Escott will not even look him in the eye after everything he has done, concluding that he may be no better than Chris himself. Juliana, however, lifts her skirt slightly and gives Chris a polite greeting. Chris recognizes her and remembers Marion's warning to be careful around her. Yet he senses nothing unusual. He decides to figure it out later. For now, this is enough reconnaissance. He intends to return and prepare for the sacred dark rite. Before he can leave, a butler approaches and introduces himself as Flower, a summoner serving young Master Loin. Chris asks why that concerns him. Flower explains that he heard an unworthy person will participate in tomorrow's sacred dark rite. He claims an underqualified participant could cause an accident and stain the reputation of the great dark magic clan. Chris realizes that Flower is talking about him. Flower insists that Chris simply needs to prove otherwise. Chris looks toward the upper floors and spots Loin glaring down at him. Chris tells him that if he dislikes him, he should come down himself and settle it during the rite. Loin accepts, saying it will not inconvenience him. Chris says he would like to see what tricks Loin can perform. Flower suggests they fight immediately, but Chris points out that he is unarmed. Flower expects Chris to use a weapon, but Chris refuses to arm himself against someone he considers nothing more than a rat. Flower warns that Chris will regret his arrogance. Chris calmly replies that he thinks Flower will be the one regretting it. Chan and Juliana watch the exchange closely, particularly Juliana. The surrounding guests suddenly react with surprise. Flower is being overwhelmed by a swarm of spirits, while other spirits feed Chris grapes and attend to him like royalty. Chris simply sits there, completely unfazed by the spectacle. The guests are stunned by what they are witnessing. Flower had summoned the evil spirits himself, yet with a single gesture, Chris somehow turned them against their own master. Everyone wonders how he gained control of them so quickly. Chris asks whether this was young Master Loin's doing. He says such behavior is unbecoming of a direct heir of the dark magic clan and that, if Loin had a grievance, he should have challenged him openly. Loin denies having anything to do with the incident. Chris says nobody would believe such an obvious lie, but he decides to let it go this once. They can settle things during the sacred dark rite, where Chris intends to teach Loin some manners for his cowardice. The next day, the sacred dark rite begins. Chris arrives yawning and looking completely uninterested. Aloe asks whether he is not even slightly nervous after causing such a scene the previous day. Chris instead questions why Aloe came when he had already warned him not to participate. He calls him little brother, while Aloe angrily asks how Chris could postpone the rite after everything he has done and calls him crazy. Loin then descends the stairs, glaring at everyone as though he is above them. Before anything else can happen, an elderly voice asks whether everyone is gathered. The man introduces himself as Sebastian, the vice butler overseeing the main house. He announces that he will now lead them to the sacred ground where the rite will take place. Sebastian taps the floor with his staff, producing strange, shifting colors. Stairs suddenly appear beneath everyone. Chris recognizes that it is not a real staircase but an illusionary technique that materializes an imaginary space. Sebastian begins descending at an incredible pace, leaving the others struggling to keep up. They cling to the path and follow every turn, confused because they believed they were heading underground. Instead, the path continues downward at an impossible slope. Even Loin and Aloe struggle to keep their balance. Sebastian urges them to hurry, warning that the ground will not support them forever. Several participants lose their footing and fall into the surrounding void. Since they are already behind schedule, Sebastian increases his speed even further. More participants fall away. Loin dismisses them as losers who should know their place, but he is sweating heavily himself. Then he notices Chris effortlessly gliding past him without showing the slightest sign of exhaustion. Chris asks whether Loin is already out of breath, and mocks him for being all bark and no bite despite being a direct heir who should have received the best potions. Chris explains that running seriously through an illusionary space is pointless because it does not actually drain his stamina. With a slight adjustment to the spell, he can effectively become invincible within this realm. Sebastian is impressed and realizes that Chris must be young Master Christian. Eventually, they reach the sacred ground. The surviving participants are exhausted and gasping for breath, while Chris remains completely unharmed. Aloe asks how Chris can possibly be unaffected. Chris tells him that this is why he should have trained his body instead of wasting his time elsewhere. Another voice welcomes everyone. A crystal appears and floats through the room. The woman introduces herself as Rahu, the manager of the sacred ground. She explains that this place contains the purest form of dark energy known as the sacred darkness. Today, the young masters and young misses will compete to obtain this power, the same great darkness once pursued by the third-ranked demon king, the Dark Destroyer, progenitor of the dark magic clan. A blue light spreads across the ground beneath them. Rahu explains that there is not enough sacred darkness for everyone. The demon beasts within the sacred ground will test their worthiness, meaning the participants must compete to reach the darkness first. Chris immediately asks whether the winner is simply whoever arrives first. Rahu praises his insight. Chris then asks what happens if an unexpected situation causes competitors to encounter one another and fight. Rahu explains that each participant will follow a separate path, so such encounters should not happen. Even if they do, they should avoid fighting because wasting time only benefits the other competitors. She tells everyone to prioritize their own safety and wishes them good fortune. The countdown ends, and everyone rushes down their respective paths. Sebastian and Rahu remain behind. Sebastian jokingly suggests betting some blood juice on the winner, but Rahu disappears without answering. Sebastian complains that he has been ignored again. Meanwhile, Loin advances through his tunnel and encounters a swarm of beasts. The creatures attack with flames pouring from their mouths. Loin coats his hand with aura and strikes one directly in the throat before moving rapidly from beast to beast, eliminating them all. He judges them to be lower second-tier magical creatures, nothing worth worrying about for an upper 2-star fiend. Loin assumes Chris must be struggling badly. According to the rules, every path should have the same difficulty, distance, and time. However, Loin secretly bribed a mage to make Chris's path far more dangerous, ensuring that stronger demon beasts would attack him. Any deaths during the rite are overlooked, so Loin intends for Chris's path to become his grave. Eventually, Loin reaches a door and assumes it must lead to the sacred ground. Before he can celebrate, Chris asks what took him so long because he was nearly dying of boredom waiting. Loin is stunned by how Chris arrived so quickly. Chris says there was nothing difficult about his path. Loin insists that this is impossible because Chris should have faced much stronger monsters. He suddenly realizes that he has revealed too much. Chris smiles as he connects the pieces. He now understands that Loin was responsible for altering his path. Loin demands to know who Chris thinks he is to make such accusations. Chris points out that they are alone for the moment and asks whether there is any need for formalities. Loin insults him and reminds him that fighting between competitors is taboo during the rite. Nevertheless, he decides to crush Chris right there. Loin launches a magic combat technique designed for close-range attacks, using explosive magic power to damage opponents and disable their joints. Chris easily avoids every strike. Loin becomes increasingly frustrated and calls him a slippery rat. Eventually, Loin notices what he believes is an opening in Chris's hand and charges forward, intending to break him. Chris calls him a fool and catches his wrist instead. He locks Loin's arm into a joint hold and calmly tells him not to cry when it hurts. A sharp crack echoes through the chamber. Loin screams. Yahello soon arrives, asking whether he is too late, only to find Loin and another competitor lying on the floor. He asks whether Chris did this. Chris calls Yahello painfully slow and asks whether he intends to faint on his own or needs another beating. Yahello insists that he has not been sitting around doing nothing and challenges Chris. Chris immediately defeats him again. He calls the situation familiar and assumes someone will eventually come looking for them if he simply leaves them there. Chris then focuses on the reason he came. 5 years from now, the first great war against the Alliance will begin. Before then, he must bring the entire dark magic clan under his control. That means he cannot afford to share even a fraction of the sacred darkness with anyone else. With the obstacles removed, Chris finally approaches the sacred darkness. This power gives fiends the possibility of becoming true transcendent beings. The Duke, who absorbed roughly 80% of it, became one of the strongest beings alive, even among the demon monarchs. The Dark Destroyer absorbed more than 90% and became a demon king. Chris realizes that if he could somehow absorb 100% of the sacred darkness, he might even surpass the demon emperor. He slowly extends his hand. The sacred darkness begins flowing into him through every pathway. Elsewhere, the observers are stunned. Every participant except Chris has been eliminated, and young Master Loin is in critical condition. Some suspect Chris used a trick or a forbidden magic tool and insist that the incident must be thoroughly investigated and punished. Jen dismisses the concern. She explains that Chris has not emerged from the sacred ground for 2 days. Unless absorbing such an enormous amount of sacred darkness simply requires that much time, he has already been crushed by its power and died. Even the Duke eventually reached his limit in how much sacred darkness he could absorb. There should not even be a corpse left behind. Jen leaves the room and closes the door behind her. She is furious. Even if Chris somehow returns alive, she intends to kill him herself. Her father died during his battle against the Alliance, leaving only her and Loin to be adopted by their uncle, Viscount Langham. Because of that, her position within the clan is already unstable. Now that Loin has failed to obtain the sacred darkness as well, He has little chance of gaining support in the succession struggle. Jen blames Chris for this humiliation and vows to make him pay for it. Some of the clan members continue mocking Chris for remaining inside the sacred ground, assuming he must already be dead, and that his greed brought this punishment upon him. They even mock Mary, saying she will soon be waiting for her master's ghost. Mary quietly tears a hole through one of their bags as a warning. She sweetly says that she is patiently waiting for her young master, but if they keep making noise around her, she will turn them into ghosts under her control. The frightened men immediately apologize and run away. Mary returns to her cheerful demeanor and urges Chris to come back soon, saying that keeping a maiden waiting is not gentlemanly. Meanwhile, Chris is struggling inside the sacred ground. The endless darkness presses against him and makes it difficult to breathe. He has absorbed around 70% of the sacred darkness, but the process is far more difficult than expected. He knows the real danger begins around 90%. If he absorbs too much, his core will shatter and he will die here before the war even begins. Then he realizes something. Dragons possess enormous cores capable of storing tremendous amounts of energy. If he could temporarily imitate a dragon's heart, even for a few minutes, he might be able to contain the sacred darkness. He attempts to do exactly that. More energy begins entering him, but his core starts showing signs of breaking apart. Chris realizes he has reached his limit and prepares to stop. Mafina suddenly appears before him and asks whether he wants her help. Chris is startled that a demon can appear inside this space. Mafina explains that demons can communicate through darkness, so entering this place is not difficult for her. More importantly, she can help him absorb all of the sacred darkness without asking for anything in return. Chris asks why she would do that. Mafina simply laughs and extends her hand, telling him that he only needs to take it and she can help him absorb everything. 1 week later, the Duke sets down his cup. With no news from Chris, he admits that it is difficult to believe the boy is still alive. Marion wonders why Chris would push his greed this far. Simon explains that Count Langham shares the same opinion and wants to close the passage leading to the sacred ground. The Duke considers the matter and asks Simon whether he should give the order. He then admits that he is only testing the old man and asks Simon whether he believes the reckless child is still alive. Simon says the odds are almost zero, but Chris is too interesting for him to say that with certainty. The Duke thinks for a moment before deciding to leave the passage open for one more day. Marion sighs with relief, while Simon leaves to spread the order. Inside the sacred ground, Chris's pathways are overflowing with pure dark energy. His heart aches, and his core feels as though it could explode at any moment. Mafina again tells him to take her hand before it is too late. Chris stubbornly refuses. Mafina calls him foolish and reminds him that humans are not meant to cross certain limits. Chris becomes irritated. He suddenly remembers that this place is a world governed by concepts, and that gives him another possibility. Chris's hair turns gray, his eyes become red, and red horns emerge from his head. He has activated demonization. Mafina is shocked. Demonization is the Mystic Clan's ultimate technique, a forbidden spell that temporarily transforms a mortal into a demon and grants explosive power. However, it is extremely dangerous and can kill the user. Lena once died after using it. Chris realizes that if he removes the portions of the technique designed to amplify dark energy, he can instead use the world's own dark energy without suffering the usual penalties. He begins forming a container and gathers the surrounding energy inside it. The method works. He can now absorb more than 90% of the sacred darkness and potentially claim all of it for himself. Mafina is stunned when Chris forms a black crescent. She cannot believe that an ordinary mortal has managed to shed his human limitations. Chris simply attributes it to his genius. As he leaves the space, he tells Mafina to continue living her life while he takes his leave. Mafina says that she will see him again someday. Chris turns around just before the portal closes and raises his middle finger at her. Mafina remains silent for a moment before understanding the gesture and bursting into laughter. Chris curses her as he leaves, insisting that he would be crazy to ever meet that troublesome demon again. He then wonders how much time has passed. He estimates that about a week has gone by, meaning the clan must already be in chaos. Chris dispels demonization and decides that it is time to play another prank. Not long afterward, a butler rushes into the Lord's office and announces that Chris has returned. Everyone is shocked that he is still alive. The acting clan head orders the butler to explain. He reports that Chris survived with his life barely intact and is suffering from extreme exhaustion. According to the healer, Chris's core is sensing an enormous amount of pure dark energy, but the energy is in complete disorder, making it difficult for him to use. One of the clan members curses Chris and claims that someone like him could never have absorbed more than 80% of the sacred darkness. Another demands that Chris take responsibility for wasting such a precious resource. The acting head coldly tells them that he will take note of the matter and dismisses everyone. Once they leave, he asks another man whether the report is accurate. The man confirms that he observed Chris with a healer and that something is clearly wrong with his core. The acting head continues tapping his fingers against the table. He explains that Loin was supposed to become the young lord, serving as the sacrificial lamb and a key part of their plans involving the Poison Magic clan. Their larger eradication plan involving Jupion has now been postponed. As for Chris, his existence is becoming troublesome, especially because his father is beginning to pay attention to him and his rise is disrupting the balance they carefully established. After more silence and tapping, the acting head orders them to bring Chris to the Darkness Hall the following day. There, he will publicly announce Chris's punishment before the clan's vassals. The next day, Chris is summoned to the Darkness Hall. He immediately realizes that they are desperately trying to eliminate him, especially since so many important figures have gathered. The acting head asks whether Chris is aware of the sins he committed during the sacred dark rite. Chris calmly confirms that he is. The acting head then asks him to explain himself. Chris says that his fellow participants were unworthy of their lineage, so perhaps he should have beaten them even more thoroughly. One of the women present becomes furious. The acting head explains the real accusation. Chris monopolized a precious resource of the Dark Magic clan but failed to produce a result worthy of receiving it. Chris asks how they determined that. He is told that 70% purity is the minimum standard. Chris asks what punishment awaits someone who fails to reach 70%. The acting head explains that such a person would be denied access to the Dark Magic clan's inheritance of dark magic techniques. They would also be permanently barred from the main family's grounds and denied succession to the house of Count Khazar. Chris remains unconcerned and points out that even they cannot properly measure the purity of his dark energy in its current state. At that moment, Eskit raises his hand and offers a solution. Although Chris's core is currently unstable, Eskit suggests using a dark energy clash to determine his purity. A dark energy clash is a battle designed specifically to compare the purity of two people's dark energy. When the amount of energy is equal, the one with greater purity overwhelms the other. Even among energy of similar rank, the pure energy will eventually prevail. Chris realizes that this is a perfect opportunity for them to destroy his core. He also realizes that Eskit is more sinister than he expected. Before the clash begins, Chris establishes a condition. If he produces a sufficiently impressive result, the clan must support him and allow him to attempt the young lord's trial. Several people are shocked by the demand. His brother agrees, pointing out that there is no rule preventing someone from a branch family from pursuing the position of young lord. In the Magic Empire, strength determines who stands above the weak. Chris steps onto the stage. His opponent warns him that a dark energy clash can damage the core if the user lacks sufficient control. To keep things fair according to their ranks, he will only use dark energy at the beginner 2-star level. As they begin releasing their energy, Chris tells his opponent not to bother holding back and to worry about protecting his precious core. The man releases his dark energy, saying that Chris's confidence has made him look forward to this. The moment their energies collide, Chris completely overwhelms his opponent's beginner 2-star dark energy without even gathering any strength of his own. The man is stunned. He immediately increases his output to expert 2-star dark energy, but the result remains the same. Chris looks disappointed and mocks him for acting so arrogant despite being this weak. The taunt enrages him, and he releases a massive amount of aura. The spectators immediately recognize it as 4-star dark energy and realize that a direct hit would shatter Chris's core. A dragon-shaped mass of energy forms around Chris. In response, his opponent creates an enormous dark claw, so large that the dragon looks like an insect beside it. Chris calmly reminds him that a dark energy clash can damage one's core if they lack sufficient control, so he should be careful. The attack tears into his opponent's core, causing him to cough up blood. Chris withdraws his energy, disappointed that the attack was not enough to completely shatter his opponent's core. The man, however, realizes the truth and announces that Chris's dark energy has at least 90% purity. Everyone is shocked. Chris turns toward the acting head and declares that he has now proven himself worthy of becoming a young lord. The acting head remains expressionless, continuing to tap his fingers against the table. As promised, he agrees to let Chris attempt the young lord's trial. However, no member of a branch family has ever taken the test before, so as acting head, he will personally select Chris's trial. Chris immediately realizes that this means he intends to give him an impossible challenge. His qualifications will be judged in 2 stages. First, he must prove his talent. Then, he must accomplish a feat worthy of a young lord. Chris asks how he is expected to prove his talent. The acting head tells him to reach 3 stars within 3 months. Chris remains calm and asks if that's all, saying that as a genius he should be able to accomplish it. The acting head says nothing more and simply looks forward to seeing what Chris achieves over the next 3 months. Later, the acting head sits across from Eskit in a quiet room while drinking tea. He admits that underestimating Chris was his mistake, especially since the dark energy clash even damaged his own core. They need to deal with Chris quickly before he becomes an even greater problem. The younger man tells him not to worry. He reminds him why they deliberately avoid absorbing more than 70% of the sacred darkness. The higher the purity of the absorbed dark energy, the harder it becomes to increase its rank. The difficulty rises exponentially. Reaching even 3 stars would take someone who absorbed 90% several times longer than it would take others. No matter how talented Chris is, he will eventually hit that wall. Meanwhile, Mary serves Chris a meal and tells him that news of his performance has spread throughout the mansion. She proudly tells him that he has made her happy, and admits that waiting for him has made her realize how she truly feels. Every day he was gone felt like an eternity to her. Chris is embarrassed by her honesty. Her words remind him of his previous life. He remembers the fox girl worrying about him and the saint assuring her that his agility would keep him safe. He also remembers how they had both shown genuine concern for him. After surviving a life filled with bloodshed and people who wished for his death, Chris realizes that he has finally encountered people whose hearts are filled with warmth. As Mary prepares his blood juice, Chris finally tells her what he could not say before. He is grateful that she waited for him. Mary becomes shy, delighted that he has finally understood her feelings. Chris reminds her that she does not even have a heart. Mary jokingly replies that her heart was stolen by him. Since she waited for him, Chris decides to reward her by taking her for a walk. Mary becomes ecstatic and immediately dresses up. As they walk through the garden, Chris thinks that relaxing once in a while is not bad. However, he still has to reach 3 stars within 3 months. Even with the guidance of the Branch family's tutors, controlling more than 90% pure darkness by himself will be extremely difficult. A voice interrupts his thoughts. Chris turns around and finds his aunt. She asks whether this is really the time for him to leisurely wander around the garden, and whether he has found someone to assist with his training. Chris asks if she intends to teach him herself. She tells him that she does not. Instead, she has found someone else. Chris sends Mary away, telling her that he will see her at dinner. As they descend the stairs, Chris thanks his aunt for thinking about her nephew despite not knowing who his teacher is. She tells him he should not thank her yet. He will understand once he meets the teacher. The man's teaching methods are harsh, and not even her siblings could keep up with his training. She warns Chris that an opportunity like this will not come often, so he must not disappoint him. When they reach the bottom, Chris spots a child standing there. He wonders whether the boy is lost, and seeing how young he looks, casually pats him on the head and asks where his parents are. The boy's expression immediately makes Chris realize his mistake. His aunt tells him to show some respect and greet him properly. This child is the incarnation of the clan head. Chris straightens up and greets him. Dark energy begins radiating from Chris, and the clan head is surprised to discover that he has absorbed more than 90% of the sacred darkness. He acknowledges that Chris has accomplished something remarkable, but tells him that absorbing so much was still a foolish decision. Chris does not disagree. The clan head explains that even he, having absorbed 80% of the sacred darkness, encountered walls far higher than those faced by ordinary fiends. Even their progenitor could not have reached his current level without the blessing bestowed by the demon emperor. He cannot imagine how difficult Chris's future path will become. Because of that, he offers to return some of Chris's dark energy to the ether. With Chris's talent, 80% would already be more than enough. Anything beyond that is simply greed. Before he can finish, Chris asks him why the dark magic clan has become so weak. His aunt immediately becomes alert. Chris explains that although the dark magic clan is not on the level of the mystic magic clan or undead magic clan, the two clans regarded as the heaven above the heavens, it is still considered the weakest among the 12 noble clans. He says the Dark Magic clan has prospered greatly compared with previous generations, largely because of the clan head's achievements. Yet other fiends still say the clan is no longer what it once was. Chris believes there is only one reason: they lack enough absolute stage individuals above 8 stars. The clan head remains silent. Chris knows what will happen in the future. When the Demon King of Carnage attacks the Dark Magic clan, Nordian will already be dead. Only a handful of 7-star fiends and no 8-star fiends will remain. Together with the clan's 10,000 soldiers, they will fight the Demon King. They will lose and eventually be forced into slavery. That is why absolute stage combatants of 8 stars and above are so important to the clan. Chris knows the Elder Clan head must already be worried about this. The clan head agrees that Chris understands the situation well, but he remains concerned that the weight of such immense pure dark energy will crush Chris and prevent him from growing. Chris asks whether he is truly satisfied with simply strengthening the clan. Perhaps Chris can overcome these obstacles and become a being of limitless power who rises above everything. The clan head laughs, admitting that Chris certainly knows how to speak. He tells Chris that he will not regret his decision. Dark energy suddenly forms beneath Chris's feet, engulfing him within seconds. When Chris awakens, he finds himself in a forest. A voice tells him that his first task is to inherit the pure dark energy. Chris is confused. The voice simply tells him to survive. Behind him, a hungry 2-headed bear appears. Chris immediately senses the danger. Elsewhere, the clan head observes him through a magical sphere. Chris's aunt realizes that this is a trial and questions whether throwing a 2-star child into a 4-star magic beast's territory is truly appropriate. The clan head responds by summoning another rock lizard. Marion apologizes to her nephew, admitting that her words have made the trial even harder. The clan head explains that as Chris continues struggling to survive, he will eventually encounter the true nature of pure dark energy. Understanding comes fastest and deepest when someone is pushed to the brink of death, though he hopes Chris does not get seriously hurt. Sitting on a couch, the clan head asks Marion if she has prepared the snacks. She reveals a box full of sweets, which he immediately starts eating. He wonders why using dark energy always makes him crave sweets. He then turns off the lights, explaining that watching the results in complete darkness is much better, and excitedly settles in to observe his grandson. Meanwhile, Chris faces both a 2-headed bear and a rock lizard. One direct hit from either could kill him. The lizard spits poison, and Chris barely avoids it as the venom melts through a tree in seconds. Still, Chris considers this nothing more than a training assignment. He calls out to the clan head asking whether he is listening. Since there is no response, Chris assumes the only answer he will receive is defeating monsters far stronger than himself. His aunt quietly thinks that the clan head simply wants to watch him get beaten around, but Chris confidently prepares to defeat them in one blow. The bear charges. Chris immediately recognizes that its speed and strength are overwhelming and dodges the attack while searching for a weakness. From the observation sphere, the clan head praises his talent, noting that Chris's movements are unlike those of ordinary children. Marion agrees that his skills are impressive, but reminds him that Chris is still just a child. Before either of them can say more, Chris has already defeated the bear, leaving them stunned. The clan head asks how he managed it so easily. Chris explains that although the bear possesses tremendous physical strength and defense, its agility and magic resistance are comparatively weak. He exploited that weakness and injected dark energy directly into its heart at the right moment. Marion is shocked by the technique, but before she can finish speaking, the clan head identifies it as Dark Death, one of his favorite techniques. Chris then realizes that he has not dealt with the rock lizard yet. The creature immediately attacks, but Chris dodges its strike. The second head follows with another stream of poison, forcing him to evade again. Chris realizes that the lizard has 3 hearts and will continue regenerating unless all 3 are destroyed simultaneously. He changes his approach, forming dark energy into ropes that wrap around the creature and completely restrict its movement. He then pulls with tremendous force, destroying the entire monster and shattering all 3 hearts at once. The clan head identifies the technique as an applied version of dark destruction. He complains that he cannot see properly and asks Marion to move aside. Then he wonders whether she taught Chris the technique. Marion immediately denies it, insisting that she has no idea how he learned it. The clan head remarks that such techniques are not normally something that can simply be learned, while another voice suggests that if everything had to be taught, there would be no need to learn dark magic at all. The clan head remains silent. With the trial complete, Chris is transported back to reality. He admits that he had to think carefully during the trial, but considers it a valuable lesson, giving the clan head credit for creating the situation. Marion and the clan head remain quiet. Chris explains that thanks to the clan head, he has learned how to apply dark magic on his own. He has no intention of becoming arrogant, but now he is ready to begin full-scale dark magic training. He orders the others to leave and they follow. Marion worries that the clan head may be pushing Chris too hard. Before the first magic transfer, the clan head asks Chris what he thinks dark magic is. Chris answers that it is the power to dominate an opponent through perfect darkness. The clan head asks what he means by perfect darkness, leaving Chris without an answer. Instead of explaining, the clan head tells Chris to watch carefully and unlocks a mysterious seal. The entire area begins shaking as dark energy surrounds them. He explains that this is the beginning of all darkness. If Chris descends the deep stairs, the 12 abysses will await him, where he must devour the Lord shrouded in darkness. A massive amount of energy gathers before the clan head's hand, forming a dagger made from pure darkness. He swings it once. Chris feels the attack despite the distance. It represents death itself, and a single strike could kill him. The space behind him is split apart, and he struggles to breathe after realizing the blade passed directly across his neck. The clan head explains that it is a sword of ideas, one that cuts only what its wielder intends to cut. The sword disappears. Before leaving, the clan head gives Chris 1 month to sharpen the black sword he has just witnessed, without explaining how he is supposed to accomplish it. Chris is left confused. The next morning, he begins an intense training routine, running around the training grounds before performing one-handed push-ups. His body becomes drenched in sweat, and he removes his shirt, revealing a far more defined back. But that image is only a dream. In reality, Chris still has a long way to go and remains thin. He sits down to meditate and reminds himself to return to training. Pure dark energy forms around his hands and takes the shape of a dagger, but the attempt quickly fails. Chris is frustrated after losing count of how many times he has failed. Even when he successfully manifests the dagger, it lasts for no more than 10 seconds, and it is nowhere near as powerful as the clan head's black sword. That sword had felt far more primal, as though it represented darkness itself. Chris recalls the clan head's words about climbing the deep stairs and facing the 12 abysses, along with the mysterious phrase about seeking and praising wisdom. He concludes that there must be a hidden meaning within the incantation. Exactly 1 month later, Marion and the clan head descend toward the training grounds. The clan head assumes Chris should have failed enough times by now to understand his limits. He asks Marion if she is still worried about him. She explains that there must be a faster method because only about 2 months remain before the successor test. The clan head reminds her that with the purity of the dark energy Chris absorbed, rapid growth is nearly impossible. Even if he forces his progress, he will eventually hit an enormous wall. For now, strengthening his foundation is the better choice. When they arrive, they are shocked to see Chris already manifesting a black dagger. Chris tells the clan head that he figured it was time for him to return. He credits the clan head for helping him reach 3 stars faster than expected. Before he can finish, the sword disappears. Chris admits that maintaining it is still beyond him, and that what he can currently produce is little more than an imitation. He explains that it took him about a week to manifest the black sword, but it felt incomplete. He believes the 12 abysses mentioned earlier refer to the sword containing all 12 attributes of mana. The clan head is stunned. Chris has not only exceeded his expectations, but has understood the true purpose of the task. According to the clan head, most people need an entire year just to manifest a basic black sword, while a lifetime may not be enough to comprehend all 12 types of mana and awaken the true black sword. Chris has accomplished all of this in less than a month. The clan head begins to see him as the only hope that may emerge from the cursed demonic path. He tells Chris to prepare himself because starting tomorrow, his training will become far more difficult. Chris remains confident and says he trusts the clan head. Having cleared the first hurdle, he decides he deserves a drink. He heads to the winery, acting excited as he moves around the place, and chooses an expensive liquor he could never have afforded in his previous life. He decides to drink it before Mary can find him and take it away. A voice calls out to him. Chris turns and sees a beautiful 3-star demon. He immediately notices that her eye colors suggest she is not from the dark magic clan. When he asks whether she knows him, both she and her attendant are stunned. She becomes furious at his response and strikes him with mana, knocking him to the ground. Her attendant tells her to leave him alone and says there is no reason to associate with someone like Chris. As she turns away, the clan head from the trial arrives and takes the wine bottle from Chris. Chris angrily demands to know who the woman is. The clan head explains that she is Princess Marissa of the Venom clan. Chris immediately realizes the problem. Marissa may be his fiancée, or more accurately, his former fiancée. Chris is now in a difficult position, realizing that his actions may have just caused another problem. Meanwhile, Marissa walks through the corridor, visibly furious. In a flashback, 8-year-old Marissa is playing with ants, wondering why her father brought her to the dark magic clan when everyone only wants to talk to her brother. Nearby, the adults gossip about her, calling her an illegitimate child and questioning whether the Duke has lost his mind. Since his son is useless, they assume he is trying to marry his daughter into another family to secure a capable successor. Feeling someone nearby, Marissa looks up and sees Chris. He asks why a child is wandering around alone. It is the first time Marissa has seen him, and she is immediately charmed by his appearance. She corrects him, saying that she is not a child but Marissa. Chris calls her by name and introduces himself as Christian von Baron Khazar. Marissa realizes he is the son of Count Khazar. Chris tells her not to worry about what the adults say and suggests that she pay them back when she grows stronger. Marissa initially hesitates, but then declares that she will become the strongest demon and crush everyone who looks down on her. Even the original Chris is impressed by her ambition. Marissa is surprised by his encouragement, but Chris stands up and decides that if she truly intends to become the strongest, he should stay on her good side. He offers his hand and calls her the future strongest demon lady, asking her to show him around the dark magic clan estate. Marissa's face turns bright red. Back in the present, she tries to push those memories away. Their engagement was arranged to maintain peace between the two families, but she once dreamed about the future they might have together. Now that version of herself is gone. Rumors about Chris's terrible behavior have reached her for years, and she has long since stopped believing in the person she once admired. With tears in her eyes, Marissa arrives at the Patriarch's office. The Patriarch welcomes her and asks why she has come. She explains that a relic has appeared in the neutral zone between their two families. She asks what the Dark Magic clan intends to do, especially since the Venom clan claimed the previous relic. The Patriarch asks whether the Venom clan intends to surrender this time. Marissa says they do not, and asks whether he would do the same if their positions were reversed. He understands that she wants a fair competition. Marissa proposes that each family send an exploration team, with whichever side finds the relic first keeping it. To prevent direct conflict, each team will be limited to 10 demons at 3 stars or below. She explains that heavy losses would only benefit their enemies, especially with the current instability in the Four Kings domain. The patriarch taps the table before accepting her terms. Marissa finds his quick agreement suspicious. He adds one condition. If the Venom clan violates the agreement, the Dark Magic clan will claim both the new relic and the one the Venom clan took previously. When Marissa asks what would constitute a violation, he mentions underhanded tactics such as sabotaging or ambushing the opposing team. Since traps and ambushes are the Venom clan's specialty, Marissa understands exactly what he means. With a serious expression, she promises that they will not break the agreement and accepts the condition. The patriarch then asks whether she will personally lead the Venom clan's exploration team. Marissa confirms that she will. He says he looks forward to seeing the famed strength of the 10,000 Venom. Marissa gives him a formal farewell and says they will await the Dark Magic clan's team on the day of the expedition. After she leaves, the patriarch remains silent for several seconds before standing and staring at a chessboard. He picks up the Black King and knocks over the White Queen. As the Black King remains standing, he remarks that a beautiful stage filled with screams has been prepared for Marissa. 2 months pass, and the seasons change. While Chris dedicates himself to training, others begin changing their own paths. Some struggle with love they have lost, others fall behind after losing competitions, the jealous sharpen their blades, and several begin preparing for the future. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure remains hidden. Chris eventually faces the acting head again. The man orders him to prove his worth. Chris takes the opportunity to summon his dark blade. His older brother's expression immediately darkens. Chris notices their reactions and finds them amusing. Meanwhile, the clan head has previously warned him not to reveal the true black sword. Doing so could cause them to assign him an even harder trial simply because they now know how talented he is. Following that advice, Chris deliberately holds back. He is already looking forward to seeing their expressions when they eventually discover the truth. The acting head acknowledges Chris's achievements and assigns him the second trial. The clan will soon send an exploration team to search for the relic that appeared in the neutral zone. Since the Venom clan will also participate, the acting head says that if Chris earns enough merit during the expedition, he will recognize him as a successor candidate. Chris finds the offer suspiciously easy and asks whether he will be participating alone. He learns that he will join the unit led by the second princess, Jupion. The acting head explains that this mission originally belonged to Roy. He treats it as an opportunity far beyond Chris's current position and tells him to consider it an honor. Chris accepts the order without protest. After he leaves, his brother asks their father whether he is worried that Chris will earn even more merit. The acting head stops him and tells him not to worry because everything is proceeding according to plan. He simply needs to be ready when the right moment comes. Outside, Chris thinks that he expected to be sent on a life-threatening mission, yet something about this assignment feels wrong. He remembers what he knows about the original timeline. The successor candidate at this point was never supposed to be Christian, it was Roy. But Chris never heard anything about Roy during the Great War. Later, Chris is forced to listen while the Foxwoman explains the Demon Amulet incident, a relic conflict between the Dark Magic clan and the Venom clan that was never widely known outside the two families. Although the Dark Magic clan's entire expedition team was wiped out, the Venom clan also suffered losses. For some reason, both sides concealed what happened. According to her, the incident became one of the seeds of the coming disaster. Nordion eventually dies at the hands of Marquis Ranum. Without that event, the bloodletting Demon King would not have conquered the Dark Magic clan so easily. The Demon Amulet incident therefore accelerated the Age of Destruction. Since the Dark Magic clan's expedition team was annihilated, Roy's position in the original timeline has effectively been replaced by Chris. However, without solid evidence, acting prematurely would be too dangerous. Chris is still only a 3-star fiend and cannot change much yet. For now, the best option is to prepare. As he gets ready to leave, Jupion stops him and asks where he thinks he is going. Chris questions why she cares. She explains that she heard he is joining the exploration team and says she dislikes the idea, but he will be filling in for Roy. Chris says he will not have to do anything immediately. Jupion takes this as another insult toward her brother and says that an idiot like him would probably accomplish nothing anyway. Hearing her insult her brother, Jupion suddenly throws a dagger at him. Chris clearly sees the movement and calmly dodges it without flinching. Jupion is shocked by how effortlessly he followed the dagger's trajectory. Chris considers that enough of a greeting and tells her that since they clearly cannot stand each other, they should simply stay out of one another's way. Before she can respond, he leaves, saying he has other matters to attend to. Jupion retrieves her dagger, visibly irritated. Chris not only followed its movement with his eyes, but deliberately waited until the last moment to dodge. She realizes he knew exactly what she was trying to do, and begins to suspect that he may be far more dangerous than she expected. With nothing else to do, Chris wanders through the city. He grabs a beer and tries to drink it, only for the innkeeper to pull it away because he is underage. He then heads to a gambling table and wins a considerable amount of money. Afterward, he runs around with several sticks of meat, eating freely while the child beside him looks depressed by the sight. Chris enjoys finally having a break and thinks he could happily spend his time doing nothing. While continuing to eat, he searches for a particular shop, but realizes he needs to deal with the people following him first. He suspects they were sent by the acting head. Suddenly, a mysterious figure grabs him and tells him to stay quiet. Chris looks over and finds a beautiful girl. He asks who she is, but instead of answering, she explains that someone was following her and that her people already dealt with them. Chris finds that difficult to believe, considering she has already gagged him and dragged him away. Chris asks who she is, and she explains that she is connected to the Four Kings' dominion. Chris is shocked. She says she is working to stop the unrest spreading throughout the Dominion and asks him to move somewhere more private. She then asks if he is willing to cooperate. After a brief silence, Chris tells her to lead the way. As they move deeper into the alleys, Chris asks how far they are going. She continues explaining that demons throughout the king's domain have been disappearing without a trace, while even the supposedly safe areas of the city are being destroyed day by day. The Dominion is already plagued by conflicts between three families, while the family head ruling the region has no concern for ordinary demons. She believes that eliminating the criminal forces will require cooperation between multiple families, but she cannot ask for help without offering something in return. So, she gives Chris information that could calm the situation within the Dark Magic clan. Marquis Wrangham is secretly cooperating with a high-ranking member of the Venom clan, and their goal is to assassinate Princess Marissa of the Venom clan. Chris is immediately shocked. They are not only targeting him, Marissa is also in danger. He cannot understand why they would go this far. If both families lose important figures, the people manipulating the Dominion will become even bolder. Eventually, the balance between the 12 demon clans could collapse, leading to an even greater disaster. She asks Chris to prepare himself for the upcoming expedition. Then she reveals her face, her expression filled with determination, and says that she hopes he will become the Dark Magic clan's successor and stand against those threatening the peace. Chris is confused that she even knows about the relic expedition, but he acknowledges that her intelligence is impressive. Still, he refuses to trust her without proof. He asks why he should believe anything she says, and tells her that if she truly wants cooperation, she needs to put something on the line. She is stunned by his demand. Chris makes it clear that if she has no collateral, she can leave. She tells him to wait and reaches inside her robe. What she pulls out immediately catches Chris's attention. Afterward, Chris bids her farewell and walks away. Behind him, a figure emerges from his shadow and asks why she cannot reveal her true identity to Chris. The demonic figure explains that it is for her own protection. If Chris is placed in danger and accidentally reveals her information, the situation will only become worse. She begins transforming and says that for now she will continue watching from the sidelines. Her name is Adrin. Meanwhile, Chris walks normally for a while before suddenly laughing. The reason is simple. She gave him a VIP card. It is exactly what he has been looking for. The card grants access to the Dark Auction House, a secret marketplace dealing in smuggled relics and rare creatures. Only nobles and verified wealthy buyers receive entry cards. In his previous life, none of the hero party possessed one, making entry extremely difficult. The card bears the name Ria de Wolfman, a name Chris has never heard before. He remembers everything that happened earlier but knows it is still too soon to trust Adren completely. For now, he decides to prepare a little more for the expedition. Chris finds a man and asks him to send a message by carrier pigeon. The man tells him to write the message himself. Chris writes something that remains unreadable to us before sending it away with a cute owl. With that handled, Chris decides it is time to visit someone connected to his next objective. Disguised as a masked, elegant noble, Chris heads to the black market. A guard stops him immediately, saying that someone like him has no place there and telling him to leave. Rather than argue, Chris simply shows his VIP card and asks whether the guard still feels the same way. The man's attitude changes instantly. He apologizes and offers to show Chris inside. The moment Chris enters, he is surrounded by luxurious goods and rare items. Meanwhile, he is busy collecting aura points from everything around him. An attendant approaches and respectfully asks whether he is truly Ria de Wolfman. Chris confirms that he is Ria de Wolfman for today and asks if there is a problem. The attendant finds his voice suspicious because it clearly sounds like a man's voice, but he decides not to question it. Chris then asks to be escorted to the branch manager. The attendant freezes for a moment, Chris simply waves the card in front of him and asks whether he heard his request. The attendant immediately leaves to fetch the manager. Chris is escorted into a luxurious private room. Looking around, he remarks that everything is top-notch, which is exactly what he expected from the Rudolph Merchant Guild. The Rudolph Guild is a massive organization powerful enough to rival the Union's Deer Guild. It controls black markets and major trade routes throughout the Dark Empire. There is even a saying that if Rudolph cannot obtain something, nobody can. A flashy woman soon enters. She introduces herself as Rubid, the branch manager of this auction house, and the head of the Rudolph Guild. After sitting down, she asks Chris what he is looking for. Chris removes his mask and tells her to bring Rowena to him. Rubid is immediately surprised and asks what he means. Chris asks whether she does not know Rowena. Acting innocent, Rubid says that Rowena is the guildmaster of the Deer Guild and claims that even they cannot summon a guildmaster of the Union whenever they want. Chris puts on a sinister expression and says that cannot be right. Rowena is standing right there. The woman immediately goes silent. She tries to pretend that she has no idea what he is talking about, but Chris tells her that the relic must be working exceptionally well. He says that they will be seeing each other often, so she should stop pretending. With no other choice, she removes the relic. Her body immediately begins glowing, revealing her true appearance. The woman is Rowena. She asks how Chris discovered her identity. Chris continues smiling. In his past life, he made plenty of mistakes, and Rowena took advantage of him financially. He has already paid her back several times over. In the present, he criticizes her for using such an inferior relic, despite being the head of the Rudolph Guild. He even says that the disguise is sloppy. Rowena thinks that he must be bluffing, because there is no way he can actually see through the relic's effects. Chris continues provoking her, even claiming that her face is too large for the disguise to cover properly. That finally gets a reaction from her. Rowena fires back, saying that he is not Rhea Wolfman either. She has heard about Chris's growing reputation throughout the Dark Empire, including stories about his refined style, but his current behavior does not exactly match that image. Since he is using a stolen identity to enter a members-only business, she says he cannot complain if she throws him out. Chris becomes irritated and asks who is threatening whom. He threatens to spread rumors that a Union rat is secretly doing business inside the Dark Empire. Rowena immediately gives in and asks what he wants. Later, Chris leaves the building looking satisfied. He got exactly what he needed from her. Rowena considers the encounter nothing more than blackmail, while Chris thinks that what he took from her will help save the world. Of course, it will not dramatically increase their overall strength, but it should be enough to interfere with some of Marquis Wrangham's plans. Elsewhere, several demons are training. As Chris walks away, someone stops him and asks why he is wandering around instead of training when the expedition begins in 2 days. Chris says that he has spent the entire day fooling around and is tired. He plans to be as useless as Roy, so there is no reason for him to train. He bids them farewell and leaves. The red-haired girl becomes irritated, but another girl tells her to leave Chris alone. She doubts someone like him can accomplish anything anyway. Still, she privately wonders why he has no interest in earning merit. It will be his loss, but she cannot understand why he continues acting like an idiot. Later, Chris is standing with the same girl while looking over several plants. She asks what he plans to do with them. Chris tells her it is none of her business and continues examining the herbs. She then drops a wooden case. Inside is an elegant fan. She tells Chris that he is not exactly in a position to be picky these days. As Raina prepares to leave, she tells him that she does not know what he is planning, but she will keep her identity secret. Chris says they will see each other again soon. Raina says she would rather that not happen. Chris then calls her by both of her names and warns her that a war could break out. She immediately turns around. Chris points out that she travels between the Union and the Dark Empire, so she should understand how unstable the current situation is. If war breaks out, the routes between the two sides will close. She would eventually be forced to cut off either the Union or the Empire, which would reduce her profits by half. Raina says that he is making a huge assumption and treating a serious matter like a child's game. But Chris's next words silence her. Considering the rumors coming from the Dominion lately, he says the possibility of war is not complete nonsense. She thinks to herself that Chris is right. The atmosphere has been getting worse, and more families within the Dominion are pushing for war with the Union. As she reads a letter stating that the Dark Magic clan may be planning to start a war with the Union, she asks Chris why he is telling her all this. She reminds him that she is only a merchant and cannot stop a war. Chris agrees, but asks her to become his sponsor. In return, he promises to help create a future where war never happens. She is confused and asks how he plans to accomplish that. Chris explains that for the Dominion to wage war, its forces must pass through the southern magic nation where the Dark Magic clan resides. If he becomes the heir and prepares properly, he can prevent the worst from happening. That is also her only chance of protecting half of her future revenue. Chris extends his hand. Looking into his eyes, she realizes he does not look like a liar. She decides that investing in him might actually be worthwhile. They shake hands. She warns him that if he betrays her trust even once, their relationship is over. Chris assures her that he does not speak with two tongues. Internally, however, However, he knows there are plenty of reasons to exploit her. He tells her to take care, calling her a money grubber. That evening, Chris begins processing the herbs he collected. Since a high-ranking member of the Venom clan is involved, he decides he should prepare an antidote. It has been a while since he last made one, so he wonders if he still has his old skills. As he boils the herbs over a special stove, memories from his past life return. Chris once learned medicine from the noble house of medicine. At the time, he struggled to prepare medicine properly while a sick woman kept ordering him to fan the flames harder. Her name was Ella, the 26th head of the medicine clan. She explains that some herbs only release their effects under intense heat, then tells Chris to stop complaining and keep working. Chris first met her on the battlefield during the First Great War. Although she was young, she had no choice but to fight after the bloodletting Demon King annihilated her clan. The noble house of medicine had been the greatest of the Union's 7 great houses in healing arts, making them a major threat in the Demon King's eyes. Even Ella could not escape his blade. Back in the present, Ella watches Chris prepare medicine and remarks that he is an unusual person. With only a rough explanation, he managed to recreate one of the clan's elixirs. She regrets meeting him so late, especially under such circumstances. Chris mocks the so-called noble house for having a sickly leader. Ella coughs and explains that the only reason she survived the Demon King's attack is because of her own medicine. Blood appears as she coughs again. She says she cannot simply lie around when countless people are still suffering in this hellish world. As Chris turns away, she tells him that it is tragic that the house of medicine will end with her. Chris tells her not to cling to the past and to focus on recovering. She smiles before reaching for a pile of books. One of them contains the clan's secret techniques. Only part of the knowledge survived the war, but she wants Chris to have it. Her coughing grows worse, and Chris tells her to rest. She grabs his hand and asks him to save those suffering in her place. If he does, she says she can die peacefully. Chris remains silent for a moment before asking permission to call her his master. Ella smiles, joking that she can hardly teach anyone properly. Still, she believes she chose the right disciple. Later, Chris becomes the 27th head of the noble house of medicine. Because the books were damaged, he could never fully master the clan's secret techniques. Even so, he traveled across countless battlefields and continued treating the wounded in fulfillment of his promise to Ella. That is how he eventually became known as the Saint of the Battlefield. Back in the present, Chris finishes the antidote. He quietly calls out to his master, wondering if she is living peacefully somewhere. Even in this life, he intends to keep the promise he made to her. An eagle soars through the sky. Meanwhile, at the house of Count Khazar, Raiden receives a letter from Chris. He already knows from his sister that Chris has obtained the Dark Core. As he reads the letter, his expression becomes serious. He immediately tells his attendant that preparations must be made for his son. Soon after, the expedition begins at Baskin Mountain, the border between the Dark Magic clan and the Venom clan. The team leader orders everyone to move in pairs. Chris immediately says that he will go alone. She objects, pointing out that moving at his pace would take forever. The Venom clan has already searched much of the area and will probably reach the relic before them. She also warns him that Class 4 or stronger demon beasts can appear here, meaning he should not expect anyone to rescue him if he gets into trouble. Chris tells her not to drag everyone else down and produces an antidote capable of countering the Venom clan's poisons. She says she has already taken one. Chris insists that his antidote is far better than their cheap versions and tells her to take it even if she thinks he is bluffing. He swallows 2 himself before telling her to do whatever she wants. That irritates her. Marissa then arrives and asks whether internal conflict has already started. Chris calls her a slowpoke. With a straight face, Marissa says she arrived exactly on time and that he is simply impatient. Chris taunts her for not cheating by scouting ahead. Marissa reminds him that the rules forbid setting traps or ambushing the opposing team during the exploration. She warns him to watch his tone. Chris says they are enemies, so there is no reason for them to speak formally. Marissa steps closer, but he tells her there is no need for this. She orders the Dark Clan members to move out. The Venom clan begins its own exploration after checking their supplies. Chris quietly drops something before announcing that he is leaving. Everyone is surprised when they realize he has abandoned his communicator. Chris heads deeper into the mountains alone, hunting demon beasts. In his past life, he traveled across the demon lands endlessly, so he can recognize beast habits almost instinctively. To find a Class 4 beast, however, he will need to venture much deeper. He briefly thinks about Marissa and wonders if she was actually worried about him. He dismisses the thought, saying she seems like the kind of woman who would not bleed even after being stabbed. More importantly, Marquis Rung's schemes have already begun. There are no assassins around yet, but Chris knows they could appear at any moment. Before worrying about that, he needs to find the relic. Suddenly, he notices movement. It is Marissa. The two stare at each other awkwardly. Chris realizes he has accidentally entered the Venom clan's route and apologizes, saying that their paths have crossed by mistake and that he will head elsewhere. Marissa nervously tells him to be careful. That triggers another thought. Their real objective is to harm Marissa. Chris wonders who within the Venom clan is powerful enough to sacrifice her. He asks her whether she is an illegitimate daughter and whether her family hates her. Marissa is stunned. She thinks Chris truly is the worst person alive. Chris realizes he phrased it terribly. Even in his previous life, he was never treated like a real member of his own family, so he understands that he crossed a line. He apologizes if his words were rude. Before he can say more, something grazes him. Marissa attacks. She tells him to apologize properly as tears stream from her eyes. Chris is surprised by her reaction. Judging from how genuinely angry she is, this does not appear to be a simple family dispute. He needs to identify whoever is behind the assassination attempt to understand their true motive. Until then, Marissa remains in danger, even within the Venom clan's expedition team. If reinforcements do not arrive, all they can do is buy time. Chris points out that Marissa is breaking the rules. She does not understand what he means. He points toward the tree. Her attack struck first, meaning the Dark Clan should have the right to claim the relic. Marissa disagrees. She says that after insulting her family and reminding her of the disgrace surrounding their broken engagement, her actions count as self-defense. She pulls out several bottles of poison. Marissa throws them toward Chris, covering him in poisonous mist. She asks how he likes her blue bloom poison. With a single signal, she can trigger it and force the poison through his veins. She demands that he apologize. More bottles explode around him, filling the area with poisonous fog. Then a hand emerges. Chris grabs Marissa by the wrist and looks directly into her eyes. He tells her that he cannot do that. A blue aura spreads around him. Chris tells her that there is a reason people call her the Little Venom. He has heard that detoxifying her poison is extremely painful. Marissa pulls her hand back in shock. She insists that it is impossible because only she possesses the antidote. Chris explains that he studied the Divine Healer clan and created his own antidote based on their methods. As he starts thinking about what to name his new pill, Marissa can only stare at him in confusion. Before Marissa can say anything else, Chris knocks her unconscious. As she loses consciousness, he catches her and tells her to rest, promising that he will save her. Although she managed to collect the relic's aura, Chris ruins her plans by tying her to a tree. He then takes her communication amulet and uses it to send an order to her team. When the Venom clan members receive the message, they are confused. It orders them to scout the cliffs on the opposite side of their current location. Meanwhile, Chris is relieved that he no longer has to deal with the Venom clan members. He rushes through the vast terrain, explaining that relics infused with the power of demons or constellations are either ancient artifacts hidden for ages or objects that have recently fallen from the heavens, as if challenging the creatures of Earth to make use of them. The relic discovered this time is most likely the Twilight Amulet. According to his future knowledge, the artifact was initially neglected because its powers were uncertain. 2 years later, Marquis Wrangham finally figured out how to use it after extensive research, and that discovery eventually led to the death of the clan head. Chris cannot allow the same thing to happen in this life or let it accelerate the destruction of the world. Suddenly, he notices something and slows down before dropping from a tree. After checking his surroundings, he notices a damaged leaf. Then he spots footprints in an area where no one should be living. Since relics cannot grow legs and walk away, someone must have arrived before him. Still invisible, Chris overhears 3 people nearby. The person in the center curses someone as a worm. Chris immediately analyzes them. The man in the center appears to be from the Venom clan and is a 4-star. The woman beside him seems to be around 5 stars. The mysterious man beside them does not possess Venom clan energy, and his core is strangely murky. The man curses Marissa, saying that she is responsible for all their problems and would be better off dead. From the way he speaks, Chris concludes that he is likely a direct heir of the Venom clan, and that this is connected to the succession struggle. The mysterious man asks whether he should wipe out all the pests, meaning every participant in the expedition. The heir says that would be ideal since they already agreed to hand over the relic. When someone asks what might be inside the box, the heir tells them it is none of their concern, because the relic will be handed over to Marquis Wrangham. Their only task is to take care of Marissa. The group follows his orders and leaves. Chris realizes that only the least threatening-looking man remains. He could probably defeat the 4-star without much trouble, but there is no reason to fight him directly. Instead, Chris looks for a way to steal the relic without causing a commotion. Then he notices a group of monkeys. A wicked smile appears on his face. While the remaining man is yawning, a huge amount of waste suddenly lands on his head. He realizes that he has been hit by actual animal droppings. The monkeys begin fighting among themselves because Chris has secretly manipulated them with dark energy. While the man is distracted, Chris grabs the relic box, but instead of simply taking it, he decides to play a prank. He takes out the summoning stone the Count Tyranne gave him, an artifact capable of storing a Class 4 demon beast.
A small spacer rift appears.
Chris reaches inside and pulls out another box identical to the original. He had modified the second box beforehand, making it look brand new. Without hesitation, he swaps the 2 boxes. Then he opens the real one. Chris is stunned. Inside is the Twilight Amulet. Later, Marissa regains consciousness. She realizes she is tied to a tree and remembers encountering Chris. Her anger immediately returns. She cannot believe that he apologized and then pulled something like this. Before she can continue complaining, a voice calls out to her. Someone was specifically looking for her. It is Malin. She asks whether Marissa is truly the princess of the Venom clan. Marissa asks who she is. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Jupion looks down at the antidote she brought. One of her guards asks why she gave another pill to Chris. Even Jupion wonders why she bothered trusting him. A member of the team reports that their current area is clear. Jupion asks whether the far side is still being searched, and her assistant confirms that the other group is heading toward them. He wonders whether Chris will be all right. Jupion considers several possibilities but ultimately cannot understand why he left on his own if he expected her to help him. Before she can think further, someone announces that they have found the relic. A box is handed to her. Jupion says it took longer than expected, but they still reached it before the Venom clan. With the mission, apparently, complete, she orders everyone to regroup at Lanka's Canyon. One member reminds her that finding the relic does not necessarily mean they have beaten the Venom clan. Jupion thinks about Chris and wonders whether he is dead. She orders the first and second squads to remain behind and search for him. A red-haired member complains that Chris is not worth the trouble. Jupion disagrees. He may be troublesome, but he is still a blood relative of the main house. Even if all they find is his corpse, they must bring him back. Before they can begin searching, a massive explosion erupts from one of the mountains. At the same time, the roots behind them collapse. The team realizes that every escape route has been blocked. Jupion orders everyone to stay alert. They are under attack. Suddenly, blue flowers spread across their bodies. Cloaked figures watch from above. One of them explains that it is over because she used Blue Bloom, Marissa's ultimate poison. She stole it from Marissa's laboratory, ensuring that suspicion would fall on her. The woman descends from the cliff. Although using the poison this close to the Dark Clan's outpost is risky, she believes eliminating everyone is the safest option. Afterward, she plans to plant the relic inside Marissa's laboratory. A dagger suddenly flies toward her. She dodges it easily before drawing a poison-coated weapon. She says she has no choice but to kill Jupion and mocks her, claiming that even at full strength, Jupion would not have been much of a challenge. Jupion realizes that the woman is at least a 5-star demon. She cannot believe Marissa would betray them so openly. The woman charges forward. Jupion moves aside just before several poisoned needles strike the attacker. Marissa has arrived, accompanied by Melon. The woman is shocked that Marissa escaped. She had ordered her mole to guide Marissa toward the canyons. She becomes even more nervous when she sees Melon, the vice captain of the Black Swamp Knights. Melon praises Marissa for arriving so quickly. Marissa tells him to stay quiet since they are not close. She then confronts the veiled woman for trying to frame her. Marissa demands that she reveal her identity. The woman simply tells her to know her place. She raises her hand and summons reinforcements. Melon assesses the situation, 2 3-stars and 1 5-star against them. Jupion realizes that whoever planned the attack knew the expedition lacked high-level fighters. If things continue like this, everyone will die. Then a voice comes from the top of the cliff. Someone remarks that meeting them here is quite the coincidence. Jupion and Marissa look up in shock. It is Chris. He looks completely relaxed, as if everything is going according to plan. Chris concludes that everyone must have missed him. Jupion immediately disagrees. Marissa simply says they need to talk later. The cloaked woman mocks the reunion and asks whether they really think they have a chance just because one weakling has arrived. Marissa knows the woman's assessment is correct. Once someone reaches 5 stars, their entire existence begins changing. Even all of them combined would struggle to defeat her. Chris casually comments that she is getting pretty confident for a mere 5-star. He reaches into a spatial portal. Then he calls everyone over and throws 3 artifacts toward them. Jupion and Melon recognize their artifacts, but Marissa is shocked by hers. Chris asks whether she does not want it. Her expression makes the answer obvious. Jupion, however, immediately begins overflowing with mana after receiving hers. She is stunned by how powerful it feels. Chris privately thinks that he did not give her anything particularly terrifying. Melon received the strongest artifact, but activating hers requires a different method. A flashback reveals that Chris had previously sent Melon a note. It warned her that someone was targeting the expedition. Chris had prepared a relic specifically for her and instructed her to protect Marissa and her team. He also included the exact method required to activate her relic. One of them asks where Chris even found these artifacts. Chris simply says he has his ways and that he needs to leave now. Melon reminds him that he promised they would duel after everything is over. Chris agrees, tells them not to die, and bids them farewell. Marissa asks why he isn't fighting with them, only to realize that he has already disappeared. Before she can curse him, Jupion says Chris probably has a plan and that she has the same feeling. Marissa notices the dreamy expression on Jupion's face and wonders why she is defending him. The arrogant 5-star dismisses them, saying a few toys won't hurt her before releasing a wave of poison energy. Jupion immediately becomes tense. She recognizes Black Steel Chi, a destructive force that only 5-stars can wield. Melon raises her swords and reminds them of Chris's words. Star ranks do not determine the outcome, and arrogant people are often destroyed by their own arrogance. Jupion agrees, saying she has always wanted to crush people who rely solely on their overwhelming strength. Melon tells them to follow her as she leads the charge. Jupion tells Marissa to move, but Marissa is still staring at her artifact. With no other choice, She puts on the frog-shaped headband and prepares for battle. Jupion proposes a bet over who can defeat their opponent first. Melon takes the 5-star woman. The woman becomes furious and launches poison needles, but Melon blocks them easily. Using her superior mana, Melon gets behind her and lands a powerful strike. She creates distance and launches another series of attacks, eventually injuring the woman. The woman mocks her, calling her a bug and insulting the Black Swamp Knights. Despite being nervous, Melon asks whether she is really a 5-star because her attacks only feel like a tickle. Enraged, the woman charges and grabs Melon's face, releasing a curse directly into her. She cannot understand how a 4-star's curse is affecting her. Melon explains that her artifact not only boosts her strength, but also amplifies her curse power through her blood. As the woman freezes, she realizes that Melon deliberately took the attack. Before she can recover, Melon finishes her. Nearby, Jupion has already subdued her opponent as well. Elsewhere, Chris's remaining opponent calls out to him, asking whether he is planning a sneak attack and mocking him for being afraid. Chris finally steps out. He tells the man that he has been wondering why his core is so murky. Since he clearly isn't from the Venom clan, Chris wants to know his real reason for being here. Chris picks up a stone and throws it at him. The stone barely grazes him. Chris throws several more. The man dodges most of them, but one strikes his mask. Chris explains that whenever he becomes tense, his right shoulder rises, and when distracted, his field of vision narrows. He calls it a bad habit and tells him to fix it, referring to him as Brother Ish. Since his identity is exposed, EST removes his mask. A flashback reveals that ESHT's father had ordered him to eliminate Jupion and Marissa. If Chris escaped, ESHT was supposed to track him down personally because no one could be allowed to survive the expedition. However, things did not go according to plan. Jupion's unit survived, and Melon joined them. Because of this, eliminating everyone became uncertain. If ESH killed Chris now, someone might investigate the incident. Since ESHT had not been at the estate, suspicion could eventually reach his father as well. Chris asks why he has gone quiet and whether he is scared. Instead of answering, ESHT manifests a sword from his dark demonic energy. Chris immediately becomes tense. EST attacks, but Chris cuts through the strike. Suddenly, several copies of ESHT surround him. Chris realizes that he is creating clones from demonic energy and admits that ESHT did not become a candidate for Young Lord by luck. Chris struggles to defend himself as EST charges from another direction. Chris suspects an illusion and attacks him first, but when their attacks clash, Chris realizes even that opponent was another illusion. The real ESHT appears behind him and lands a devastating strike. The impact fills the area with rubble. ESHT believes he has cut Chris in half, but then hears his voice. Chris emerges from the debris holding the true black sword. ESHT is speechless. Chris launches a simple attack with the sword. Even after ESHT creates 3 layers of dark energy to defend himself, the attack tears through them and leaves him seriously injured. On the ground, ESHT is furious that he is being humiliated by a branch family brat. Chris tells him to accept defeat quietly. If EST does, Chris will keep everything to himself. Fighting between the families would only cause trouble for Marquise Langam, and Chris has no interest in creating unnecessary conflict. ESHT is shocked. He realizes Chris knew about the entire plan. That means Chris must be killed. But after seeing the difference in their strength, Isht knows he cannot do it now. He has no choice but to retreat and try again later. Isht thanks Chris for saving his reputation. When they shake hands, Chris suddenly tightens his grip. ESHT realizes it is a clash of demonic energies. Before he can use his superior demonic energy, Chris crushes his core and seriously injures him. Chris tells him that his promise was fake anyway. Having finished playing with his toy, Chris runs back toward his group. He realizes he spent more time than expected and wonders how long they have been fighting. Then, 3 familiar voices call his name. Jupion, Marissa, and Melon approach him. Chris immediately becomes uncomfortable and tells them not to come any closer because their presence is overwhelming. Marissa explains that it is because of the artifact he gave her. Melon reports that they completed his orders. Chris asks what happened to the poison users. Melon says they died and turned to ash shortly afterward, leaving little evidence behind. Marissa wants to say something but decides to remain silent. Jupion asks where Chris came from. He claims he was simply scouting around and says that someone of his status should not be participating directly in battles anyway. Marissa questions why he would return injured if that were true. Then she asks whether there were more traitors within the Venom clan. Chris is caught off guard and avoids answering, telling everyone to retreat. He privately thinks that he deliberately dealt with ESHT farther away. By now, everyone involved should have regained their senses and fled, or their subordinates should have come to retrieve them. Chris meant what he said about keeping quiet. Making the incident public would only provoke Marquis Langam. With the stolen constellation insignia and 3 survivors, he already has more than enough. A week later, Chris is lying at a table surrounded by food. Because of the incident, the Venom clan was placed in a difficult position, but the matter was settled through a mutual agreement. The main reason was that they knew Chris was aware of ESHT and Marquis Langham's involvement. It was still a much better outcome than his previous life, when everyone had been slaughtered. Duke Wam also did not have to hand over the demon amulet to Marquis Langham. Melon returned to the Dark Clan immediately after leaving the canyon, while Marissa promised to keep Melon's involvement secret before departing. Now Marissa is sitting beside Chris, trying to feed him. Chris refuses, saying his entire body still aches. Marissa says that hearing him in pain hurts her heart. She begins imagining herself feeding him and even dressing him, which makes Chris uncomfortable. He points out that her heart was beating earlier. Marissa denies it, claiming that her heart races whenever she sees him, and she even shakes her entire body trying to prove it. She grabs a huge spoon and tries to feed him. Chris insists that he can eat by himself, but Marissa ignores him and shoves the food toward his face, saying he needs a balanced diet to stay healthy. Jupion sits across from them in silence. Marissa proudly says that the food is filled with her love. Chris asks Jupion how long she plans to stay since she has already recovered. Jupion says she will leave after monitoring his condition a little longer, then awkwardly claims that she is responsible for him. Marissa says that staying so long will only give him indigestion and starts acting jealous, asking whether Jupion has no shame flirting with him. She offers Jupion some blood juice, but Jupion refuses and says she prefers scallop juice. Marissa becomes disappointed because that is not her specialty. Jupion continues staring at Chris. When he asks whether she has something to say, she says that she hates him and will crush him someday. Chris makes a face and tells her to get ahead, but Jupion suddenly turns red and quietly thanks him for saving her. Chris is surprised and asks her to repeat herself because he could not hear her. Embarrassed and annoyed, Jupion says it does not matter if he didn't hear it. She was simply acknowledging what he did. Then her expression turns serious. She warns Chris that his smile will disappear soon because Marquis Langham has promised that he will officially be named a noble son. Once that happens, everything will change. In other words, Chris had better be prepared. Even Chris knows that until now, he wasn't worth trampling. But the moment he becomes an heir, everyone will come after him. Once EST recovers his core, he'll return, along with the first princess who is hiding a secret, the youngest prince, the third son known as the Berserker, and even the Mad Prince. Things won't be like before. Chris also wonders whether Jupion will become one of his enemies. Suddenly, Jupion asks Chris if he thinks she's pretty. He has no idea where that came from. When he doesn't answer, she simply says she's leaving and walks away. Chris sighs in relief, saying he needs to relax and grab a bite. Another voice interrupts him. It's Marissa. Chris looks at her in surprise as she asks if he's doing well. He says he's almost fully recovered, followed by an awkward silence. Chris wonders why she's here and suspects it might be because he tied her to a tree during the expedition. Instead, she tells him that her father wants to meet him. Her father is Duke Wam, head of the Venom clan and one of the few 8-star demon lords. Chris wonders why someone of his stature would want to meet him. As they walk, Marissa asks how Chris knew about the plot. He simply says he has an informant. A flashback shows Melon introducing herself as the vice captain of the Dark Clan's Black Swamp Knights and explaining that she infiltrated the expedition under Chris's orders. Marissa becomes angry, asking whether Chris ordered her to break the expedition rules. Melon cuts her off, explaining that someone was targeting Marissa, so she was ordered to help protect her from the infiltrators. Back in the present, Marissa asks why Chris didn't warn her if he already knew. Chris explains that if the Venom clan was involved, Marissa, as their heir, would naturally be the prime target. Marissa asks why he never suspected her and quietly thanks him for saving her. Chris tells her that she's important to him. Marissa immediately turns red, wondering how he could suddenly say something like that when their engagement is already over. Then Chris ruins the moment by explaining that he means they should become political allies for now. He calls it a reasonable proposal and asks whether their past engagement makes things awkward. If so, she doesn't need to worry. They don't need to get back together or restore their engagement because they're practically strangers now. Marissa's expression darkens as she wonders how she ever fell for someone this dense. She looks ready to break his bones, but agrees because the alliance would benefit both families. Chris wonders if he said something wrong. They soon reach a door, and Marissa announces that she has brought Chris from the Dark Clan. Inside is Duke Wham. He thanks her, then reminds her that he told her to call him father instead of patriarch. With a serious expression, Marissa tells him to control himself because they're in front of a guest. He agrees and suggests they have dinner together. Marissa immediately takes her leave. Chris realizes that Duke Wham and Marissa seem to have a good father-daughter relationship. He's surprised that one of the Dominion's overlords is such a doting father. As Marissa leaves, still visibly embarrassed and annoyed, Chris finally begins his conversation with Duke Wham. The Duke says Chris seems more mature than the rumors suggest, though thinking about what he did to Marissa still makes him want to tear him apart. He quickly returns to normal, however, because without Chris's intervention, his daughter would have been in serious danger. He decides to let the matter slide. Chris wonders why he summoned him. Duke Wham asks about his connection to the Medicine Clan. He explains that he was told Chris purchased medicine through the auction, and the Venom clan closely monitors medicinal ingredients sold through the black market. However, the Medicine clan has made no recent moves. Chris thinks for a moment before simply admitting that he made the antidote himself because he's a genius. Duke Wam points out that creating an antidote requires complete knowledge of the poison. Chris says a genius can understand such things just by reading books. The Duke is intrigued. Since Chris hasn't committed any crime, there is nothing he can interrogate him over. Chris is relieved that the misunderstanding is cleared, but the Duke has one more matter to discuss. Chris is shocked when Duke Wam offers him a position within the Venom clan. Elsewhere, a woman storms into a room and tells Marquise Langham that Eschit's core has been shattered and that Chris must be responsible. The old man tells her to lower her voice. She becomes even angrier, saying that a brute is about to become the leader. If that happens, the Dark Clan's honor will be ruined. When he remains silent, she says that perhaps it is for the best. Since both of them failed, she will deal with Chris herself. The old man simply tells her she can do whatever she wants, but he won't get involved. A ruined chessboard sits nearby, showing that the pawn has defeated the knight. Season 2 begins on the day of Chris's prince investiture ceremony. Mary flies around him, praising how good he looks in his suit. As Chris walks through the corridor, he meets his father, who praises him. Mary continues hyping him up, and Chris thanks his father. His brother then appears and is forced to call Chris by an embarrassing title because he lost their bet. He bites his tongue before finally saying it. His father notices Marissa approaching and asks Chris whether he has apologized to her for their broken engagement. Chris imagines her reaction and admits he hasn't had the chance. His father says Marissa is an exceptional girl before cutting his son off and congratulating him. When Marissa approaches, she asks whether everything is all right with his father. Chris realizes this is why his father ran away. Marissa explains that she also came to congratulate Chris. Since he'll be busy with his new position, he'll be handling family duties now, meaning they will be seeing each other often. Chris tells her to take care of him. She then asks what his father said to him the other day. Chris says his father told him to marry her. He quickly adds that he refused so his father won't bring it up again. Marissa is shocked and immediately launches a deadly attack at him. Chris has no idea what he did wrong. He eventually reaches the main hall, where all the important members of the clan are gathered. Several nobles discuss how Chris became a prince, saying it must have been difficult for someone like him to earn enough merit. Suddenly, the entire room falls silent. Even the Duchess is shocked when the clan head himself appears. She leaves her seat, wondering why he came when he hadn't even attended her son's ceremony. Her aunt explains that she expected this. In a flashback, she had warned the clan head that attending Chris's ceremony would make it obvious that he openly supported him. Alerting the clan head and other high-ranking members, the old man had simply replied that Chris claimed he would become the divine head, so he shouldn't be afraid of something like this. Back in the present, the clan head is shocked that the elder himself has come and immediately bows. The old man takes his seat. The ceremony begins. Chris bows before the family head and is officially inaugurated as a prince. He thinks that becoming a prince of the Dark Magic clan also means the Age of Destruction is drawing closer. With his current strength, he can't do anything. He needs to grow stronger, build power and influence, and become the Grand Prince as quickly as possible. As he looks toward the sky, he suddenly sees a massive dragon flying overhead. The creature abruptly lands and scans the gathering until its eyes settle on Chris. A huge wave of energy erupts toward him. The guards immediately create defensive barriers. Chris is stunned as they struggle to hold back the attack. His father worries about him as the dragon continues wreaking havoc. Even the higher-ranking demons become concerned as the defenses begin to weaken. Then the old man speaks. He says the necromancer family has sent them quite an interesting gift. A gigantic skeletal dragon emerges from the ruined courtyard. The terrified spectators freeze. Chris's father frantically calls for his safety. His aunt steps forward to shield him, but the stoic clan lord watching from above commands her to stand down. She argues that the creature is an undead dragon sent by the rival necromancer family to assassinate Chris, making his survival nearly impossible. Remaining completely unbothered, the clan lord adjusts his luxurious robes, raises a hand to clear the area, and casually declares the crisis a martial test, expecting the young successors to slay the beast, while the other terrified youths panic, hide, or pretend to fight like Mayasak. Jupion accepts the command without hesitation. She launches forward, cracking the paving stones beneath her feet. Lady Julian watches with an amused smile, noting her sister's hot-blooded nature. Jupion channels raw purple demonic energy into her glowing blade and unleashes the splitting sword art, bringing it down with an explosion of purple lightning. When the smoke clears, the skeletal beast remains completely unfazed. Jupion lands and clicks her tongue in frustration. The dragon swiftly retaliates, its colossal tail sweeping through the dust and striking Chris, drawing a cry of pain as someone shouts a warning from the sidelines. Chris notices a glowing purple insignia on the dragon's decaying flesh. He recognizes it as the mark of the dead from the forbidden necromancy house, a spell used to control corpses. The pulsing mark continues pumping, reanimating energy into the beast, making Chris wonder why the rival house would attack during his inauguration. The dragon ignores everyone else and focuses entirely on Chris. He dodges its swipe and realizes the enemy may have intentionally disrupted his inauguration. The beast roars, sending a shockwave that forces Chris to dig his heels into the stone. It then spreads its massive, tattered wings and launches into the air, scattering debris while hovering in a cloud of purple aura. It dives, creating a localized hurricane. Chris guards against the gale as his clothes whip around and cobblestones tear from the ground. While sliding backward, he realizes the unnatural wind pressure is also coming from the necromantic mark. Jupion's sword and ordinary demonic energy are useless against it, and there is nothing inside its chest but hollow bone. Chris abandons his usual lethal strategies. He's frustrated that he can't use light magic, the natural antithesis of the undead, especially in front of the Dark Clan. As the undead dragon prepares another freezing dive, Chris braces himself. He cannot counter it, but he refuses to yield. Suddenly, a commanding voice tells him to move. A soft, confident laugh follows, accompanied by the calm click of pristine heels against the ruined stone. Lady Julian steps forward, playfully commenting on Chris's lack of ability as she passes him with dense dark energy swirling around her fingertips. Without looking back, she offers to clean up the mess and effortlessly draws a beautifully crafted bow. A physical vortex of demonic energy whips around her hair before condensing into an arrow of blinding purple light. The ground trembles from its pressure. Chris watches in awe at the sheer scale of her magic. Julian releases the string, sending a shockwave through her gown. The dark arrow races across the courtyard like a comet, blinding the onlookers and drowning out the dragon's roar. It pierces the beast's skull without resistance, drilling directly into the necromantic core and detonating a massive explosion of opposing dark energies. The dragon screams as its unholy connection is severed. Its entire skeletal body pulverizes into falling ash, while the glowing purple mark flickers and disappears. Julian casually lowers her bow, completely confident in her shot. Chris stares at her back, realizing how overwhelming her power is. He estimates that her strength exceeds ESHT's and places her at least at the 5-star level, despite rumors claiming she was only a 4-star. The crowd erupts in shocked murmurs as the hierarchy suddenly shifts. Chris wonders if this is what his aunt warned him about, while others marvel at Julian's enormous magic capacity. The nobles realize that Julian is the true monster, and several sycophants immediately begin praising her. Chris notices how instantly she condensed her energy without Jupion even sensing it. He realizes Julian deliberately acted like a fool to hide her strength from ESHT's political maneuvering. Her unusual archery technique also perfectly resembles the legendary obsidian art. Julian turns toward Chris with a cheerful expression completely free of killing intent, and playfully comments on how rowdy his inauguration has become, despite the destroyed courtyard. She then sincerely congratulates him on becoming a young lord. Chris looks at her with genuine gratitude and thanks her for saving his life. The dragon is finally gone, though Chris can't believe he had to face an undead dragon at his own inauguration. The nobles whisper among themselves. Some predict that Chris is destined for disaster, while others recognize him as a serious political threat. Chris remains stoic until Melon suddenly blocks his path. The muscular warrior from the Black Swamp Knights tells him that no other candidate has shown such rapid progress. To everyone's shock, the notoriously fierce knight declares Chris's achievements unparalleled and drops to one knee, pledging her eternal loyalty. The bystanders are stunned. Melon, known as the Mad Dog, has never bowed her head to anyone before. Chris is pleased that she arrived at the perfect moment. He crouches down and thanks her for the perfectly timed public support. Melon tells him to keep his promises and fight to their heart's content, quietly reaffirming their agreement to duel each other eventually. The moment is interrupted by Cassine Tyrman, the eldest son of House Tyrman. He steps forward and offers his family's full support as a gift from his father. He also has another request. Cassine brings forward his younger brother, Alos. Chris casually asks about Choco, Alos's pet, immediately agitating him. Cassane forces his brother to bow. Cassane then asks Chris to accept Alos as his subordinate. Alos begins crying and desperately begs his brother. Chris understands the strategic value for House Tyrman. By standing beside him, Alos can build achievements, while House Tyrman can establish a connection with someone outside the direct scions. Chris also remembers Alos's future potential and the achievements he made during the Age of Destruction. He feels guilty for taking all of that away from him in this life. Chris agrees, but strictly on his own terms. With a terrifying glare, he commands Alos to serve him as his absolute master. Alos screams in terror, Melon and Kassane smile calmly, while other nobles, seeing this massive shift in power, eagerly rush forward with gifts of their own. Everyone watches the spectacle. Chris's father realizes that his son is rapidly gaining the support needed to become the Grand Young Lord. From the shadows, the Countess watches with her son Mayasak and promises that she will personally remove Chris soon. Elsewhere, in a quiet outdoor setting, the old man speaks with Chris's aunt. The clan lord says there is no need to formally greet Chris yet. The necromancy house's attack has already drawn enough attention. His aunt anxiously changes the subject to Julian, suspecting that her combat power is far beyond the records of a 4-star. The ruthless clan lord cuts her off, saying his only goal is to make the Dark Clan the strongest. If Julian's ambition allows her to reach the top, he would gladly make her the patriarch. Likewise, whoever can surpass her would also earn his approval. Elsewhere, in a dead rocky forest, 2 masked figures stand among the mutilated corpses of the elites they have just slaughtered. One of them, the white-haired young Master Val, removes his mask and mentions an interesting rumor about a younger brother in the House of Baron. One subordinate mockingly questions why their enemies would keep a crazy bastard like Val in their ranks. Val instantly impales him through the chest with dark magic. The second subordinate scrambles backward, begging for his life and calling them comrades. Val calmly says they are no longer comrades before blasting his hand through the man's chest with dark purple magic and killing him. Sighing at the boring slaughter, Val turns away from the corpses and says that everything here is boring. His subordinates ask where he is going. Val says it is finally time to return home and show his face to his family after being away for so long. He smiles and adds that he also wants to see his brother. Meanwhile, Mary continues teasing Chris and trying to remove his clothes. Chris receives a letter from his younger brother asking how he is doing, noting that it has already been a week since the ceremony. Since then, his brother has been training in the curse magic Chris assigned to him and making good progress. He has also been completing 1,000 swordsmanship movements every day, so he isn't neglecting his physical training. Thanks to this, his body feels lighter than before. He ends the letter by saying that the next time Chris visits, they must spar because his goal is to defeat him. After reading the letter, Chris promises himself that he will make his younger brother even stronger than he was in his previous life. That way, he can become one of Chris's hidden cards during the Age of Destruction. Jupion, who has also finished training, asks Chris what he's looking at that has him smiling. Chris tells her that his younger brother sent him a report and that he considers both his brother and Jupion to be his hidden cards. Jupion points out that aside from basic exercises, she has never seen him train seriously and asks whether he trains in secret. Chris says he has his own methods. They argue when Jupion says there is nothing special about that because he couldn't even land a hit on the undead dragon. Chris mocks her for failing to scratch it either. He then offers her some advice, but she refuses to listen. Chris tells her to separate the illusion from herself. If she doesn't, the illusions won't be able to move freely. Jupion is surprised by his knowledge of illusion magic. Chris casually claims he studied it for 3 months. She is stunned and calls him arrogant. Chris says he's simply a genius, though in reality he learned it from a 9-star archmage in his previous life. Before they can continue, a voice mocks Jupion for talking to a branch family insect. Mayasak starts insulting Chris until Jupion calls him disgusting and says his mouth smells like a sewer. Mayasak asks whether she is taking Chris's side. Jupion says she hates Chris too, but Mayasak is even more disgusting. Mayasak mutters that Jupion is arrogant and that if her father hadn't earned enough merit, he would have gotten rid of her already. Chris pinches his nose and agrees that Mayasak really does smell like a sewer. Enraged, Mayasak releases his killing aura and declares that Chris is courting death. He claims Chris couldn't possibly have earned his achievements through merit and must have manipulated the situation with his words. Chris recognizes Mayasak's powerful demonic energy as a benefit of being a direct descendant of the main family. However, Mayasak is only a low 4-star, so he isn't Chris's opponent. Chris provokes him, saying that if he doesn't trust his abilities, they can settle it with a demonic energy clash. Mayasak takes the bait, and Chris is pleased that he finally got him to agree. Before they can begin, Freya arrives and scolds Mayasak for releasing his demonic energy. If they really want to fight, she tells them to set a proper date. She then tells Chris that she has something to discuss with him. Chris immediately realizes that he has caught a much bigger fish than expected. In her office, Freya calmly sips tea. She is the daughter of the Dark Magic clan and the head of internal affairs. Backed by one of the clan's top 5 families, she holds immense influence, second only to the clan head. Her only son is Mayasak, who has now lost his position as the first-ranked candidate. She will do anything to make him the successor, and Chris is going to be her first sacrifice. She congratulates him on becoming a prince and says she worried about him when he was younger, but he grew up well. Chris sees through the flattery and thanks her for the compliment while telling her she doesn't need to flatter him. She then warns him not to raise his voice at her son because they are cousins and therefore blood relatives. She wants Chris, as the younger brother, to get along with Miyazaki. Chris realizes that she actually wants him to remain beneath her son. He sighs and asks why he should submit to someone unworthy of being his older brother. He then laughs and says that if she makes her son kneel and treat him as his elder, he might let Miyazaki live after becoming clan head. Freya releases her demonic energy. The pressure is so overwhelming that the surroundings crack and Chris begins bleeding. Chris realizes that she is strong enough to kill him whenever she wants. However, doing so would damage the dark magic clan's power and potentially escalate conflict between the families, so she cannot act freely. Instead, she says her son wants to duel Chris. As a prince, Chris would surely not reject the challenge. Chris immediately accepts. Freya angrily tells him that a servant will inform him of the date. She also says she will provide instructions because otherwise her son will easily defeat him. Chris gives her a stern look and takes his leave. He sighs, realizing that things aren't going according to plan. His lazy days are over, and Freya's scheme has already begun. The next day, Chris is taken to a rundown residence. The guide explains that this will be his new home and apologizes because the order came directly from the Countess. Chris is actually pleased. The isolated residence will make an excellent hideout and keep unnecessary attention away from him. He orders Mary to clean the place. Mary says she'll follow shortly before summoning several spirits. The guide is shocked by the ghosts, but Chris considers it normal and points out that, unlike Mary, these are only low-rank spirits. Mary declares that this is her and the young master's home and orders them to clean every corner without leaving a speck of dust. The spirits immediately get to work, causing objects to float around the house as the cleaning begins. The guide is amazed by their speed. Chris, however, wonders when he'll finally get some human attendance. The Dark Magic clan is a lineage of dark magic swordsmen, so a prince gains access to techniques connected to dark demonic energy. This support is normally provided for a prince's training. For Chris, however, things are deliberately going the opposite way. His swordsmanship tutor spends the lessons giving him incorrect guidance. The tutor confidently explains techniques that Chris knows don't even exist. The next day, the teacher continues giving him incomplete advice, so Chris simply pretends to understand. On the third day, his illusion magic instructor arrives nervously. She introduces herself as the instructor responsible for illusion magic. Freya had ordered all the instructors not to assist Chris's progress. The instructor tries to explain that this violates the prince's authority, but Freya cuts her off, reminding her that the family has supported her ever since she raised her adopted son. The instructor understands the threat and agrees to follow her orders. Back in the present, she finishes her lesson. Chris thanks her for the valuable teaching. She says she doesn't deserve his praise because he clearly knows that she has been teaching him nonsense. Chris smiles and says he understands her situation. He apologizes for dragging her into the conflict and tells her to relax because she did her best. Although she shortened the lesson, she still taught him the correct principles. Chris immediately demonstrates the illusion magic. Butterflies and fairies appear throughout the room. The instructor is stunned. The illusion should theoretically take 6 months to master, yet Chris copied it after seeing it only once. She realizes that even the Marchioness could never match his talent. She admits that Chris is impressive but says she has nothing more to teach him. Chris says that's fine. Then he notices her own demonstration. The butterflies she created are actually the manifestation of 5-star illusion magic. Chris is shocked. The instructor explains that she cannot properly control her power and says that at least she managed to accomplish something useful. Chris thanks her again for her valuable teaching. Elsewhere at the old master's residence, the old man says Chris has become arrogant after becoming a prince. Chris's aunt arrives and reminds him that Chris will soon face Miyazaki, and according to the clan head's orders, Chris won't receive any outside help. The old man says that without his guidance, Chris can never defeat Miyazaki because Chris is only 3-star. A vampire messenger then enters and announces that Chris has sent his grandfather a gift. Chris also sent a message saying that, as his grandson, he wanted the old man to try it. The old man eats the chocolates and scoffs that Chris is trying to gain his favor instead of training. He decides to teach the boy a lesson. Suddenly, his surroundings distort. The old man realizes Chris has used illusion magic. He finds himself on a battlefield from his youth, cutting down enemies one after another until the battle ends in victory for the Dark Magic clan. The scene shifts to the younger versions of everyone as they celebrate the glory of the Dark clan. A question hangs in the air. The old man looks toward his aunt, who immediately apologizes and admits that she never expected the situation to cause such displeasure. She hurriedly offers to return the item and speak with Chris, but another voice interrupts and firmly approves of whatever Chris has presented. Someone nearby expresses disbelief that the approval is genuine. A sharp laugh follows. The old man reflects on the sheer audacity of the brat. Chris had even wished for the prosperity of the Dark Magic clan. More importantly, the old man realizes that Chris can see through his illusions and even dispel them. He also notices a lingering energy attached to the gift. It is an extremely valuable treasure, the Medicine Clan's legendary vitality pill, a medicine capable of extending one's lifespan. The old man is stunned. He cannot understand where Chris obtained something that even Simon had failed to acquire. Redhead steps forward with a letter explaining that it was the correspondence Chris sent alongside the pill. In it, Chris apologizes if the gift caused any offense, explains that it contains one of his secret techniques, and asks the old man to accept it favorably. He also expresses his determination to live up to his grandfather's expectations before boldly promising to please him during his upcoming duel with Misak. The letter prompts the old man to burst into loud laughter. He confirms that Chris truly sent the gift as his grandson, and Redhead confirms it. The old man decides that, as his grandfather, he should return the favor by personally witnessing the decisive battle between Chris and Misak. Everyone falls silent at the weight of his decision, but the old man reaffirms that he wants to see how much his two grandsons have grown. Elsewhere, Freya is stunned when she hears that the old man will personally attend the competition. Her subordinate confirms that he wants to witness his grandson's achievements firsthand. Freya cannot understand why he would suddenly do something he has avoided his entire life. It is completely unprecedented, especially with even the necromancer dark magic family now showing interest. Freya is furious that Chris managed to attract the old man's attention. She curses the old man for obstructing the count and now interfering with Misak's affairs. Still, she decides it changes nothing. Her new goal is to crush Chris directly in front of the old man and prove that his judgment of talent is worthless. She swears to tear Chris apart with her own hands when the time comes. Meanwhile, Chris lets out a heavy sigh, exhausted by the ridiculous classes forced upon him. He simply doesn't have time to waste. He thinks back to the undead dragon that attacked his inauguration and recognizes it as an unmistakable warning. The people orchestrating the coming war are beginning to take a serious interest in him. That makes him confront his current weakness. There is no way he can overcome the absolute difference in power between himself and his enemies right now. He needs a weapon capable of holding them off until he grows stronger. Chris wonders if the mud sword is his only option. With his current abilities, maintaining his power already requires his full concentration. Using it in actual combat, where the physical strain would be much greater, would be extremely difficult. His goal is to reach the point where he can wield that power freely, just as Nordone once did. He hopes he can achieve that level of mastery before a cheerful voice interrupts him. Redhead comments on the rumors that the little young lord is being targeted from every direction. He points out that the competition is less than a month away and asks how Chris's solo training is progressing. Chris wonders how someone this frivolous could possibly be the top disciple of the necromancer dark magic family. He bluntly asks whether Redhead came only to mock him. Redhead denies it and reveals that he actually came to tell Chris that the old man was very pleased with his gift. Chris listens cautiously as Redhead warns him not to disappoint the old man. Chris firmly agrees. Redhead then points out that Chris's current teachers are barely doing anything and offers to personally teach him the blood technique. Chris immediately refuses. Redhead jokingly laments that he could have turned Chris into the ultimate blood fiend. Before leaving, he gives Chris one final warning. He may have a visitor soon. Chris is confused, but Redhead says he has taken enough of his time. Before departing, he asks Chris to give him an entertaining show at the upcoming competition. Chris is left alone, irritated by the bizarre interaction and everything Redhead said. A soft voice then calls him Young Lord. Mary reports that she investigated the first young lady urine as he requested. Chris asks what she discovered. Mary hesitates before admitting that she found almost nothing. Urine is the youngest daughter of Maris Langham and his former wife, and she was raised with great care. She has experienced no major incidents in her life. Chris rejects that conclusion. Her power is far too abnormal for her known star rank, and she possesses an unfamiliar demonic energy that appears to belong to a demon contract. There is also no obvious reason for her to have made such a contract, meaning she must be hiding something that even her own family doesn't know about. Mary then remembers one strange detail. Urine's personality underwent a drastic change. She was once infamous for being arrogant and cruel, but around 5 years ago she suddenly fell ill. After suffering from a severe fever, she became a completely different person. The rumor is that the illness caused her current warm personality. Chris scoffs at the explanation, wondering what kind of fever could completely change someone's personality. He concludes that urine is definitely suspicious and decides to keep a much closer eye on her. Chris then wonders how Mary uncovered information even his aunt knew little about. Mary gives a dark chuckle and admits that she interrogated the ghosts at the main estate. Chris is surprised that she became friendly with them. Mary corrects him, explaining that she caught them gossiping about Chris and decided to teach them a lesson. Chris notices how different her demeanor has become as she cheerfully explains that the ghosts now listen to her perfectly. He realizes what that means. If Mary can completely control those spirits, she is essentially a banshee queen, and one belonging to the dark magic family. Chris remembers that ghosts usually grow stronger according to the depth of their grudges. That makes him wonder what kind of terrifying past Mary must have to command them so completely. Mary notices his distraction and asks what he is thinking about. Chris quickly covers it up by thanking her for the information and praising her work. Mary becomes slightly flustered before formally declaring that she will do anything for her lord. A month passes. Chris stands ready for his scheduled duel with Misak, his sharp features and piercing red eyes carrying a confident smirk. Before the seated former family head, Chris acknowledges that the elder already knows what he intends to do. The confrontation begins as Misak points at Chris and orders him to prepare himself before the gathered spectators. Misak declares that Chris will prove himself to be the worst prince in front of the family head. Chris responds with cool disdain, telling him to shut up and calling him a mama's boy. He taunts Misak further, suggesting that he should admit how much he relies on his mother's help. Misak's face twists with rage as he reminds Chris that duels within the dark magic family are fights to the death. His left eye ignites with fiery orange energy. He vows that the only thing Chris will take home is his own severed head. Misak invokes destruction black magic and calls forth compressed explosion, preparing a devastating attack. Chris remains centered, white energy swirling around him as he takes a defensive stance. The magical pressure continues to build as Chris faces him with a crazed grin. Misak lunges forward, screaming that he will kill Chris as he thrusts a fiery mana orb toward him. A massive pillar of fire and light engulfs the center of the arena. As the smoke clears, Chris remains standing amid the lingering embers. He quickly realizes that Misak's elemental magic is infused with curse principles. Suddenly, glowing red chains erupt from the ground and bind Chris's arms against his sides. He looks up in surprise as he realizes he has fallen into a trap. Misak takes advantage of the opening and activates Execution P, engulfing Chris in a violent pillar of flame that roars toward the ceiling. Through the flames, Misak promises that Chris will regret surviving. Chris's silhouette appears to scream inside the fire as blinding white-orange heat consumes him. Misak bursts into maniacal laughter, calling Chris a reckless brat and declaring the match over. Then Chris's calm voice cuts through the celebration. He asks Misak if he is enjoying himself. Chris suddenly pulls back a fist covered in dark aura and slams it into Misak's face with enough force to shatter bone, sending shockwaves and debris across the arena. Standing over the stunned Misak, Chris calls him an idiot for falling for such a simple illusion, especially after learning that he is a 4-star mage. As Misak drops to his knees coughing blood, Chris identifies his weakness. Misak is focused entirely on destruction black magic while neglecting other areas under his mother's influence. Chris follows with a sweeping kick, noting that Misak's sycophantic teachers never taught him how to defend against close-range attacks. Misak is sent flying and crashes face-first onto the floor. Chris then taunts him, asking if his mother is crying while watching him fail. Desperate, Misak reaches for a bird-shaped magic tool. A spectator immediately protests that using such a tool violates the rules, but Chris isn't surprised. He expected Misak to have a cowardly backup plan. Misak activates the 5-star destruction black magic spell Requiem of Destruction. The high-ranking spectators watch in shock as Misak charges forward with an insane expression, screaming for Chris to die. A crushing vortex forms around him, tearing apart the arena floor. Chris stands his ground and focuses his will. He realizes that his inner strength has surpassed his physical limitations. Drawing the black sword, he channels a steady purple light through it and delivers a precise vertical slash. The blade cleaves directly through the 5-star spell, splitting the red vortex apart in a massive explosion that fills the hall. The explosion tears through the battlefield, sending stone and debris flying as the chaotic energy expands outward. A man cries out in terror as the blinding red energy approaches him, while Chris's aunt stares in disbelief at the sheer scale of the attack. As the dust settles, Chris assesses his black sword and realizes that it is fully capable of handling the strain of 5-star destructive demonic energy. Meanwhile, Misak lies on the ground, coughing violently as thick smoke and foam escape his mouth. Barely conscious, he asks how Chris managed to accomplish such a feat. Chris dismisses him as an absolute idiot and prepares another surge of purple energy for a finishing blow. Misak's eyes roll back as he finally loses consciousness, collapsing completely. A woman in a pink dress and a gray-skinned boy watch in stunned silence, both reaching the same conclusion. The boy standing victorious before them is a true genius. Misak remains motionless as the dust settles, leaving Chris standing alone in the cratered center of the grand hall, while the nobles stare in disbelief. From an elevated balcony, the family head observes the result and announces that he is leaving. His subordinate immediately follows, respectfully addressing him as the family head. The white-haired family head then turns toward the red-haired woman beside him and sternly tells the Marchioness that she needs to focus more carefully on Misak's education. The Marchioness trembles with barely contained fury. She realizes that if Chris continues growing at this rate, it may be better for him to be sent to lead the Destruction Mage family, rather than allowing her own candidate to compete against him. Chris looks toward the balcony as the family head calls his name. He immediately responds respectfully. The family head tells him that coming personally to witness the battle was worth his time. Chris puts on a bright, innocent smile and promises that he will continue accomplishing things worthy of his grandfather's pride. Later, Chris walks alone while reflecting on the battle. He recognizes that manifesting the black aura was only a temporary achievement. By focusing on its concept and sensation, he considers what it could eventually accomplish. At 5 stars, the aura should strengthen the true black sword, while also allowing him to project demonic energy over long distances and suppress enemies remotely. His thoughts are suddenly interrupted by an unfamiliar, chilling voice calling his name. Chris freezes. His relaxed posture immediately becomes rigid as his eyes widen. A cold sweat runs down his face when he realizes that his body refuses to obey him. The voice casually greets him and says how long he has wanted to meet him. The man introduces himself as Sarad, Chris's eldest brother. The name sends a shock through Chris's mind. He remembers the rumors surrounding the Dark Mage family's mad prince, a lunatic whose horrifying history has always remained shrouded in mystery. This prince disappeared shortly before the Great War began. Chris also remembers that Sarad is Simon's direct disciple and the ruthless leader of the Blood Shadow Demon Corps. Sarad casually leaps from the balcony and lands in front of Chris. Chris cannot understand why such a monstrous figure has appeared now. Seeing his younger brother frozen in place, Sarad tilts his head and innocently asks why Chris is so stiff when this is their first meeting. His tone then shifts into mocking pity as he brings up Chris's familiar nickname and laments how unfortunate the situation is. He says that if Chris had properly learned swordsmanship or magic, he could have been much more entertaining than their other sibling, Evan. Sarad's angelic expression suddenly disappears. His face twists into a grotesque, blood-covered grin as he gleefully says that if Chris were stronger, he could have enjoyed slowly cutting off his limbs. Every instinct in Chris's body screams danger from the moment he sees his brother. A horrifying image flashes through his mind. A beastkin with fox ears, blood pouring from his mouth, another victim of Sarad's cruelty. Chris's fear turns into a single desperate resolve. No matter what it takes, he must kill Sarad. Fighting through the paralyzing fear, Chris forces his dark aura to ignite. His eyes glow white with determination as he vows to himself that he will do whatever it takes to prevent the tragedy of his past from happening again. Sarad watches silently as dark purple aura erupts around Chris's hands, noticing his sudden resistance. Unfazed, Sarad's calm smile returns as he lightly chides Chris for developing such murderous intent toward his own brother. He steps forward, grabs Chris by the collar and pulls him close, asking if he isn't being too aggressive. His playful tone immediately disappears as his eyes glow with lethal intent. He warns Chris that if he tries to attack, he will kill him on the spot. Chris's eye twitches as he stares back, fully aware that the threat is genuine. He suppresses his dark energy. Holding him effortlessly, Sarad admits that the recent rumors surrounding the estate had given him high expectations for his youngest brother. However, he bluntly tells Chris that he is unimpressive and has fallen far below those expectations. Chris refuses to back down, saying that if Sarad sees him that way, then his eyes must be completely broken. He calls Sarad trash and says the world would be better off without him, then promises that one day he will be the one to cut off his head. Sarad stares at him in silence before suddenly bursting into laughter. Amused by Chris's audacity, he announces that he has decided not to kill him. He releases Chris and explains that despite his brave words, Chris is still far too weak to interest him. Biting his thumb, Sarad challenges him to become stronger and entertain him properly. He warns Chris to hurry. With a lightning-fast movement, Sarad flicks Chris directly in the forehead. The impact leaves a single drop of blood running down his skin. Sarad's voice turns cold as he reminds Chris that he has very little patience before walking away. Chris remains frozen on the balcony, unable to move as Sarad disappears into the courtyard. Once the pressure vanishes, Chris slams his fist into a stone pillar and clutches his bleeding forehead in frustration. He curses his helplessness, knowing that he couldn't even move a finger in front of the man who would eventually slaughter his comrades. As he calms himself, Chris notices that there is no lingering demonic residue around him. He realizes that Sarad has not yet formed his catastrophic contract with a demon. That gives Chris hope. Based on the timeline, he still has exactly 1 year to change fate. As Sarad walks away, massive, nightmarish silhouettes of jagged, screaming demons emerge from his dark aura. Chris watches his brother's retreating figure and makes his objective clear. Before that year is over, he must kill Sarad. Chris remains on the ornate stone balcony, thinking about the future. Once Sarad forms his pact with a demon and receives the ghoul's blessing, stopping his destruction will become nearly impossible. Chris knows he is currently too weak and needs powerful artifacts to increase his strength. He specifically remembers the artifact Misak used during their duel. Before he can think further, a servant addresses him as young master and informs him that Freya has summoned him to her chambers. Chris simply orders him to lead the way. When Chris arrives, Freya sits silently with a teacup in her hands. Her grip is tense and her body trembles slightly. Chris immediately realizes that she is suppressing an intense, murderous intent directed at him. Freya keeps her eyes closed and asks whether Chris understands what the young master's meeting entails. Chris calmly explains that it is a formal gathering where newly appointed young masters and ladies from the 3 great families of the Southern Dark Magic Empire gather and socialize. But he knows that socializing is only a euphemism. In reality, the gathering is an arena where young elites clash to establish their superiority. Freya opens her eyes and tells him that the Dark Magic family will host the event this year. It will take place on the dangerous 7th floor of the underground garden. Chris is genuinely surprised by the location before asking who else will attend. Freya lists the participants: Chris, Jupion, Marissa from the Poison Dark Magic family, and finally Kashmir of the Destruction Dark Magic family. Chris immediately recognizes Kashmir. In the future, he will be known as the Resistor, a 7-star demonic human and a high-ranking member of the resistance against the Demon King of Evil Blood. Chris also remembers that Kashmir was eventually cast out by his own family. He suddenly realizes what this meeting really is. This is likely the event that will trigger Kashmir's permanent exile. Looking at the participants, Chris sees the pattern clearly. None of them are favored successors. They are all outsiders, problem children, or unwanted members of their respective families. Someone intends to eliminate them all at once. Despite recognizing the deadly trap, Chris keeps his expression neutral and simply tells Freya that he will prepare. Freya watches him suspiciously, wondering whether he has already seen through the entire scheme. For now, she dismisses him with a wave of her feather quill. Chris stops before leaving and says he has one final request. He complains that he is still exhausted from nearly beating Misak to death and demands a substantial amount of seed money so he can live comfortably and recover before entering the dangerous meeting. The following day, a formal letter arrives at the Rudolph Merchant Group. It is addressed to the mysterious cloaked informant. The letter politely asks about her well-being and informs her that the Rudolph Merchant Group has prepared a special gift they believe will suit her tastes. She is formally invited to visit their establishment on the scheduled date. After a blank transition, Chris arrives at the merchant's shop and considers the timing perfect. The upcoming death trap in the underground garden will require expensive preparations, but it also presents a rare opportunity to obtain a powerful artifact he normally wouldn't be able to reach until much later. He enters through an open doorway, casually raising a hand to ask why he was summoned, only to freeze when he sees the cloaked informant sitting on an ornate sofa with a teacup in hand. The silver-haired woman is equally startled and asks what he is doing there. Chris quickly recovers and explains that this is his usual shop, so he needs no reason to be there. From behind him, the merchant steps closer with a sly grin before formally addressing him as young Master Chris. Chris gives her an irritated look and sarcastically asks whether the gift she prepared was simply an excuse to arrange this awkward meeting. She explains that since they operate exclusively for a single client, bringing them together was necessary to clarify their business arrangement. Chris realizes the situation works in his favor and orders both women to sit down so they can talk. The cloaked informant hesitates, concerned about discussing sensitive matters openly, but Chris assures her that the merchant is just as trustworthy as she is. Chris explains that the political situation surrounding the Evil King Castle has deteriorated severely. People continue disappearing while several noble families have completely cut off communication with the outside world. He suspects a massive conspiracy but admits that infiltrating those isolated and heavily guarded territories would be nearly impossible. The merchant suddenly becomes serious. Adjusting her glasses, she points out that outsiders cannot easily access the Evil King Castle, yet the informant seems to possess unusually detailed knowledge of the territory. After a tense pause, the informant nervously explains that her family simply has deep historical connections there. The merchant studies her closely before concluding that the explanation doesn't appear to be a lie. She then examines the coded documents and ledgers spread across the table and compares them with the available intelligence. Eventually, she agrees with Chris's assessment. If everything they've gathered is accurate, the strange isolationist behavior finally makes sense. The isolated factions may genuinely be preparing to wage war against the Union. She adds that suspicious rumors have recently spread throughout the neutral zones bordering the Union. Security at every gate leading into the Union has been drastically increased, while major trade routes have been blockaded without warning. The merchant believes such coordinated restrictions could only indicate direct intervention by the Holy Kingdom. However, without reliable contacts within the Union, she cannot determine who issued the lockdown or when exactly it began. Chris takes responsibility for investigating the Union's activities himself. The merchant agrees to use her merchant network to determine who ordered the lockdown and establish its exact timeline. Chris looks exasperated when she asks whether he is trying to squeeze another favor out of her. He firmly promises that he will pay up front this time. The merchant remains suspicious, wondering whether Chris will simply pull another stunt and disappear afterward. Chris repeats that he will pay. The merchant eventually accepts, saying that his plan is worth investing in as long as money is involved. Chris asks why she would blindly trust such a supposedly worthless young master. She simply says she has a good feeling about him. Chris then reveals his real objective, the treasure garden, an underground vault containing relics belonging exclusively to the Destruction Dark Magic family. He intends to raid it. The merchant immediately becomes interested and offers her group's investment, pretending that her motivation is concern for the Empire's well-being. Chris refuses to accept free help and instead asks for a specific artifact, Lenin's scissors. The enormous blue rune-covered scissors appear in his imagination, bound by thorn-covered chains. Chris knows them as an artifact whose craftsmanship rivals ancient relics. The merchant freezes when she hears the name. She reminds him that the artifact is worth 10 million lupe. Chris calmly points out that she already owns it. The merchant is horrified by his impossible knowledge. Chris explains that she bragged about the artifact in his past life and asks to borrow it temporarily. Since she currently has no buyer for it, there should be no problem. The merchant demands an ironclad guarantee and an equally valuable replacement. Chris tells her to stop being so dramatic and promises to return something even better. Later, Chris grips the heavy brass doors and opens them, stepping into the sunlight with a rod crackling with purple magic. He has finally reached 5 stars. Dark, demonic energy whips around his body as he focuses on his progress. He has refined his illusion and dark magic, customized his demonic energy, and pushed his light core to the level of an aura blade. With the underground garden heist approaching, his preparations are finally complete. A knock interrupts his thoughts. Someone asks if he is ready. Chris responds, and Simon appears wearing an elegant suit. The red-haired vampire formally introduces himself as Chris's escort before bowing with a gloved hand over his chest. Soon after, a black carriage trimmed in gold travels along a forest road. Inside the heavily bouncing carriage, Chris sits with his arms crossed, clearly irritated by the rough ride. Simon cheerfully claims that the rough journey builds endurance before bluntly telling Chris to stop complaining. Chris mentally groans about how many strange people exist in the Empire, while Simon leans closer and admits he is excited to finally escort him because he finds Chris interesting. Chris's expression darkens as he remembers that vampires are naturally cruel. Simon is a pure-blood vampire, and the direct elder brother of Idrin, the feared demon king of evil blood. Looking out the window, Simon offers to answer any questions that aren't secret, so Chris immediately asks about Countess Idrin. Amused, Simon asks if Chris is interested in her. He explains that Idrin is one of the 5 rising stars, a prestigious title given to individuals whose strength far exceeds what is expected for their age. Chris calmly states that his ultimate goal is to defeat her. Simon describes Idrin as cute, pretty, kind-hearted, and lovely, which leaves Chris baffled. He questions how the blood princess who lives in a castle surrounded by constant slaughter could possibly be so gentle. Simon dismisses his concerns, saying her environment is responsible for her frightening reputation, and even mentioning that she sends him affectionate letters. Chris imagines those letters being disguised death threats, while Simon jokes that he and Idrin would make a great couple and offers to arrange a date. Chris immediately rejects the idea and orders Simon to stop. As he stares out the window, he wonders whether Jupion and Idrin have changed because of demon contracts, or if Idrin is simply hiding a violent nature. A bloody vision flashes through his mind of Simon standing over a decapitated demon. Chris wonders if that hidden brutality is connected to Simon's horrific death in the future, and realizes there is something important he still doesn't understand. Simon suddenly leans into his face and asks what Chris is mumbling about. Chris jerks backward in surprise and curses the jump scare, while Simon laughs and calls him a scaredy cat. The carriage continues toward a dark Gothic castle beneath storm-covered mountains. Meanwhile, Kashmir sits beside his sick mother, gently holding her hand and begging her to hold on. The door suddenly opens, and a gray-haired man storms inside. Kashmir calls him brother, only to be slapped across the face. The man, Schward Debasan, the first young master of the Destruction Dark Magic family, angrily asks who gave Kashmir permission to call him that. Schward reveals that he has a task for Kashmir at the upcoming young masters meeting. He holds up a glowing orange pendant and explains that Kashmir has been chosen as the key to the underground garden. Once the meeting begins, Kashmir must use the pendant to teleport everyone inside. Kashmir is horrified because the plan will kill everyone attending, but Schward silences him and threatens to cut off every source of medicine he has found for their mother if he refuses. With no other choice, Kashmir agrees, knowing that he is expected to die alongside everyone else. Back in the present, Chris arrives in a grand white hallway and remarks on its flashy appearance. The place brings back memories of his past life, when he once came here with his comrades to obtain a weapon against the demon king of evil blood. He remembers a powerful artifact he obtained there, and wonders whether he can acquire it again. Marissa arrives and politely greets someone nearby. Chris gives her a lazy greeting while privately admitting that he isn't happy to see her. Marissa immediately calls him out for his rudeness, but Chris remains unfazed. Kashmir then enters the hall wearing a dark uniform and cloak. He formally greets everyone before introducing himself as a young master who only recently gained his position. Chris remembers Kashmir's values of trust and honor and decides to maintain a good relationship with him. He introduces himself as Christian Van Baron Khazard and respectfully bows. Marissa watches in irritation, wondering why Chris never speaks to her that politely, while Chris evaluates whether Kashmir is truly as capable as his reputation suggests. Chris praises Kashmir's record against the Holy Empire, privately recognizing that flattery is already working. He recalls the Destruction family's rivalry with the Holy Empire and compares it to his own family's conflict with the Gold Cross. Kashmir humbly dismisses his achievements as luck, but Chris continues praising him and calls his path inspiring for someone from a collateral branch like himself. Kashmir becomes overwhelmed and says he could never compare himself to a true young master like Chris. Chris drops the formal act and tells him that among demonic humans, birth status means nothing. Only power and merit matter. The words remind Kashmir of Schward insulting him for being impure and telling him he would never be accepted. Chris's words ease that old wound, and Kashmir quietly thanks him. Chris then suggests that they treat each other like brothers. Kashmir hesitates, but Chris points out that the entire meeting exists to establish relationships between the rising young masters. When Kashmir still hesitates, Chris offers a bet. Whoever reaches the 7th floor first gets to call the other big brother. He teasingly asks whether Kashmir is afraid of losing. The provocation works. Kashmir immediately accepts. Chris grins and asks if they should start now before sprinting toward the dark entrance. Kashmir chases after him, shouting that Chris is going too fast. Left behind, Marissa becomes furious. Small red spirits flare around her as she complains that Chris probably wanted to become siblings with her too and wonders why he always speaks to her so casually. Jupion quietly wonders whether Chris expects her to be formal as well, then dismisses the thought. Marissa notices Jupion watching Chris and asks if she intends to fight him over some romantic interest. She declares that she will be the one to crush Chris and tells Jupion to give up. Jupion says nothing. Instead, dark purple aura begins radiating from her body as wind whips around her. Marissa steps back in surprise, realizing Jupion has no intention of backing down. She accepts the challenge, purple lightning crackling around her arm as she prepares to fight. The two unleash their power, and their clash begins. Chris reaches the 7th floor first, with Kashmir arriving moments later, exhausted from the journey. Kashmir admits he never expected the underground garden to contain so many traps. After wiping the sweat from his face, Chris calls it a good match and suggests they consider it a draw. Kashmir refuses, insisting that it is his defeat because Chris may have saved his life. Chris internally recalls that even the lower floors contain deadly traps. Since he remembers every trap from his previous life, he deliberately lured Kashmir into one. He knows that making someone owe him a favor will give him something to repay later. Kashmir then declares that from now on he will treat Chris as his older brother. Chris stops him, explaining with a smile that the bet was never serious. He only made it to get closer to Kashmir and suggests that they become friends instead. Kashmir is stunned. To him, having a friend is something he never imagined he could have. Yet he remembers the mission awaiting him. Once the young master's meeting begins, he must use the teleportation artifact at the right moment and send everyone to their deaths. Kashmir lowers his head and apologizes, saying he appreciates Chris's words but doesn't have the qualifications to be his friend. Chris is confused by the strange response and wonders what Kashmir means by qualifications. Before he can ask, loud footsteps approach. Chris turns and realizes that Jupion and Marissa have finally arrived. Marissa proudly declares that she won and demands to be called Chris's older sister. Jupion immediately argues that she was the actual winner and accuses Marissa of lying. Chris looks at the two battered girls in irritation, wondering how they managed to fight so hard without even using an artifact. He asks why they're so injured when they should have triggered all the traps already, leaving nothing behind. Jupion tells him to mind his own business, while Marissa loudly agrees that it has nothing to do with him. Chris smiles and jokes that children supposedly grow closer through fighting, but their personalities are both terrible. The two girls immediately grab Chris by the hair. Chris protests as they pull from opposite sides, asking them to let go first. Watching the scene, Kashmir realizes that the three of them must actually be very close friends. The girls continue pulling Chris's hair while angrily insisting that they're not wrong and threatening to pull it all out. He briefly wonders whether, if he had become Chris's friend, he could have joked around with them like this too, but he quickly suppresses the thought. Kashmir takes out the key Sword gave him and reminds himself that everyone here is going to die. Activating it should instantly transport them to the 17th floor, where only someone at least as strong as a 6-star demonic human can survive. Apologizing internally to Christian, Kashmir accepts that he has no choice but to follow his brother's orders. Chris notices the key in Kashmir's hand. He simply flicks his finger, causing the key to glow before activating on its own. A red magical circle suddenly forms above them. Jupion and Marissa stare upward in shock, while Kashmir panics, wondering whether the key has been activated from outside and whether Sword is responsible. A brilliant pillar of red light descends from the circle. Chris immediately orders everyone to gather their demonic energy. The two girls comply, but Chris suddenly turns toward them and releases an energy strike that sends all three of them flying outside the magic circle. Jupion is stunned and demands to know what he is doing. Chris then walks toward the pillar of light. Both girls stare in disbelief as he approaches it, realizing what he intends to do. Before entering, Chris briefly turns toward them. The girls desperately shout his name, but Chris steps into the light. In an instant, both Chris and the portal disappear. Marissa stares in disbelief, wondering if Christian is dead. Jupion immediately draws her dagger and presses it against Kashmir's neck. Marissa questions what she is doing, but Jupion accuses Kashmir's family of orchestrating the incident since the underground garden is under their jurisdiction. She demands the truth, threatening to snap his neck if he refuses to speak. Marissa reinforces the threat, telling him to confess quickly. Kashmir lowers his head and admits that it is all his fault. Jupion presses the dagger closer and demands an explanation. Kashmir reveals that Sword ordered him to teleport everyone to the 17th floor in exchange for medicine for his sick mother. Jupion points out that regardless of who ordered it, Kashmir was the one who intended to send them there. Kashmir desperately insists that he never activated the key himself. He admits that he was going to do it, but swears that the key activated on its own. Jupion remains suspicious but realizes Kashmir knows how to reach the 17th floor. She orders him to use the key and teleport them there as well. Kashmir refuses, warning that the underground garden becomes more dangerous with every higher floor. Even if they go after Chris, he may already be... Marissa, looking deeply troubled, refuses to believe that Christian could already be dead. Jupion keeps her dagger pressed against Kashmir's neck, grabs his robe with her other hand, and angrily challenges him for deciding that Christian is already dead. She demands to know whether he is truly that certain. Marissa furiously agrees, insisting there is no way Christian could have gone down so easily, and claiming he has probably already found a way to escape. Kashmir lowers his head, ashamed of himself. He remembers Chris offering to become friends rather than brothers, and realizes that he cannot allow the first person to ever acknowledge him to die because of his actions. He then remembers his mother's advice to grow into a strong, proud man. Realizing she would never want him to abandon Chris, Kashmir removes Jupion's hand from his robe and declares that he will go with them, asking for a chance to atone for his sins. Suddenly, a voice comes from the dark corridor, warning that sending only the three of them would be unwise. Countless bats swarm toward them, forcing everyone to shield their faces. The bats then merge together and transform into the red-haired deputy butler. He explains that something felt wrong, so he returned and found the situation in chaos. Jupion welcomes his arrival and asks him to accompany them in finding Christian. The butler warns that even the 17th floor is dangerous enough to be a serious challenge for him. Jupion insists they cannot simply leave Christian to die. The butler privately admits that the risk-to-reward ratio is terrible, but life would be boring without the little young master. Accepting that, he agrees to go. Kashmir takes out the key, which begins glowing again. A red magic circle forms above them, and the three enter the portal with the butler. Before they depart, the butler hopes Christian has not encountered the 17th floor boss, warning that if he has crossed paths with the Spider Queen Tarantula, They are all in serious danger. Meanwhile, Chris continues traveling through the portal, falling through a strange space surrounded by countless threads of energy. He realizes he never expected Kashmir to be the one holding the key, and admits that it made things much easier, though he feels slightly guilty for activating it without permission. Chris identifies the space around him as subspace, essentially a bridge between dimensions. Spatial movement works by tearing through space to enter subspace, then breaking through the other side to reach the destination. However, subspace is an endlessly chaotic realm filled with infinite variables, making it nearly impossible for even great mages to calculate exact coordinates. Still falling through subspace, Chris takes out the magical equipment and recalls that Lenin's scissors are a cheat item, capable of ignoring spatial variables and tearing open a direct path. He waits for the right moment, then raises the scissors and commands them to activate. The scissors rip open a hole in subspace. Chris immediately dives through it and emerges from the portal, landing safely on the ground. Looking around, he realizes that he has reached the 27th floor of the underground garden, a place reserved for 9-star demon king-class demonic humans. After walking for a moment, Chris wonders where his target is. Suddenly, an overwhelming dark energy engulfs the area. The pressure forces him to his knees as his entire soul seems to scream in terror. Realizing he must escape quickly, Chris launches himself into the air and activates his demonic form. A gigantic monster appears before him, the Queen Tarantula. She finds it curious that a mere mortal possesses the status of a half-demon, but declares that before the sovereign of Gehenna's fourth realm, Chris is nothing more than an insignificant speck. Chris internally recalls that, excluding the archdemons of the first through third realms who govern concepts such as death and destruction, beings of the fourth realm are among the highest-ranking demons. Their existence is on a completely different level from Mafina of the seventh realm, and even with most of her power sealed, Queen Tarantula could still wipe an entire nation off the map with ease. The Queen Tarantula then asks Chris for his name, amused that he has provided some entertainment during her tedious existence. Chris clenches his fist and dismisses her as foolish. When she questions him, Chris confidently claims that he is an incarnation of a seat within Gehenna's fourth realm, just like her. He asks whether being sealed has damaged her perception so badly that she cannot even recognize an equal. The Queen Tarantula is confused and refuses to believe him. Chris argues that without possessing great authority, there is no way a mortal body could take on the status of a half-demon. Internally, Chris knows this is only a bluff. The Queen Tarantula's perception is currently sealed, preventing her from seeing his true essence, giving him a chance to deceive her. He then calls her by a title that should be known only to demons and certain constellations, Star Slayer. The Queen Tarantula immediately reacts in shock, demanding to know how Chris knows her title. Chris recalls that he learned the title directly from her during his previous life, when he and his comrades came here and eventually killed her. He remembers her furious final words, accusing him of being the exiled one who reduced her to that state, and promising to cast him into the deepest abyss one day. Back in the present, Queen Tarantula's confusion turns to rage. She rejects Chris's claim, insisting that regardless of his half-demon status, he is still merely a mortal. She declares that an insignificant insect like him could never know her true identity, and accuses him of lying to her face. Enraged, the Queen Tarantula declares that she will kill him. Chris responds confidently, claiming that his half-demon status is merely a disguise meant to evade the eyes of the loathsome constellations. He challenges the Queen Tarantula to do her worst if she would rather remain ignorant of why he came. Meanwhile, Chris reaches toward the scissors inside his bag, knowing that if things go wrong, Lenin's scissors will be his means of escape. The Queen Tarantula decides to humor his claims for the moment, warning that if she discovers he is lying, she will tear out his tongue. She then demands to know why he has come. Chris proposes a wager. If she wins, he will break her seal. The Queen Tarantula is stunned that he would dare defy the will of the three realms of dark heaven. Chris calmly confirms that he would. She laughs at the absurdity of his claim, insisting such a thing is impossible. Chris tells her that it is her choice and that she has nothing to lose. Curious, the Queen Tarantula asks what Chris wants if he wins. Chris points directly at her and gives his condition: she must choose to self-destruct. The Queen Tarantula is bewildered that a mere speck would demand such a thing. Chris calmly argues that she has nothing to lose because death is not permanent for her. Chris internally recalls the true nature of the underground garden. It was constructed as a training ground, and the bosses residing on each floor are only clones of their original entities. When a visitor kills one, it disappears temporarily before eventually resetting. That means the bosses are trapped in an endless cycle of death and resurrection, repeatedly suffering without even understanding their true nature. Chris only learned this because he visited the garden with his comrades in his previous life, where they were forced to kill the same bosses repeatedly. The Queen Tarantula rejects the idea of resurrection as nonsense. Chris realizes there is no reason to argue, and instead questions why she would willingly remain trapped in this place forever. He reminds her that she is supposed to be the great Star Slayer, subtly provoking her pride. The Queen Tarantula finally accepts the wager. Chris then proposes the first condition. If she can reveal his true name, she wins. Confident in her ability, the Queen Tarantula assumes that if Chris truly holds a seat in the fourth realm, he must be someone she knows. She gives her first answer, Nibirius. Chris calmly tells her that she is wrong. The Queen Tarantula immediately gives another name, Sabnok. Chris calmly tells the Queen Tarantula that Sabnok is also incorrect. She grows increasingly frustrated and continues guessing, first Larage, then Stolas, Furkas, and finally Bale. Chris rejects every answer. Furious, the Queen Tarantula realizes that there should be no new demon ascending to a seat in the fourth realm. She concludes that Chris has been deceiving her and angrily attacks. Her massive fist crashes into the ground, shattering the stone and sending the impact toward Chris. He leaps backward to evade it, but is still overwhelmed by the force. Chris calmly insists that he never tricked her. The Queen Tarantula angrily claims that she has already named every demon in the fourth realm. Chris smiles and asks if she is certain, pointing out that there is still one name she has not mentioned. The Queen Tarantula suddenly realizes what he means. Before she can finish, Chris removes the artifact pinned to his robe and throws away its covering. He asks if she finally understands what she missed, and tells her to blame her own ignorance. Raising the artifact, Chris reveals the truth. His true name is Astaroth, making him the true counterpart of the entity she knows as the Star Slayer. The Queen Tarantula refuses to believe it, insisting that she is not a fake. Before she can finish, her body suddenly crumbles into dark ash and disappears. Chris raises his hand to shield himself from the dust. Once it settles, he looks at the artifact and admits that the situation would have been disastrous without the constellation's badge. Chris recalls that he stole the sacred relic during his previous artifact hunt. Its power allows him to disguise and conceal himself so completely that it can even imitate another person's soul. If the Queen Tarantula had been the original entity rather than a clone, she would have seen through the deception immediately. A notification appears. You have achieved the first clear of the 27th floor. Chris realizes that his plan worked. Another notification follows, announcing that his name, achievements, and title will be recorded in the Underground Garden Hall of Fame. Achievement: first to conquer the 27th floor title, the one who mocked a demon. Chris looks at the title and remarks that it is a little grand. A final notification announces that he has received a bonus for achieving the first clear using only his silver tongue. A box of artifacts suddenly appears high above him and crashes violently into the ground, shattering the stone. Chris jumps back and wonders if the artifact box is actually trying to kill him. After the dust settles, he opens the box and discovers a ring. Chris immediately recognizes it as the Vampiric Ring, a growth-type artifact capable of gradually amplifying its wearer's power by up to 30%. It was once the prized possession of the 9-star Great Mage, Lana. After putting on the ring, Chris realizes that he finally has a genuine trump card. Meanwhile, on another floor of the dungeon, the group is surrounded by spiders attacking from every direction. Kashmir fights them off with his spear while warning the others. Jupion creates several magical daggers and launches them at the approaching spiders, killing them instantly. As she focuses on the spiders below, more crawl across the ceiling above her. Marissa notices them just in time and throws explosive spell bottles toward the ceiling, destroying the spiders before they can attack. The two girls stand back to back, complaining about the noise, and Marissa jokingly reminding Jupion that she should at least be grateful for the help. More spiders continue pouring in. Watching the Spider Queen, the red-haired butler realizes their situation is far worse than expected. Forget finding Chris. They may all be slaughtered first. The Spider Queen roars and summons another swarm. The butler casually raises a finger, killing the creatures instantly. He considers using blood sacrifice, a forbidden spell that uses blood to amplify his power. With it, he believes he could defeat the boss and handle the remaining spiders easily. However, killing the others would make Chris his enemy, which would complicate his duty to eventually introduce him to Idrine. Instead, the butler orders Jupion and Marissa to hold off the spiders coming from behind while he opens a path for Kashmir. He tells Kashmir that merely doing his best is not enough, and that he must make the attack succeed. The butler lifts his sleeve and bites into his wrist, causing his blood to rise into the air. As the Spider Queen summons another wave of spiders, he sends strands of blood through them, killing the creatures instantly. With the opening created, Kashmir activates Rusted Horn and charges toward the Spider Queen with his spear. The spear strikes her chest but immediately shatters. Kashmir is stunned by the result, but before he can react, the Spider Queen kicks him in the abdomen, sending him crashing into a wall. Jupion and Marissa immediately call out in alarm while the butler clicks his tongue in frustration. The Spider Queen unleashes another roar, sending a shockwave throughout the room before covering the entire area in webbing. The butler recognizes her mental technique, infinite despair, threads of silk capable of pulverizing anything they touch. Realizing the others will not last much longer, he considers sacrificing Kashmir first. Before he can act, however, a brilliant violet slash tears through the webbing. The Spider Queen screeches as the severed strands fall apart. Chris lands on the ground in front of her, violet energy still lingering around him. Jupion and Marissa stare at him in complete disbelief, barely able to process that the young master has suddenly appeared before them. Jupion stares at Chris in disbelief, barely able to believe he is actually standing before them. Chris immediately questions why they came all this way, pointing out that if they had simply stayed behind, he would have found his own way back. Jupion angrily reminds him that they came because they were worried about him. The red-haired butler claps and joins in, joking that Chris clearly still has not learned how to properly thank people. Chris gives them an awkward apology, admitting that he believed leaving alone had been the best decision at the time. Privately, he decides it is better to keep his trip to the 27th floor a secret, along with the fact that the higher floors allow him to observe everything happening below like a status board. Kashmir bows apologetically, taking responsibility for what happened. Chris stops him and says he will hear the details later. For now, their priority is simply surviving. The Spider Queen roars again. The butler asks whether Chris has a plan, explaining that their current strength is not enough to break through the cocoon. Even though it is made of ordinary spider silk, the strands are exceptionally durable due to the Spider Queen's 6-star power. He can escape using his blood thrall technique, but using anything beyond that would require a sacrifice. Chris takes responsibility for breaking through the cocoon and tells the others to cover him, warning that the Spider Queen will focus her attacks on him once the opening appears. Jupion agrees. Chris equips his magical sword and advances toward the cocoon. He considers how quickly he is being forced to use his full power, even if his demonic energy only reaches around the mid-5-star level. Having 2 cores gives him another advantage. He channels both cores into the weapon, transforming it into a black sword. The butler watches in shock, stunned that Chris can perform such a transformation and questioning what kind of person the young master truly is. Chris swings the transformed sword and tears through the cocoon. The Spider Queen immediately roars and summons another wave of spiderlings. Marissa and Jupion begin eliminating them with explosive spell bottles and magical daggers while Chris charges toward the Spider Queen. He leaps into the air and brings his sword down with tremendous force, but the Spider Queen forms a web barrier that completely blocks the attack. Chris becomes frustrated when even repeated sword strikes fail to break through. As the Spider Queen prepares to counterattack, the butler bites his wrist and sends strands of blood toward the barrier. The blood gradually weakens and shatters the webbing. Chris continues attacking, pushing his strength further and waiting for just a little more of the barrier to break. Kashmir suddenly calls out and throws his energy spear at the weakened web. The spear crashes through the barrier, completely destroying it. Chris immediately takes advantage of the opening and charges forward, delivering a devastating sword strike that severs the Spider Queen's head. Her massive body collapses alongside the severed head. Jupion and Marissa finally breathe a sigh of relief. Chris places his foot on the Spider Queen's head, calmly confirming that he had said he would handle the situation. Watching him with an amused smile, the red-haired butler acknowledges that Chris never fails to exceed expectations and wonders what expression the patriarch would have if he could witness this. Several notifications appear, confirming that the 17th floor has been cleared, though it is not a first clear and therefore provides no standard rewards. However, Chris's achievement is recognized as extraordinary, noting that he has surpassed 8 floors at once and awarding him the title, the one who shattered a rock with an egg. Chris stares at the notification in confusion. Another message appears, explaining that the secret realm shares the achievements of challengers who accomplished 2 impossible miracles, and that Chris's achievement is now being transmitted to Glass Lake. Everyone is confused by the announcement. The red-haired butler wonders aloud what Glass Lake is. Chris, however, immediately becomes irritated, wondering why the name Glass Lake has suddenly appeared here.